I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got love, peace, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got joy and pain and joy inside my DNA.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, Fanfic Fantasy. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today, we're kicking off the final part of our series, What If Issei Had Level Up System with multiple boosted gears and had Harem? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is SeerKing from ff.net. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Chapter 18, Rainer's Guild of Dungeoneering. That night, outside of the ruins of the Purifier Base, Kyo Town, Ria's Gremory let out a breath through clenched teeth as she stood at the edge of a rooftop, carefully watching as devils under her brother's command worked and crawled through the rubble that they had once believed to be nothing more than a barely afloat plumbing and cleaning company. Do you suspect our red-armored friend might be responsible for this latest complication, Ria's Sona asked as she walked up to stand beside her. Both of their peerages were working together to handle the perimeter watch, which basically amounted to little more than busy work considering the number of barriers the response team that the two heiresses have learned was officially named the Riatan and Sotan Rapid Rescue Squad had put up when they'd arrived. The humans in the surrounding buildings had already had their memories modified and a cover-up story was already being disseminated. Now all that was left was shifting through the rubble to find any remaining bodies and destroy any other evidence of supernatural involvement. There's no proof just yet, but I honestly can't think of anyone else nearby with the ability to inflict this kind of destruction. The crimson-haired ruined princess replied dryly. I'm also fairly sure that our new friend wouldn't cause something like this without some very good reasoning behind it. Indeed, the Citri heiress acquiesced with a grimace. Still, some of the things the teams are already reporting in Ria's, there had to be at least 100 humans in that building. Most seem to have died in the explosion, but a significant number of what our people believe to have been security staff were all killed a short time before the explosion ruptured the building from below. More so, they were all killed via some form of bladed weapon, while their firearms were rendered useless. The gunpowder had been rendered into sludge via some form of transmutation. And we're sure that this place was a purifier front, Ria's asked softly, a bit unnerved at the idea. With their primary weapons rendered useless, normal humans would have been little more than chaff before a scythe to a supernatural combatant on the level of their red-armored acquaintance. Everything we've found so far is pointing to it, Sona offered grimly, her eyes hardening slightly. The security staff were all equipped with advanced, military-grade body armor and weaponry. And that's not even getting started on the kind of technological wreckage our people are reporting on the lower levels. Even the name of the company Pure Drain seems mockingly obvious in hindsight. That still begs the question of what they were doing here and how they stayed hidden from us for so long. Ria shook her head. There are simply too many unknowns about this entire affair, and I don't like it, she offered, a troubled look on her face. With this, and the other incidents that have been springing up recently that we haven't been able to deal with directly, I've started to hear whispers that we're going to be recalled to the underworld to explain ourselves. What? Sona snapped, turning to her friend in a mix of shock and anger. It's just rumors and whispers ... for the moment at least. Ria's grimaced as well. But if we keep getting caught flat-footed like this, then even Issei and Serafal-sama won't be able to stop people from questioning our ability to oversee our territory. Your parents could very well try and use this to pressure into lowering your stipulations for anyone seeking your hand. And I could very well be pressured into marrying Riser earlier than I thought. Sona's hands, dainty and petite, curled into angry fists at the thought. No, she refused to allow that to happen. She was the architect of her own destiny, and she would not let her parents' well-intentioned ambitions allow some arrogant high-class devil with more brains in his lower head than anywhere else interfere with what she desired. Unlike many of her fellow high-class devils, Sona truly saw and understood the potential that reincarnated devils possessed. One of her dearest ambitions was to open a school for reincarnated devils in the underworld. It was one of the reasons she'd sought to spend her time in the human world, aside from gathering her peerage directly, to get a more hands-on understanding of human schooling through direct observation and interaction. Any of the people she knew her parents would consider a proper match to ensure the continuation of the pure-blooded devils as a race would never willingly allow her to follow those ambitions. Many would actively work against her if they could. The one young man who might have approved would be Ria's cousin, Sariorg, and while he was handsome enough and was generally a good enough person, he also lacked the power of destruction that the Bale family regarded so highly. That alone made him defective in the eyes of many high-class devils, despite his overwhelming strength and ability in other areas. Also, he was an utter meathead, which was honestly a bit of a disappointment. If he could actually use the muscle in his skull every now and again, he might have been a decent candidate, but Sona demanded a certain degree of intelligence from anyone she would consider her paramour. Riaz gently slipped her hand onto Sona's clenched fist and undid it. Don't worry, Sona, I refuse to let it get to that point. I promise you'll keep your freedom. And what about you, Riaz? The bespectacled devil snapped back, giving her overly kind friend a glare. If you think I'll let you take the blame and sacrifice yourself to Razor for my sake, you'd best think again. I have my pride, and this is just much my responsibility as it is yours. Seeing the pained smile that crossed Riaz's face honestly made Sona's heart ache a bit. She and Riaz had been friends for as long as either could remember and shared a bond as strong and as deep as those that existed between their blood siblings. Unlike you, I don't have any exceptional talent where I excel beyond Razor. It's not like I could challenge him to a manga trivia contest to earn my freedom like you did with chess and your former fiancé. There's a provision in the contract about a rating game, so I at least have a chance to fight for my freedom. But even with the advice, tricks, and spells our new friend supplied, my chances of victory still aren't that good. The red-headed devil said softly. We're simply too badly outnumbered, and that's not even counting that he has Ravel as part of his peerage. Against a single member of the Phoenix family, it would be a struggle, but facing two at once, along with a full veteran peerage, I'm not confident in our chances. Riaz Gremory was always confident, always self-assured, always determined to walk her own path. Seeing her dispirited like this made Sona want to hunt down the fool Phoenix and drown him herself to help her friend. She also felt a not-so-small flare of ire and distaste toward Lord Zeoticus Gremory, Riaz's father. Unlike her own parents, he already had a pure-blooded grandchild to secure the Gremory bloodline through Milica's. He was simply being greedy at this point. Oh, she knew the man didn't mean to harm his daughter. The man likely believed that it was a good match, but while Razor wasn't entirely without his good points, the arrogant, pampered scion of the Phoenix family simply didn't respect Riaz. Her bloodline, her title, her position as an heiress of one of the last remaining 72 Pillars families. Those he respected and cared for, but he showed none of that toward Riaz herself. Riaz was simply a means by which he could attain power and influence, not to mention a vessel for his lust. Another one, anyway. Aside from Ravel, Sona knew from both gossip and spies that Razor liberally indulged himself in the bodies of his peerage, slaking his lust several times over with them. Disgusting pig. Even devils should have limits to their debauchery. To use a human saying, it's not over until the fat lady sings Riaz. The Citri heiress offered quietly. Please, don't give up until it's over, not until you've done everything you can to win. The Gremory heiress offered her a watery smile in return and nodded. I promise, she offered simply, and Sona felt some small part of herself relax again. Riaz was never one to break her word, particularly to someone she cared for. Shaking her head, Riaz eyed the task force beneath them with scant favor. I will be having words with Oni-sama about why this team was set up in the first place. I specifically talked about him not going overboard like this. She offered mildly, hoping to change the subject to one less depressing. I imagine you did the same with Serafal-sama. I did, Sona agreed, adjusting her glasses irritably. While she did truly love her sister dearly, the overly affectionate manner in which Serafal Leviathan expressed her own sisterly feelings was overwhelming, exhausting, and, above all else, utterly embarrassing. The two heiresses shared a look of exasperations that only younger sisters far too used to their embarrassing, overprotective siblings could share before returning their focus to supervising the various devils combing through the rubble. The next day, courtyard, Kuo Academy. Hyoto Issei tried to swallow his yawn as he made his way through the front gates, absently ignoring the student council girl standing at the gates as he momentarily wondered why Sona Kaicho wasn't there, like she had been every day since she was elected student council president. She's probably still dealing with the mess I left at the purifier base, he thought, feeling a bit guilty. It wasn't as if he could help what had happened. Given the circumstances, there had been little he could do to prevent the entire affair from getting so far out of hand. He honestly hadn't gotten much rest himself either. After a late dinner with his parents and making sure that they were asleep in bed, he'd teleported back to his base in order to continue working on creating and refining his base's defenses. At least that was going smoothly. He'd already finished the first floor and was nearly done with the second as well. A few hours of work tonight and it would be done. It turned out that the Gamers store had a whole host of stuff specifically for creating and upgrading dungeons and the various things inside. There was even a Dungeon Core add-on, Dungeon Store that, after being added to the base core, allowed him to access a dungeon-specific area of the store without having to filter and search through the main store. It had been dirt cheap too, only a 100 yen, so Issei hadn't felt the slightest bit guilty for indulging in that bit of streamlining. Thanks to his efforts, any fallen angels that managed to find his dungeon were not going to enjoy their trek ... at least once he was finished with it anyway. That couldn't happen soon enough in Issei's opinion, though at least he had a bit of time. According to Asia, the leader of the Kyo's fallen angels, Rainier, had left for the Fallen's main base in the underworld a couple of days ago to resupply and to handle a debriefing about the death of the rogue Fallen Armeros the Lesser, and likely wouldn't be back for a few more days. For if he was particularly lucky, none of the other remaining Fallen likely cared enough or were motivated enough to actively try and look for her. Calawarner was apparently too lazy. Donaseek didn't care about anything other than finding a good fight, and the fourth, Midelt, was accompanying their leader. Yeah, the Fallen sounded like a real pleasant bunch, didn't they? As he entered the academy itself, he couldn't help but grimace. While preparing a proper defense was all well and good, you couldn't win anything if you only stayed on the defensive. You had to go on the offense if you wanted to win. Armeros the Lesser had been in the low 30s, level-wise, and he'd barely managed to win against her by the skin of his teeth. There was no reason to expect that the four other Fallen that inhabited Kyo's abandoned church were going to be any weaker than her. Hell, there was every chance at least one or two of them would be even stronger. And that was just the Fallen. According to Asia, there was at least 24 stray exorcists inhabiting the area as well, led by one Father Fried Selzen, all of which would be armed with light swords and a variety of exorcist guns. Unfortunately, exorcist guns were far more difficult to counter than normal firearms. Rather than simply being normal firearms loaded with something like blessed bullets as he'd initially assumed, exorcist guns were actually closer to a mass-produced enchanted item that fired bullets of condensed light magic from a magazine of compressed magical energy. While they were technically at their best against creatures attuned to darkness and shadows, like devils and vampires, they were still effective enough against any normal living creature, including humans. Because of course they are, Issei thought bitterly. If it was a game or something, like Pokémon, then exorcist guns and light swords would only whirl against their intended targets, or at least be severely less effective against other targets. But no, apparently, he wasn't that lucky in real life, and light magic was just as deadly to a normal dragon type like him as it was to dark and ghost types. He was suddenly pulled out of his thoughts as a hand reached out and snagged him by the collar of his shirt before quickly dragging him into an empty classroom, the door quickly sliding shut behind him. Who the hell? He grunted out indignantly as he stumbled to regain his balance after being let go, only to freeze up and gulp upon spotting Kades, Murayama, and Kuryuaka standing and looking at him. Murayama, the tallest and physically strongest, was also the closest and likely the one who'd grabbed him. Ladies, I could have sworn that I haven't done any peeking recently, so why the rough treatment? He asked nervously. Cut the dumb act, Hayoto. We know you hired that red mercenary guy to find and help Asia yesterday. Eika pointed out simply, adjusting her glasses with one finger. He also saved us from the same people. I don't. He trailed off weakly. He honestly hadn't been expecting them to openly confront him like this. That was part of the reason for keeping him and the red armored warrior mercenary as separate as possible. Enough. Murayama grabbed the front of his shirt and dragged him close enough that they were practically nose to nose when she spoke again. Admit it already. Issei was having a bit of trouble doing so, what with Murayama accidentally strangling him with the front of his shirt as she held him aloft. Surprisingly, aid came from an unexpected, bespectacled source. Unless you plan on kissing the truth out of him, you might want to let go, Murayama. Kuryu offered dryly. He's starting to turn blue. Murayama blinked before leaning back a bit. Oops. The dark-haired Kendoka squeaked in shock as she let him go, a blush adorning her cheeks. Issei managed to catch himself before he landed on his rump, absently massaging his poor, abused neck before he eyed the three girls warily. They were obviously not going to let up on this, so he was stuck with playing along for now. All right already, he offered with a sigh. I was the one who hired that merc to save Asia and rescuing you all in the process. You're welcome. Kades ignored the sarcasm in that last statement. Did you know that we were going to be kidnapped as well? How would I know something like that? Issei shot back dryly. It took that gamer guy using that observe power of his on you in order to find out that you were spiritualists. I don't have anything like that, and the first I knew about the purifiers grabbing people was when a half-dozen of them jumped me in Asia. That makes sense, Kuryu agreed, absently flexing the arm that held her staring armored red. Hayoto might be a perv, but he's not the kind of guy who'd just let someone be attacked without doing anything. Thanks, I guess, the boy offered uncertainly. Did she have to phrase it like that? My question is just how you managed to hire a magical mercenary to run a rescue mission. The bespectacled girl continued, eyeing Issei carefully. From what I hear, you spend all your money on eroge, gouge, hentai and other kinds of porn. So just how did you manage to hire Mr. Armor to hunt down, invade and decimate a secret base filled with murderous assholes armed to the teeth? Well, first off, I stopped buying that kind of stuff ages ago, Issei stated with a huff. Merely getting sliced and diced in your own house tends to rearrange your priorities a bit, so I've managed to scrunch and save up some funds for a nice little nest egg. Second, it really didn't matter how much I had. The red guy has a massive hate on when it comes to the purifiers. He'll take any job that involves impeding, attacking, or just plain harassing those assholes dirt cheap. I promised him a favor he could call in whenever if he helped Asia, and another if he rescued anyone else that they'd managed to grab along with her. He even called one of them in last night. I was supposed to keep an eye on you three to make sure you didn't do something to put the masquerade at risk. Doesn't sound like a half-bad system, Kuryu offered with a nod. Yeah, guess it makes some sense, Nirayama agreed, crossing her arms beneath her bust. So was that everything? Class is going to start soon, the gamer asked hopefully. One more thing ... Do you know who the Decades started to ask before Issei suddenly darted forward, clapping a hand over her mouth. Do not mention them in school, he hissed out as his eyes darted around the classroom in a near panic. The walls could have fucking ears with them around. They're here, in our school, Kuryu asked sharply, one hand moving to cover the arm that held her sacred gear. Yes, why do you think I've been trying to keep such a low profile since I found out? Issei snapped back before letting out a frustrated sigh, quickly removing his hand from a glaring Cadace's mouth before she decided to bite him. If you really want to talk about this, even though I know the merc specifically told you to drop it, meet me at the gates after school, we'll go someplace a bit safer, and talk alright. Wouldn't that gather a bit too much attention? And one thing, but if the Kendo co-captains are seen going somewhere with the Oppai Baka, a lot of people are going to start talking. Everyone will probably think you're blackmailing them or something, Kuryu pointed out. Ugh, I really hate that nickname. The Red Dragon Emperor groused tiredly, before taking a moment to think. Still, good point. How about, Kuryu, would you mind if I asked you out in class today? Then these two can follow us to make sure the pervert doesn't try anything. All three girls had very different reactions to that plan. Nirayama just gaped at him. Cadace spluttered for a half-minute. Kuryu simply gave him a slow blink before grinning devilishly. My, aren't you the daring one? She offered with a smirk. Sure, I'm game. Though when we're done talking you owe me a real date as well. Issei joined Nirayama and Cadace in a loud A. In response to that bold declaration. What? A girl can't take a date offer at face value? The female sacred gear user asked with a pout. And heck, some of the other girls have been betting about female perverted glasses hooking up with one of the perverted trio since halfway through first year. Might as well let it come true, so they can move on to something else. Do they really do stuff like that? Nirayama scowled. That's appalling. That's the price you pay for being at the bottom of the social ladder, Issei offered with a shrug. People have said a lot worse about me and Kuryu, particularly the other boys. I'll admit that I kinda deserved it, but Kuryu's never done worse than flirt a bit. The brunette Kendoist just gave him a long searching look for a moment, as if she wasn't sure what to make of him anymore. If he didn't know any better, he'd say it was appraising. Hyoto's right, shit like this happens. Though thankfully, most aren't stupid enough to say something like that to my face. Kuryu agreed, absently adjusting her glasses with a single index finger. Thanks for being offended on my behalf, girls, but I honestly just don't give a damn about it anymore. That still doesn't make it right, Kuryu. Cadace huffed back with a scowl. Issei held back a bemused snort as he looked between the three girls. Apparently they'd somehow managed to bond after their shared ordeal. Not surprising given the shit they'd gone through together, and learning about the whole magic is real thing was probably another bit of insanity to bond over as well. Still, seeing the Kendo captains and the female perverted glasses together made for a strange grouping. So we're good with my plan then? He asked after a moment. The three girls shared a look before nodding in unison. Alright then, let's get to class. The last thing we need is to cause any more of a ruckus with what's going to happen later. After school, gates of Kuo Academy. Issei let out a light breath as he leaned against the wall, looking perfectly relaxed. Save for the rapid twitching of one of his eyebrows. Class had been irritating after he'd asked out Kuryu as planned. Between the shrieks and whispers of the girls, the stunned disbelief of the guys, and his two friends howling about traitors and go explode, you bastard. Things had gotten very loud and very tiring, very quickly. I can't believe those two. He scowled sourly. What? Were they expecting me to stay single for the rest of my life? On second thought, I don't think I want an answer to that one. It was times like these that were slowly making him reevaluate his oldest friendship. But bonds that had endured for over a decade didn't break so easily. He'd had to thump the two across the head at lunch to get them to finally shut up about his betrayal of getting girlfriend like a normie. Even someone like Kuryu. That particular statement had earned Motohama another, far harder, thump. With what he now knew about what drove Kuryuuki to dress down, act out, and simply pretend to not be as cute as she could be ... Well, he'd never been one to disparage even a moderately cute girl, and he was certainly glad for that now. No one deserved what happened to her, and he was determined to at least ensure she had fun today, if nothing else. Hyodo, the devil herself, arrived, her typical smirk flashing across her lips. Ready for our date? Yup, you. He smiled back at her, already noticing several people staring at them. He held out his bag and absently nodded to her bag, which she handed over after a moment, still grinning. More than ready, she answered. Let's get going before people really start gawking. Nodding in agreement, Issei fell into step beside her as they walked out the gate. He easily noticed Murayama and Kade sneaking behind them, much to the encouragement of the suspicious girls and boys of Kyo Academy ... and the remaining two-thirds of the perverted trio. But the perverted duo were ignored as usual. Later, family restaurant, Kyo Town. So why here? Kade asked, frowning as she looked around the small little eatery Issei had led them to. The shop's small and out of the way, not some place anyone but a local would visit. Issei explained from his own seat. The four were currently seated in a booth that was tucked into a secluded in a corner away from the window, and most of the other seats in the restaurant by a bit of bad spatial designing. It made it a popular seat for couples looking for some privacy, but little else. Nobody can see us from the street or try and eavesdrop from the other tables. No security cameras either, so no chance of remote lip reading. I also managed to get a talisman that'll prevent most low-level forms of magical eavesdropping from our mutual friend. This place is as safe as we're going to get once we've got our food ordered and delivered. Once the waitress came in with their drinks and took their orders, Issei looked over the three girls before sighing softly. So ... what exactly do you want to know? He asked neutrally. Who are the devils in Kyo Academy? Kade asked quietly. The entirety of the Occult Research Club and the Student Council. Issei answered bluntly, deciding to bite the proverbial bullet. Are Ria's Gremory Senpai and Shitori Kaicho? Murayama asked in disbelief. Gremory ... That's the name of one of the demons of the Lesser Key of Solomon. Can't believe I didn't put that together before. Kuryu muttered to herself. When the Kade and Murayama openly gaped at her, she huffed. What? I got into Shin Megami Tensei a while back and I spent a few hours just doing internet searches on some of the source material. It's not that hard to find. Issei snorted. Yeah, and Kaicho's real name is Sona Citri. He added quietly. That's another demon from the Lesser Key. From what I've heard, most of the demons listed in the Lesser Key are actually the names of houses of devil nobility. Gremory and Citri are the only pure-blooded devils in Kyo Academy as far as I know. The rest are all reincarnated devils. Reincarnated? Murayama whispered, looking halfway between nervous and scared. Issei nodded. Long story short, devils, angels, and fallen angels are all real and they were involved in some big war thousands of years ago. He explained, absently tapping a finger on the table. It ... didn't end well. From what I've found out, all three of the biblical factions were pretty much devastated. Population-wise, the devils had it even worse since they had some kind of civil war not long afterwards due to the four rulers of their kind. The original Lucifer, Leviathan, Beelzebub and Asmodeus dying in the Great War. Apparently, things were so bad that they were worried that their population wasn't large enough to even maintain their species in any real numbers. So one of their leaders, the current Beelzebub, figured out a way to turn humans and other races into devils to help rebuild their population. It's called the Evil Peace System, and each noble or high-class devil is given a set to reincarnate a number of individuals into what they call a peerage. So ... they're what? Slaves? Kade asked, eyes narrowing sharply. Depends on the devil you're talking about. Issei answered with a slight shrug. From what I've heard, it varies a lot based on the devil involved. Some treat it as little better than slavery or a form of indentured servitude in exchange for near immortality and magical power. Others treat it like a business contract, trading loyal service for a period of time in exchange for longevity, magic, or some other services. Then there's the opposite end of the scale. I know that the Gremory family is rather infamous for treating those they reincarnate as a form of informal adoption. Citri-senpai is not quite the same, but from what I've been able to gather she at least treats her peerage as friends. Out of both groups, the only one who was reincarnated against their will was Kiba Yudo, and that was to save him from dying. Seeing Kuryu open her mouth, Issei quickly cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. No, I don't know any particular details about that. The only reason I even know that much is that the mercenary mentioned him as the only unwilling reincarnation among the peerages active at Kyo. I didn't think it was my place to pry, and I had a lot of other things on my mind at the time. Fair enough, the bespectacled girl conceded. So why are they here anyway? Why live in Kyo of all places? That I don't have a clue on, Issei admitted with a shrug. Might simply be bad luck on why Kyo in particular. As for why they're here in general, the only thing I've heard is something about Gremory-senpai being a Japanophile. The whys don't really matter right now. What will they do if they find out about our powers? Murayama asked seriously. What make you think they don't already know? Issei asked, hitching a single eyebrow in her direction. Devils are innately supernatural beings. To them sensing magic, kai and the like is practically second nature. Them being able to tell that you too have some nascent spiritual powers isn't outside the realm of possibility, particularly considering that Shinra-senpai, the student council's vice president, is from a family of exorcists herself. Best case they know and simply don't care. Worst case, they couldn't tell because your powers haven't fully awakened yet, meaning that should you actually learn to use your gifts, you might draw their attention. And they didn't notice my sacred gear because it had been mostly sealed. Kuryu pointed out, chewing on her lower lip in thought. But now that it's been unsealed, they'll notice sooner or later. Will they try and recruit me? I don't think so, Issei offered uncertainly. Remember, your sacred gear is light-oriented which, according to everything I've learned, is one of a devil's biggest weaknesses. There's a possibility that if you were reincarnated, your own sacred gear could turn against you. The only thing more dangerous to devils is holy type magic. Spiritual powers can damage or destroy devils, but it's a fairly neutral form of energy, just as dangerous to a lot of supernatural beings. So those two are in more danger of being recruited than me. That's good to know. The glasses girl offered with small relieved sigh. Hey, the two kendoists barked in unified outrage. There was a break in the conversation to let the girls digest that as their food arrived and they started to eat. Issei had told them that it was his treat and the girls had given in with minimal protest. So is there anything else we need to worry about in town? Murayama asked cautiously as she finished her hamburger steak. Issei paused for a moment to think about it. Aside from the devils, there's a group of fallen angels who've taken over the old church on the outskirts of town. I'd avoid them at all costs if I were you. They don't tend to be fond of humans in general. Aside from those two groups, there's no other real permanent residents on the supernatural side of things. The occasional migrant yokai will wander through, but I don't think there's a permanent population in town. I could be wrong about that though. Other than that, there's the occasional stray devil, but those things are a devil issue and I don't know much about them. Do you think that the mercenary would be willing to train me? Kuryu asked suddenly. I can't think of anywhere I could safely practice with my staring armored red, but that guy has a base somewhere in town. I think he might. Issei blinked in surprise at the sudden request. I guess it depends on what you're willing to pay him. I don't think he charges his rates in money, or at least not anything a bunch of normal high schoolers can pay. But he's always seemed willing to trade favors. Given that you've got a sacred gear, he'll probably be willing to make some kind of bargain. He left me a way to contact him in case I find anything else involving the purifiers, so I can try and set up a meeting if you'd like. Appreciated, Hyodo. Kuryu smiled and offered him a wink, causing him to blush slightly before he regained control of himself. What about you girls? Do you want in on this? Actually, before they answer that, I'm really curious about how the heck the purifiers managed to grab you too. Issei asked with a frown. Kuryu, I can understand. She's got no combat training after all, but I know for a fact that you two can pack a punch when you want to. Didn't you fight back? Both Kendoka looked embarrassed for a moment. We got ambushed. A couple of them distracted us from the front while two more snuck up from behind and tased us, Murayama admitted, before frowning. It was really weird. We were right in the middle of the street, but no one seemed to notice what was happening. The purifiers that took Asia had some weird Magi tech disc things that made anything that was going on around it unnoticeable to normal people. Issei explained. They likely used one when they attacked you too as well, so they could have knocked you out and stuffed you in the van before collapsing the dome and no one would have noticed anything. Useful little gadgets, I have to admit. I don't want to have something like that ever happen to me again. Kades growled out, hands gripping. Despite all the training we've done, we were helpless. I don't like that. I'm in. Keiko, I'm in as well. Her long-haired friend nodded firmly. That is ... if he'll accept the same offer from us. He probably will, even if it's just to spite the purifiers. Like I said, Mr. Red seems to have a real hate on for those guys. Issei answered carefully. Honestly, I can't blame him either. These guys are the most extreme xenophobes I've ever heard of. And even if that building was their last base in Kyoto, they're at least a national group. And there's a real possibility that they've got bases in at least Europe and America as well. They will be back, and they'll come looking for anyone involved with what destroyed their last foothold. That likely includes us as well as the mercenary, Asia and Abe Senpai. I'm sure he knows that as well. It's probably why he agreed to help with my training, and he'll likely do the same for you three. So he's helping you train as well? Cades asked, frowning slightly. Yeah, we made our own deal shortly after that crazy asshole attacked my family. If you're lucky, he'll start you off easier than he did with me. The gamer offered with a not entirely fake shudder. He still remembered how weak he'd been when he'd done his first dungeon dive, how easily he could have died. It wasn't a pleasant experience, trust me on that. The group paused again as their waitress arrived again to deliver their desserts and take away their dishes, before Kuryu looked at Issei curiously. Hey Hayato, why do you hang out with Matsuda and Madohama anyway? She asked curiously, as opposed to the usual contempt he got when people talked about his friends. You're a perv, sure, but you're nowhere as bad as those two. Honestly, you might end up pretty popular if you didn't get caught up with those louts. Weird question, Issei muttered as he took a spoonful of his chocolate sundae to buy himself time to think. Honesty, I've known those two since we were in kindergarten ... back when all that we knew about girls was that they had cooties and whatnot. I used to have another friend, a guy called Rin, but he and his family moved away. Anyway, I guess I just never grew out of being their friend. It just always seemed wrong to try and abandon them because they weren't cool or popular, you know. Besides, I've never been one to try and hide who I am, and that includes being a perv. Why do you act like that anyway? Those two idiots are the only ones anywhere close to being as perverted as you, and I don't want to know how their minds work. Cades sniffed. Well, that kinda goes back to just after Rin moved away. Issei offered thoughtfully. I was a bit down in the dumps because my best friend had moved away, so I was moping around the local park. That's where I met this weird old guy. He's the one who told me the wonders of ... well, you know. I thought it was weird at first, but it helped get my mind off Rin, so I played along, and eventually things just kept rolling on until that purifier showed up at my house. Of all the... Murayama growled out. If I ever find that old lech, I'm going to beat his groin into paste. How dare he corrupt a little kid like that and turn them into a... She made a vague waving motion in Issei's direction. Issei felt vaguely insulted by that. Cades didn't seem too happy either, if the very unkind words she was muttering under her breath was any indication. Kuryu was simply frowning as she gave Issei another careful, searching look. Hayo, Issei, did you ever meet this weirdo again after that? She asked faux calmly. No, Issei offered carefully. I only met him once when I was about 5 or 6. Good, that one exposure was bad enough. The bespectacled girl offered with a nod. Their little meeting broke up a few minutes later, with Cades and Murayama taking their leave. Before they left, the shorter Pinkette paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. You're ... not so bad, Hayato. I suppose there's a bit more to you than an alpai baka. She blurted out before spinning on her heel and marching off before he could even start to formulate a response. Murayama merely shook her head in bemusement, muttering something under her breath before she followed after her. Okay, what was that about? Issei muttered out, blinking in bewilderment as he ignored the various screens that popped up in front of him. He'd pay attention to those later. That was Cades finally admitting that you're not as bad as she thought, dum-dum. Kuryu offered with an eye roll. You're at least partially responsible for us getting rescued from some really bad shit. You've helped us get a better foothold on what's going on around here, and you're even going to negotiate with ... him ... to help us get stronger. That was her admitting that a minor case of perversion doesn't make you as bad a person as she thought. While Issei wasn't sure if he should be insulted or not that his previously perverted antics were being called minor, he could at least get the point. Well, that's certainly something. Issei coughed into his fist before smirking toward Kuryu. Now, I believe I owe you a date, Kuryu. The bespectacled girl offered him a predatory grin. Considering we're dating right now, Issei, I think that calling me Eika is well within your ability. Later, Hayato Issei's base. Issei was honestly feeling pretty pleased with himself. Not only had he managed to mostly resolve things without revealing his identity, but, more importantly, his date with Eika had gone pretty darn well in his opinion. He honestly liked that he didn't have to put up any form of front with her. She knew exactly what type of person he was and seemed fine with it. She also, surprisingly enough, had very similar tastes as him when it came to games, both normal and eroge types as well. She kept the latter to herself mostly, in order to prevent even more stories from being spread about her and to keep from being bothered by Matsuda and Madohama. He'd even earned a kiss on the cheek after escorting her back to her apartment, which had ruled. Then there were the repercussions that his meeting with the girls had had on his gamer gear quests. Relationship reset. Your relationship with Kades Ryuko has been reset to the middle of neutral. Former relationship, dislike. Congratulations. Your relationship with Murayama Keiko has increased to friendly. Congratulations. Your relationship with Kuryueka has increased to friendly. You are now dating Kuryueka. Eroge dating subsystem unlocked. Please look at the relevant page for more information. You have successfully cemented a dual identity. Unlock condition. Hyoto Issei and the Gaia Gamer's gear wielder are considered two separate people by 15 or more people. While assuming your alternate identity, you use an alternate relationship page for people than you have as just Hyoto Issei. Check the relationships page for more information. You have a chance to train others. The contract and tutelary systems have been unlocked. Check the appropriate page for more information. The chain quest Gentlemanly Pursuits has been cancelled due to the relationship reset of Kades Ryuko. The title Oppai Baka can now be unequipped. That final message had been the real prize in Issei's humble opinion. He no longer had to see that never to be sufficiently damned name in his status screen whenever he opened it. He immediately swapped out his title for Ratman Slayer, and planned to let that infinitely damned Oppai Baka title remain in storage for the rest of eternity if he could help it. Also, he had a girlfriend. Yes, it was Kai. Eika. She'd given him permission to call her Eika, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. She was pretty cute when you got past her shell, and she was honestly just as perverted as he was. He never had put on airs or anything like that in front of her. In all honesty, he was starting to feel pretty comfortable around her. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. He was currently working on expanding his base while lounging on his throne. He'd just finished the last of the second floor a few minutes ago, and he was currently planning the layout of the third floor. One of the first things he purchased from the dungeon store had been an ability called Trap Master that, as its name suggested, allowed him to plant traps in addition to monsters throughout his dungeon floors. The best part was that it leveled up just by using it to plant traps in his dungeon. That is to say, he earned EXP for the skill every time he placed a trap. It also apparently gained EXP every time a trap was activated, with bonus XP gained based on the damage dealt to the one who triggered it. Even better, every time the skill leveled up, he gained access to even more traps and trap upgrades. Granted, there were some limits. Some traps were restricted to a certain floor threshold, which was fair, he supposed. Using a supergravity explosion trap on floor 1 would just be cheating. And it was. He first unlocked several basic physical and mechanical traps. Pitfall, Dart Wall, Rockfall, and Spring Floor were the ones he'd unlocked when he first got the skill. When he'd started working on floor 3, he'd also unlocked several magical traps: Trap Circle, Shockwave, Trap Circle, Earth Prison, Trap Circle, Grisly Wind, and Trap Circle, Vines of Imprisonment. They were all fairly self-explanatory. Pitfall created a concealed hole that, if someone stepped on it, would drop them into a pit several meters deep. Dart Wall launched a barrage of darts from a section of wall when it was triggered, and he could upgrade the darts with a variety of poisons after he leveled up Trap Master a bit. Rockfall would cause a number of heavy rocks to drop from the ceiling onto the area around the trigger whenever someone activated it. Spring Floor was ... well, it was mostly a joke. It basically acted like a pneumatic cannon that sent whoever activated it flying into the air. But if you aimed it right, you could literally launch anyone who triggered it onto the triggers for other traps or into a perfect position for a monster ambush. The magical traps were a bit more complicated, but still interesting. Trap Circle, Shockwave, contrary to its name, released a large surge of thunder magic into the surrounding area when it was triggered. Trap Circle, Earth Prison caused masses of stone to rise up out of the ground and bind the limbs of whoever triggered it. Trap Circle, Grisly Wind created a sudden tornado of blustery, cutting winds centered around its trigger, throwing and cutting anyone nearby. Finally, Trap Circle, Vines of Imprisonment bound a target with dozens of magically created vines that erupted from the ground. On their own, none of them were all that impressive and unlikely to one-shot a goblin, let alone a fallen, but Issei was hopeful that they'd be able to distract and wear down any enemy that stumbled across them. To complement Trap Master, Issei had also bought a second add-on skill known as Dungeon Law for his base. It basically allowed him to set down rules that affected either the entire dungeon or selected floors. One of the first he'd implemented across the entire dungeon was Grounded, which basically prevented any race that had wings, could generate wings, or that could fly via magic or artifacts from being able to do so within his base. It was an amazing skill, and incredibly useful for stacking the playing field to his advantage. Granted, there were limits. Dungeon Law couldn't affect anyone that vastly overpowered him in terms of level. It also couldn't alter the fundamental nature of something that entered the base, like changing their race. So no fallen become humans or gods become humans laws. He could create specific laws that inhibited specific races, yes, but he also had a limit on the number of laws he could impose on the base as well, both base-wide and on specific floors. He could only hope that his preparations would be enough to repel the fallen when they finally managed to track down his base. There was no way in hell he was letting them lay a hand on Asia again. 2 days later, Abandoned Church, Kuo Town. "You stupid, incompetent pair of total fuck-ups," Rainier snarled out as she glared at the pair of morons she'd been saddled with. Calawarner and Donaseek both flinched back slightly at her obvious wrath. They fucking deserved to be afraid. She'd only been gone for 4 days, and they'd managed to lose the former holy priestess within the first few hours that she and Middle had been gone, and hadn't even tried to find her yet. "What part of keep an eye on the nun escaped the pair of you?" The dark-haired fallen growled out. "And why the fuck haven't you even tried to find her yet? She's just a sacred gear holder." Calawarner responded dismissively, regaining some of her usual haughty pride. "So what if she managed to wander into some trouble? There's plenty more like her out there." This stupid, arrogant little. Rainer's eye began to twitch violently. Calawarner was the grandchild of one of the Cotter, the leaders of Grigori and the most powerful of the fallen. Her ancestors' influence, combined with her perfectly seductive hourglass figure and willingness to sleep with any half-decent-looking superior, had allowed her to rise high enough to be assigned to one of the rare teams of fallen operating outside the underworld, despite the fact that she was a lazy bitch who refused to do more than the minimum of work required of her. It was also obvious that, despite her manipulative nature, the Bluenet had yet to grasp the significance of Asia Argento and her sacred gear. "Calawarner, you are such a fucking dim-witted whore that I'm tempted to just throw you in some Hong Kong brothel just to see how long it takes you to wander back fucking out." The leader of their small band snarled out. "Asia Argento is important. Not only did the order to keep an eye on her come from Lord Azazel himself, but recruiting her was a fucking propaganda coup. A former holy priestess joining the Grigori. Just the fucking rumor has increased our recruitment of rogue exorcists and other disaffected members of the church by severalfold." Letting out a huff, Rainier swept a lock of her soft black hair over her shoulder before crossing her arms under her impressive bust and glaring at the two nitwits who seemed to finally be getting how much they'd screwed up. More than that, Lord Azazel has expressed an interest in studying Twilight healing due to its unique healing properties. So bringing her to him will improve our standing as well. So we are going to find her, and we are going to bring her back. And if you have to eat her the fuck out to appease her, then you'd best brush up on seducing females. Calawarner flushed in embarrassed rage at the thought of being forced to service a mere human. "You, Donaseek, I already know that you are more concerned with finding something entertaining to fight than doing your job." Rainier spat out, glaring at the battle-crazy fallen, who grinned sheepishly at that. "I don't care anymore. What I care about now is for you to get out there and fucking find her. Do it quickly and I might be able to resist the urge to fucking geld you." Not even bothering with his usual bombastic boasting, the tall fallen quickly turned on his heels and fled the church, Calawarner hot on his heels. Once she was certain that they were both gone, Rainier hopped up to perch on the desecrated altar, letting her head drop into her hands. "What an utter and complete clusterfuck I've come back to," she groaned out. "I mean seriously ... what the fuck is wrong with those two?" "The same thing that's wrong with all of us fallen," Ray Middle offered. The petite fallen had been silent while Rainier had vented her spleen, but now spoke up as she approached. "Every last one of us is an arrogant bastard or bitch more concerned with our own jollies than anything else. Calawarner and Donaseek are just too stupid to try and rein it in. To the point they'd ignore orders even," Rainier asked, shooting a half-hearted glare toward Middlet. "Those two are screw-ups, yes, but they've done it by the numbers this time. Not even Calawarner's Cotter Grand Mummy is going to be able to pull her ass out of this fire. Hell, the only reason the two of us might be able to escape getting tarred with the same brush is because I left explicit orders for them to follow when we went to the underworld to resupply and report in. Yeah, but ... the three of us are less than 200 years old, Ray." Even if you don't look it, you're older than all of us put together, Middle pointed out cautiously. I'm literally the youngest person in our team, and I'm 75. Calawarner's 150 and Donaseek is 108.5. This was supposed to be a milk run according to the briefings, so they weren't even trying to take it seriously. I know better because I've had you as my mentor, but those two, they've had everything hand-fed to them with silver spoons. Calawarner, yes, but how the hell did Donaseek get everything handed to him? The lead Fallen asked with a frown. In addition to being a combat junkie, the bastard's also pretty good at using his other spear. He's had a string of sugar mamas since he joined the Grigori, and some of them were pretty high up. The petite blonde snorted. His first instinct after he lets his other urges screw him over is trying to seduce his superior, and you shut that idea down before we all left the underworld. Raynor snorted at that. Like hell, I'd be just another notch in that cocky brat's bedpost. That's why I told him to make do with Calawarner or human whores while we're stuck in the human world. I have self-respect, thank you very much. All Fallen were designed to be as seductive as possible for their gender, and while Donaseek was certainly attractive in the waning arrogant DILF sort of way, his arrogant condescension, as if it was his right to screw anything female, humanoid and with a pulse within eyeshot, pissed her off enough that she wouldn't let him near her bed with a 10-foot light spear. His other love was fighting. The man loved to fight anything, from other Fallen to devils to even migrant yokai if there was nothing else to fight. Fortunately, beating up the stray exorcists and calling it training kept him sated for the most part. It doesn't matter. We have to find that girl, Middles, Raynor stated, sliding off the altar. I did not fall from grace to spend the rest of eternity as a laughingstock because a couple spoiled brats couldn't pull their heads out of their asses. Alone among the 4 Fallen currently assigned to QO, Raynor was not born a Fallen. Instead, she had truly fallen from grace, turning from a pure angel for giving into the sin of lust and seducing a handsome young human centuries ago. As a first-generation Fallen, she was held in slightly higher regards by her superiors, all first-generation Fallen as well, despite being only 5 centuries or so old. It was why she'd been selected as team lead, and why Calawarner not so secretly resented her. I'm with you all the way, Ray. Middle agreed with a nod. What about Selzen and his merry little band of psychos? Once we find out where the Holy Priestess has gotten, we'll bring them in. If she's been kidnapped by someone, we can use a few of them as cannon fodder to get a feel for our enemy's strength before we move in to attack ourselves. Raynor stated simply, keeping her voice down just in case Freed was nearby. The crazy bastard was a total creeper, always lurking around in the shadows. Sounds like a plan. Middle agreed with a smirk. If someone removed the creepy bastard, she wouldn't be complaining. She personally didn't care much for devils or humans, save a few exceptions, but the so-called genius exorcist was madder than the proverbial hatter and a battle maniac that put the likes of Donaseek to shame. Frankly, he just creeped her the fuck out, not to mention she was fairly sure he was only one little hop away from deciding he wanted to know what it was like to fight a fallen angel to the death. No loyalty except to someone who would let him kill without restraint or restriction. That was Father Freed Selzen. Later that evening, Hillock, outskirts of QO town. It took several hours to trace Asia Argento's magical presence, both due to the age of the trail and the distance it covered, crisscrossing over a shopping arcade several times over before seemingly weakening in the middle of a park. It was only due to the strength of both Argento's attunement with her sacred gear and her mystical potential that allowed them to pick up the trail again, which unfortunately led to what looked like a bomb site secured by a large number of powerful devils. Raynor shivered as she remembered. Each one of the devils working at that site was on an order of magnitude stronger than any of their group, and there had been at least a couple dozen of them. Had they been discovered, they'd have been wiped out without a chance to even fight back. Luckily, even though the trail itself vanished in that devil-filled crater, Raynor had managed to detect the faintest remnants of some form of teleportation spell mixed with several other magical signals, with the priestess being one of the strongest among them. With 3 of them casting a tracer spell from 3 different points around the crater, they'd been able to quickly triangulate the rough location of the destination. After their near brush with the devils, Raynor decided it was time to use their canaries. She called in Freed and had ordered him to assemble a squad of stray exorcists for a quick smash and grab retrieval operation and send them to the coordinates they'd found. He was to gather the rest of his men and secure the church until they returned. Just where the hell is that little bitch supposed to be hiding? We're in the ass end of nowhere, Calawarner hissed out in haughty frustration. Would you shut your mouth for 10 seconds, you 2-penny trollop? Rainier snarled back, most her attention focused on the tracing spell she was manipulating to try and unlock the exact endpoint of the teleport. It's hard enough working this spell without having to deal with your petulant whining ringing in my ears. As the purple-clad Fallen sputtered at the insult, the Ravenet smirked in victory as her spell finally worked and a teleportation circle appeared set on a largish rock at the base of a tree. There, that's the entrance to whatever dimensional pocket the nun is in. So we're dealing with some kind of mage. Issei sighed melodramatically. A shame, they're never as much fun as warriors. We're not here to slate your murder boner, you dimwit. We're here to get in, grab IsseiXHarem, and get out. Rainier growled back. Any fun, as you put it, is a secondary concern at most. From the looks of that crater where the devils were lurking about, whoever owns this place likely pulled the girl out of there before they brought it down. And I don't feel like pissing off someone who can do that just to feed your cravings. We go in, secure the girl if she's alive, and get out while causing as little damage as possible. And if all we find is her corpse? Warner asked casually, not looking at all concerned about the idea. Stupid bitch. Getting Argento back out of this alive was the only way to salvage their reputations after this embarrassment. Then we get some answers, Rainier growled out, before turning to the exorcists gathered behind them. Exorcists, you're in first, move out. Same time. Hyoto Issei's bedroom, Hyoto house. Issei suddenly shot up, wide awake and flailing out of his bed with a surprised yelp as an electric alarm blared loudly in his ears, like someone had set up a set of electric buzzers right next to his eardrums. Note to self, change the alarm settings so I don't go deaf before I hit 20. The Secretary muttered irritably before he managed to turn off the alarm and focus on the message floating in front of his nose. The boy instantly blanched at the sight. Invasion imminent. An unknown number of individuals have unlocked your base's teleportation gate. Activate teleportation array to immediately return to base in order to defend it. Why, of all the times, Issei grumbled. He'd only just gotten back from the base just an hour ago, and he'd really been looking forward to getting a full night's sleep after several days of late nights prepping his base's defenses. Still, fallen angels waited for no man apparently. Using the set equip function, Issei was quickly dressed and quickly produced one of his more recent purchases from his inventory. The life model decoy dummy was an ultra-realistic decoy that would fool any observer into believe it was actually asleep or performing some other mundane activity if they looked in on him. His mother had become something of a worrywart since the purifier incident, and had started checking his room every so often at night. He'd been lucky the last time it happened, having just crawled into bed after returning from his base. Preparations complete, Issei hit the Y key and was instantly teleported into his base's core room, appearing right in front of his throne. Taking his seat, a screen immediately projected from his base core, showing Issei the designated teleporter trap area that was at the start of floor 1. Well now, I believe the old saying goes, welcome to my parlor, said the spider to the fly. The gamer smirked as light began to flare across the screen. Thank you for agreeing to be my lab rats to test my defenses. Good luck, I hope you have a fun adventure. At the floor 1 teleporter redirection platform, Giuseppe, excommunicated member of the Catholic Church and former Vatican exorcist neophyte, blinked away the spots as the teleportation ended. He and the rest of his 5-man squad had been sent to scout out the way for the fallen, as well as trip any traps that may be lurking along the path. The last part was an assumption, but Giuseppe knew it was probably just what the fallen had in mind. Bitches. He had both his light sword and exorcist gun out and at the ready, as did most of the rest of his team. They'd fully been expecting to drop into the middle of the enemy's sanctum, so they had come ready for a fight. Only they clearly hadn't. Instead, they were standing in the middle of some kind of underground ruin. Whoever's in here must have set up a redirect on any unauthorized teleports. Great, that means we're not dealing with a fucking amateur, he muttered aloud, eyes scanning the barren stone cavern room they'd found themselves in. The only way out seemed to be a tunnel paved with ancient-looking stone tiles. Looks like we're going to be doing this the hard way. Antonio, Vincenzo take point. Francesco cover our rear. Angelo stay close to me. The others quickly moved to obey as ordered, as expected. The 5 of them had grouped together since they'd arrived in this damned country, being the only native Italians out of the rest of the entire Kuel group, save the priestess they'd been sent to retrieve and Father Fried who, frankly, terrified all 5 of them. They made their way down the rough stone path for less than 30 seconds, just managing to leave the room they'd arrived in, before a sharp hiss from Antonio made them all tense up. Contact, moving forward to stand next to the man who'd moved to take cover around the edge of the cave's entrance. It took Giuseppe a moment to catch sight of what had startled the other man. There, floating several feet off the ground, was a clay statue, one of the local religion's blasphemous little idols. The thing itself was only a foot tall, and he could tell, even from a distance, that it had been intricately carved and decorated. Were it not for its obvious magical origins, Giuseppe would have been willing to praise the skill of the artisan who'd made it. That he noticed it turning toward them, an ominous glow beginning to form around its body and its eyes starting to shine. "Take it down," Giuseppe barked as he, Antonio, Vincenzo and Francesco moved out of cover and opened fire with their exorcist guns. Most of their initial shots went wide, the small, bobbing target managing to dodge and weave around most of their shots. But a couple nicked it, sending cracks across the surface. The statuette seemed unconcerned, the glow from its eyes intensifying again before it shot out a beam of burning, pale green light that slammed into Antonio's torso. The poor man fell back onto the ground, screaming in pain. "Damn it," the lead stray exorcist snarled out before continuing to fire. "Shoot that thing." The light began to build up again, and Giuseppe was about to order them to take cover, but it suddenly halted when a single lucky shot from Francesco managed to slam into the accursed doll dead center. The clay statuette seemed to shatter on impact, the glow instantly fading away as the pieces fell to the ground. "Angelo, how does he look?" Giuseppe asked, turning to look at their team's lone medic, who'd already moved to look over their fallen comrade. "There's nothing I can do," Angelo admitted, shaking his head. "That light beam seared through his skin like a fucking blowtorch. Antonio's going to be scarred for life. What little he has left." Giuseppe hissed at the sight of the burn that covered his subordinate's chest from his right shoulder down to the top of his stomach. That beam had cut through his protective vestments like they weren't even there. The vestments, standard issue among exorcists, were primarily designed to protect against magic imbued with the power of shadow, but they should have offered at least some protection against any form of hostile magic. "Can you at least bind his wounds enough that he can move again?" he asked tensely. "Are you fucking joking? I'm fighting to keep him from going into shock." The medic snapped back. "He'd need healing magic to get him back on his feet. I'm not the fucking nun, I just know first aid." "Hey, there was a bottle resting where that statue thing landed," Francesco called from where he'd moved to ensure that the golem or whatever it was stayed down, pointing to the offending object. "It's got something written on it in the local language." Vincenzo, the only one in their group who could read Japanese, moved forward and picked it up, before blinking in confusion. "It says health potion." "What?" Giuseppe snapped. "This isn't some Lord Bedamned video game. Gamer's gear. No one's seen either of them in nearly a century." Francesco pointed out simply. That simple statement of fact did cause Giuseppe to pause. Part of exorcist training was familiarizing them with the more famous and infamous of the Lord's creations, and both of the gamer's gears were rather well known, if only for the effect their previous owners had on modern society. If this was truly the gamer's gear at work, after a moment of thought he nodded. "Pour it on his wound," the lead exorcist ordered abruptly. "What? We don't have any idea what it could do to him." Angelo protested. "You're struggling to keep him alive right now, Angelo." Giuseppe barked back, stepping forward and taking the bottle from Vincenzo. "This way he at least gets a chance." With that, he uncorked the bottle and upturned it over Antonio's wound. Angelo could only glare in protest, a glare that quickly melted into stunned silence as he watched the liquid start to glow as it touched the damaged skin, only for the wound to instantly lighten and shrink before his eyes. After only a few seconds, the debilitating wound was reduced to nothing more than a superficial burn. "Hail Mary, full of grace," the medic said faintly. That wound should have killed him, and it healed up in less time than it takes to boil a cup of water. This if we can get the wielder on our side. As they say in this country, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Giuseppe said with a shake of his head. "Antonio, you all right?" "Why yes, and how am I all right?" the previously wounded man said, sitting up and patting his chest in disbelief, hissing only slightly as he touched the still tender skin. "With Issei, why the hell did it drop loot?" the Secretary muttered as he quickly palmed through the interface as he kept one eye on his unwelcome guests via the screen. Giuseppe Ciano LV-13, Stray Exorcist Squad Leader. Francesco Bruni LV-10, Stray Exorcist. Antonio Baroni LV-9, Stray Exorcist. Angelo Zeno LV-11, Stray Exorcist Medic. Vincenzo Vallisneri LV-10, Stray Exorcist. All of them were clearly foreigners, Italians from the sounds of it, and all of them were seriously underleveled compared to Issei himself, although they were technically strong enough to be able to clear the first floor without too many problems if they had the proper equipment, which they didn't. What he needed to do was sort out the whole item drops thing, The last thing he wanted was to give them equipment to better fight back with. "Ah, here we go," he exclaimed as he finally found the right screen. He promptly switched things over to invasion mode from dungeoneering mode, and then noticed a couple of other little cosmetic and theatrical options that would make this a lot more interesting. When the Fallen eventually came in, back with the stray exorcists, the flow of magics changed. Angelo muttered. The 5 stray exorcists had advanced very slowly and cautiously since Antonio's injury, and had paused to look around them at the sudden shift in ambient magic. "It has it's more strident." "No," Francesco said with a frown. "Great, that likely means whoever made this place knows we're here," Vincenzo grumbled. "So, we're stuck in a labyrinth, cut off from the outside, and now the magic's changing. More of those flying statuettes, incoming," Antonio said, shakily. 2 from the front, 3 from the right. "Fall back into the left passage," Giuseppe ordered immediately. One of those things had been troublesome enough, 5 of them would be a deadly threat. The 5 exorcists fled down the indicated passage, pursued by the flying statuettes, beams and shots of light being exchanged between the 2 groups as they fell into a fighting retreat. The exorcists were lucky enough to take out 2 of the pursuing statues in a hail of gunfire as they pulled back. One of the exorcists, Vincenzo, stepped onto what looked like a regular tile, which then suddenly sprang out and upward as if it was mounted on a high-powered spring, propelling him up into the air in a flailing ball of vestments and cursing, only to go silent as he was struck by beams from all 3 of the remaining golems. He dropped to the ground lifelessly. "No, Vincenzo," Angelo made to go back, but Giuseppe hauled him forward roughly. "Leave him, he's already gone," the man snarled, snapping off 3 more shots that managed to down 2 of the pursuing statuettes. "How?" Francesco screamed from ahead, the others looking around in horror to see a horse-sized golem shaped like an earth dragon smash him into the wall in an explosion of blood and gore with one mighty paw. "Francesco, you god-bedamned abominations," Antonio roared, throwing aside his pistol to take a double-handed grip on his light sword and charging. He leapt forward when he was within a few feet of the golem, slicing at the murderous statue with a powerful overhand strike. The blade, a length of bluish-white light shaped like the blade of an arming sword, slammed into the thick earthen form of the golem and barely managed to crack into its stone hide. "Imp!" Antonio blinked in disbelief before a giant mouth bit down on him, ripping his head off in a fountain of blood. "Antonio!" Angelo shrieked, firing wildly at the monster that killed his comrade, peppering it with light bullets to no effect. "Damn it, we're geared for dealing with devils and vamps, not a bunch of enchanted rocks," Giuseppe thought in horror, finally realizing just how deep they were in. "Against anything that's not attuned to shadow, our gear's only slightly more powerful than normal blades and bullets. Against small, light attackers like those flying idols, that was sufficient enough, but something as big and solid as that dragon golem, they'd need to have at least a dozen men swamping it in gunfire just to have a hope of taking one of them down." He only had one option left. "Chew on this," the stray exorcist roared out, pulling a silver sphere from his belt and throwing it directly into the monster's still bloody maw. It was a perfect throw, one that would normally fill him with a bit of pride. Only this time, all he felt was a grim satisfaction as the light grenade went off in the back of the damned golem's mouth, blowing the entire back half of its head off as the rest of its body collapsed. Meanwhile, Angelo had managed to take out the last of the flying statuettes. As the shattered remains fell to the ground, the medic collapsed to his knees. "What are we going to do now?" he croaked out. "3 of us are gone. We can't get back out the way we came in with the teleporter under the control of the enemy," Giuseppe growled out, pulling his last comrade back to his feet. "We have no choice but to continue. We have to survive, for the sake of our fallen brethren if nothing else." "Damn it," Angelo cursed out, before he redoubled his grip on his exorcist gun. "I am going to bring the hammer of judgment down onto whatever bastard designed this nightmare. I swear it. You and me both," Giuseppe grunted out, slapping the man lightly on the arm before they started moving again. The 2 remaining exorcists moved forward far more cautiously this time, managing to avoid the remaining monsters as they navigated through the maze. Giuseppe set off a trap that fired hundreds of little darts, but the protections on his vestments were at least strong enough that he didn't get worse than a couple of scratches. At last, they found themselves in front of a large set of double doors that creaked open ominously at their approach. Exchanging wary looks, the pair of stray exorcists readied their weapons and carefully advanced through the dark doorway. The room inside was immediately lit up by torches, showing it to be far larger than the 2 had thought, and for good reason. Standing in the center was a massive version of the annoying flying statuettes, at least a dozen meters tall. Unlike the lesser copies, it was made of what looked like silver and gold, with a pair of white wings seeming emerging from its back. As they watched, in terror, the triple claws on the ends of its arms rotated and snapped together. GG Usep ... what ... Angelo whispered in a terrified voice. What in the father's name ... is ... that. As if in answer, words written in what looked like blood appeared above its head as it rotated around slowly to look right at them. Shakoman, the divine metal Dagu. Trouble, Giuseppe said grimly, readying himself for what he was certain would be his last battle. The last thing he saw was a blazing flash of red light. Later, outside Issei's base. Any luck? Niddle asked. No. Rainier bit out in frustration as she tried fruitlessly to open the portal again, to no avail. The teleportal locked down as soon as the exorcists passed through. When we got here it was merely concealed and inactive, now it's completely sealed up. Until the strays manage to find their way out, we're completely cut off from them. And communication magic isn't working either. Calawarner hissed in a fury. Just what the fuck is going on? If I had a secret underground base that could only be reached by teleporter, one of the things I'd do would be to interdict any unauthorized communication magic. Middle snorted, crossing her arms under her small chest. Basics of the basics, tits for brains. What did you call me, you flat-chested shrimp? The brunette shrieked back. Oh, shut up, both of you. Donasik rumbled from his position leaning against a tree. Hearing you screech and needle each other is worse than nails on a chalkboard. If you two can't talk like civilized beings, then just don't talk to each other. Just then, the teleportation circle reappeared and disgorged a heap of corpses only vaguely recognizable as the bodies of the 5 stray priests, who had gone in to scout ahead. A single note of white paper hung above them with a single word printed on it. Next, son of a bitch, Calawarner swore, covering her nose with one hand. What the fuck happened in there? It looks like someone really went to town on them. One was shot several times by something hot enough to cauterize his flesh on impact. The only male present noted clinically as he stepped forward and began looking over the remains. If there was one thing Donasik knew, it was fighting, and he could at least tell the cause of most of these injuries. That one looks like they were hit by something with enough blunt force to splatter them, while this one had his head bitten off by something pretty big. Whatever it was had fairly blunt teeth too. These last two look like they were hit by something similar to the first one, only worse. Their lower bodies were completely incinerated and the flesh at the edge was completely carbonated. They certainly didn't die easy. Middle scowled at the paper. Next, is whoever did this trying to provoke us? We're dealing with one brazen bastard, aren't we? Quite, Rainier agreed, one eye twitching as she scowled at the note, before something occurred to her. I think we've found the lair of the one who was responsible for crippling Armeros the Lesser and forcing her to flee. That made all 3 of the other fallen straighten up. Although slightly weaker than Rainier and Donasik, Armeros the Lesser had still been a fairly powerful fallen. To have driven her into a corner and wound her to the degree that she had been, whoever was responsible for this was clearly more dangerous than they'd first believed. Well, even if whoever this is could take on Armeros the Lesser, surely they can't defeat all 4 of us. Calawarner scoffed, trying to reassert her usual pride. We're invading the lair of a sacred gear user, Calawarner. Raina reminded her. For all we know, we might be going up against the holder of one of the 13 Longinus. Impossible. The blue-haired woman scoffed. Divine diving, absolute demise and cannies like Haon are allied with the Grigori. True Longinus, Annihilation Maker and Dimension Lost are rumored to belong some human mercenary group calling itself the Hero Faction. Zenith Tempest is under the control of the Church. Regulus Nemia has been spotted in the devil side of the underworld. Sephiroth Grawl is under the control of the Teeps faction of vampires. Incinerate Anthem is owned by Hexenact, and Innovate Clear and Telos Karma are under the control of Cross Time's Kiss. The only one not active right now is the Boosted Gear, and all of them tend to be power idiots, not mages. She caught the surprised looks on her teammates' faces and scowled. What? Knowing which factions have the sacred gears with the potential to kill a god is just common sense. Rainier decided to ignore the display of unusual competence from the bimbo, as she was certain that if she didn't, reality would break from the sheer impossibility of Calawarner saying something actually intelligent. Well then, I believe we should decide whether to head in now, or go and grab more stray exorcists, she said after she teleported the remains of the unfortunate 5 men back to the church. Of course we're going now, Calawarner sneered. Just because those idiot humans got their asses kicked, doesn't mean that we will. We're far more powerful than them. If this is the sacred gear user that fought Armeros the Lesser to a standstill, you bimbo bitch, The leader of the four sound just so done with her, then he or she will know just how powerful one of the fallen is. If they haven't planned accordingly in preparing the defenses of their base, then I will be very surprised. Huh, a fine chance to test our mettle then. Issei boomed. Let us go forth then. Muscle-bound, battle-brained moron. Rainier thought as she deadpanned at him. All of his brains were either in his muscles or his dick. I hate to say it, Rainier, but I agree with these two. Middle said with a sigh. We've been challenged by this guy. We need to put him in his place, and retreating will be seen as a sign of weakness. Rainier thought as she cursed the stupid pride of her race. The one-word taunt from their adversary was forcing her hand more effectively than the total defeat of her scouting party. Okay, fine. The fallen leader sighed. But no screwing around. No going herring off on your own. No lagging behind, and if I tell you to hold off on attacking, do as I Lord be cursed tell you. Her glare to all of her subordinates told them that she was deadly serious. Fine, let's get this over with already. Calawarner muttered rebelliously, looking away from Rainier, as if to feign that she wasn't intimidated by the older fallen. Issei looked unhappy that he was essentially being put on a leash, but he also bowed to Rainier's will. Middle was already on Rainier's side, but she nodded in agreement with her anyway. With that, the four fallen stepped onto the teleportal and activated it, vanishing in a flash of light to their target. When they arrived, there was nothing but darkness around them, which was relieved by them summoning forth weapons of light. Illumination of neon pink, pale blue, golden yellow and light pink filled the area. Suddenly, music filled the room they were in, and a voice started singing, of all things. This is the Guild of Dungeoneering, on a quest we're never fearing. Oh, to be a dungeoneer, swimming in pools of gold. This is the Guild of Dungeoneering, all the monsters keep appearing. Oh, to be a dungeoneer, whose stories will be told. What's that sound? I hear a noise. Something's coming, girls and boys. Run for the hills and far away. We're the Guild of Dungeoneering. Curse and swear, but don't despair. The way out of here'll be over there. I think we're lost, but what do we care? We're the Guild of Dungeoneering. Well, that pretty much tosses any chance that the bastard wasn't mocking us, Rainier stated evenly, cold fury burning in her eyes. Screw planning. She was going to enjoy gutting this bastard. Issei, you take point. Calawarner, you take the rear. Middle, you fly up and act as a spotter. We'll smash this place and make this bastard regret mocking the fallen of Grigori. In his core room, Hyoto Issei leaned back on his throne, laced his hands together and smirked. Time to see what these fallen were really made of. Chapter 19, Fallen vs. the Gamer's Dungeon. 1 hour previously, Murayama Keiko's room, Murayama Residence, Kyoto City. It wasn't a particularly uncommon occurrence for the captain and vice-captain of the Kyoto Academy Kendo Club to spend the night at each other's houses. Training schedules needed to be created and reviewed, tournament applications filled out and team rosters selected, and they had to review the performance of the various first years. The two girls had been close friends long before they'd even started attending Kyoto Academy, so it had always made more sense for them to take a single night a week to work through it all in the comfort of one of their homes rather than slogging through it in bits and pieces after practice every day. However, that wasn't the reasons for tonight's gathering. To be completely honest, both girls had been shaken, quite severely shaken, by recent events and were taking comfort in familiar company. And why shouldn't they? They'd both been kidnapped by a secret society of militant, cold-blooded bastards who had been prepared to experiment and torture them in the most grisly of fashions simply because they apparently had special powers. Then, directly after that, their blinders to the world of the supernatural had been ripped away, and now they had to deal with the fact that there was at least a baker's dozen of devils inhabiting their safe haven in the most influential of positions. So yes, it wasn't all that surprising that the girls wanted to stay with someone else who could understand what they were going through. That was also why there were 2 more attendees to tonight's gathering than normal, with both Kuryueka and Abe Kiyom attending as well. I haven't gotten a chance to spend much time away from my house after school for ages. Well, outside of tennis club activities anyway. And I don't think I've ever been to a sleepover before. How exciting. The Beast Tamer heiress offered cheerfully, dressed in a pair of loose shorts and an overly large t-shirt as pajamas. It actually looked quite fetching on her. Got to admit that this is a first for me as well. Kuryu chimed in, smirking slightly. She'd teased them a bit about wearing a negligee when they'd first invited her, but she was currently dressed in a simple set of flannel pajamas, albeit with a few more buttons undone than some would consider decent. No one wanted to risk the rumors inviting the female perverted glasses over would cause. Idiots. Murayama huffed unhappily. She was currently dressed in her own pajamas, a rather cute set with pink kitten designs. Not something many would expect the tough girl of the Kendo Club to wear. To be fair, you do leer at the other girls in the changing room after PE, Kuryu. Cadace pointed out. She was dressed in her own set of loose baby blue pajamas. Look but don't touch, the bespectacled girl replied with an uncaring shrug. Besides, I always make sure that I keep my eyes on the ones that won't be too bothered by it, like you two, or the ones that will take it as a compliment. That is oddly gallant of you, the pink-haired kendo captain offered, blinking slightly in surprise. Kuryu flinched slightly at that. Cadace-chan, I know I don't act much like it, but I am a girl, you know. Being called gallant is just, oops. The pinkette absently scratched at her cheek in embarrassment. So Eika-chan, what's this I've been hearing about you going out with Hyoto-kun? Kiyom asked curiously. We're dating now, the bespectacled brunette confirmed. It started as just a cover so the four of us could talk in private after school, but we decided to give it a go. I don't have any complaints so far. Really now, who would have guessed? The self-proclaimed future harem king turns out to be a proper gentleman. The third year pressed on, her interest obvious. I honestly think getting attacked in his own home gave him a really strong wake-up call. Kuryu offered with a frown. Damned flaming fucks. Indeed. Kiyom agreed, not the bit bothered by the other girls' rough language in regards to their attempted tormentors. I simply cannot understand how such a group could have gone unnoticed before this. She'd made her own discreet inquiries using some of the contacts her family had cultivated over the years about the organization after they'd been rescued by the Red Knight. So far, nothing she'd gotten back had even hinted that these purifiers even existed, let alone that they'd been hunting down and murdering who knows how many supernatural beings and empowered humans for what has to have been at least several years. From what we saw, and the red guy said they tend to avoid using magic. Wouldn't that make it harder for most supernaturals to notice them? Murayama asked, a confused look crossing her face. Kiyom snorted slightly. Not as much as you'd initially believe. The beast tamer answered with a shake of her head. Most supernatural factions try to keep as up-to-date with modern technology as possible, to better ensure the veil of secrecy is properly maintained. I know for a fact that the Devils and Fallen both have divisions that specialize in keeping mundane organizations from stumbling across the supernatural, not to mention the church itself. It simply doesn't make sense that these people could have kidnapped so many beings without anyone becoming aware of it. Surveillance footage, a spell imprint of an area. There should have been at least some hint of them before now. If what that Kitsune kid was saying was true, then this branch mostly targeted isolated and migrant yakai. Cadace pointed out thoughtfully. It stands to reason that any other branches would do the same, if they were involved in attacks at all. How common are supernaturals like that? Fairly common, I suppose. Kiyom offered after a moment's thought. While most of the larger groups of supernatural beings tend to gather together under the various factions to defend against external threats, many are also solitary and individualistic creatures by nature. The yakai, for example, all pledge their loyalty to either Empress Yasaka in Kyoto or Emperor Nururihan in Tokyo. But that's mostly to simply present a united front. Most remain fairly independent, so individuals or even small groups going missing could go unnoticed for quite some time. And that Kitsune we met did claim to be affiliated with Empress Yasaka. You know, hearing you talk about this so casually just makes the fact that the supernatural is real stand out all the more. Murayama offered with a tired sigh. Meh, I've got a constant reminder of that on hand. Eika offered with a shrug, momentarily manifesting her sacred gear before dismissing it. And hadn't that come as a shock for Kiyom, finding that Kuryu Eika of all people had a sacred gear, even a relatively common one like one of the staring lights. To add to that particular mystery, it was a subspecies in even its base form, which she had never even heard of before, and someone had managed to partially seal it without the other girl's knowledge. Do you have any idea who could have sealed it in the first place? She couldn't help but ask. Any old family members who were Shinto priests, or the like, or perhaps a married and family member who acted oddly. Afraid not. I'm pretty much estranged with my family, have been since I was old enough to live on my own. Kuryu replied with a shake of her head. As for other family members, it's always been just my parents and me as far as I know. Dad mentioned that he was an orphan once and my mum never wanted to talk about her side of the family. And what exactly do they do for a living? The third year pressed. Dad's your standard salaryman for some computer company. Mum was working in a pawn shop last time I talked with her. The bespectacled girl replied with an uncaring shrug. She's kind of a freeter, works odd jobs and part-time jobs instead of working full-time anywhere. Please don't ask why. Last time I did, I got a rant about the evils of Japanese working culture. Okay, Cadace offered with a blink. She was starting to get a picture of just why her new friend's behavior was so unorthodox. But like I said before, we're estranged. Hell, we've honestly never been really close. They were always more like roommates, ex-roommates now I guess with credit cards than what most would call parents anyway. Kuryu pointed out, waving a hand absently through the air. Anyway, why does it matter who sealed my staring armored red in the first place? Because they could have very well noticed that the seal's been broken and try to reseal it. Hyum pointed out earnestly, before she paused and began to look thoughtful. Although that would be close to impossible now that you've learned how to manifest it at will. Seals like the one formerly placed on your sacred gear work by inserting something akin to a mystic divide between the user's mind and the target, preventing the victim's intent from reaching its target. Now that you've learned to manifest it at will, that means there is a direct link forged between your mind and where staring armored red resides within your own soul. Attempting to block such a connection would require not only a far more powerful seal but could also lead to serious brain damage even if it was successful. And that's for a regular practitioner of average skill. The ham-handed way that the seal was emplaced on you clearly shows that whoever tried to originally seal it away either didn't understand what they were doing, or was working off some form of misconception. Well, isn't that just a cheery thought? The bespectacled underclassman offered dryly. That just means I should probably get Issei to put a rush on contacting Mr. Red. We really need to get a name for that guy while we're at it. Cadace let out a tired sigh. The world has changed so much in just a few days, she moaned out, mourning the loss of her simple and stable world. The world hasn't changed, Cadace-chan. Hyum offered her a friendly correction. The way you see it has just been expanded. Guess you're right about that. The petite Pinkette let out a bark of disbelieving laughter. I mean, just look at Hyodo. I swear it's like the guy who used to peep on us had a twin brother without the overwhelming perviness, and they've suddenly switched places. He still has a real liking for the female form, but he's at least polite about it now. It's unbelievable. I think Eika-chan had it right. Nearly dying must have really made him rethink his life and pushed him down a different path. So maybe you can back off on him like he's backed off of peeping. It's only fair, Ryako. Yuriyama offered to her friend and captain. Yeah, I guess. He did send Mr. Mercenary to save our asses, so I do owe him that much. Cadace agreed with a grumble. The other two pervs are still fair game though. My Murayama-san. Hyum giggled a bit, smirking at the brunette Kendoka. Given your ardent defense of him, might it be that his recent actions have begotten a crush of some kind? WH what? Murayama sputtered embarrassed indignation, turning bright red at the words of her senior before rapidly raising her hands and waving them in front of her face in frantic denial. Don't be ridiculous, Abe-senpai. That's just just ridiculous. Besides, he's already dating Eika. Methinks the lady doth protest too much. Kuryu smirked, glasses flashing as she leered at her fellow brunette, eyes raking Murayama up and down her body. Can't say I'd mind myself. Issei does want to be a harem king. Poor Murayama looked like a deer in headlights as she was flirted with by the other girl. Face approaching neon red in color as all the blood in her body, or so it seemed, rushed upwards. Cadace wasn't much better, eyes darting between her best friend and vice captain and Kuryu with an almost poleaxed expression on her face. Now, Kuryu-chan. Abe scolded her lightly. No rushing things. Make sure you've established yourself as the legal wife before bringing mistresses into the mix. Abe-senpai, Murayama squeaked. How can you be so calm about the idea of a harem? Cadace finally managed to voice her disbelief. Polygamy isn't all that uncommon in the supernatural realm, my dear. Hyum offered her straight-laced juniors an impish smile at their incredulous expressions. Don't forget, I have been attending Kyo knowing full well the nature of my more exotic classmates and have learned more than a bit of their culture through sheer osmosis. It is quite common for male devils to have harems. I believe even Ria's own father, Zeoticus, has a fairly substantial one. And they're just one example of the more hedonistic sides of the supernatural realm. From what I've heard, Hyodo-kun would likely make quite the fine devil, given the nature of his desires. Ho ho ho. Eika giggled ominously, her glasses gleaming. Well now, doesn't that just give me all kinds of ideas? Dear gods, what have we unleashed? Murayama groaned with a facepalm. Back with the fallen, first floor of Issei's base. What the? Vettel yelped as she tried, and failed, to take to the air per Rainer's orders. What the hell is going on? It feels like someone dipped my wings in cement. Before any of the other fallen could do more than blink in surprise at her sudden exclamation, a luminescent window appeared in the air directly in front of the group with a message written on it in neat block script. Dungeon Law. By order of the Dungeon Master, no flight abilities gained from natural wings, spells, magical abilities or items, artifacts are allowed outside of very particular areas of the dungeon, all of which are clearly marked. This is your only warning. Further violations of the law will result in punishment. The flying fuck? Calawarner asked as she stared incredulously at the window. Dungeon. What the hell? Donasik agreed, absently scratching at the side of his head in confusion. Oh fuck me running. Rainier felt a headache brewing. They'd barely stepped into the place and there were already oddities abound. So, should we try and see if we can push through this law? The only male fallen in their group asked in honest confusion. No, it's not worth the risk just yet, Rainier replied, scowling as the window quickly faded from sight before she could get a chance to scan it. We have no idea what kind of punishment this strange magic could bring down on us if we push it. For all we know, it could cause an instant decapitation or something. This guy wants to set the rules for this little hike. Fine, it'll make it all the more satisfying when we beat him at his own game. Looking around at the dull brown walls, Rainier couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. Probably by the master of this place. Only an idiot would set up this kind of intricate maze without also having a way to monitor anyone who enters it as well. After all, great, we're stuck doing a fucking rat run, she thought bitterly. Being forced to dance along to someone else's tune was already starting to rub her pride as a fallen raw. She was the one who was supposed to have these pathetic mortals dancing to her whims, damn it. More than that, the mere fact that a human was responsible for this was only making it all worse. Rainier would honestly admit that she looked down on humans. She'd admit that some of them could be quite useful, like sacred gear holders, but as a race, they were simply inferior when compared to her and her kin. Gather up 100 of the most skilled human soldiers in the world, arm them all to the teeth with the latest modern military equipment, and she was still quite certain that she could easily slaughter them all within 15 minutes, 10 if she actually put some effort into it. Alright, let's get moving. I want out of this fucking maze as quickly as possible, she ordered, getting her trio of subordinates back on track. Keep an eye out for any traps or enemies. I very much doubt that those stray exorcists killed each other out of boredom. Midalt, stick with me. As the youngest member of her flock sauntered over to her, Rainier took the time to withdraw her wings back into her body. Keeping them out if she couldn't use them was pointless, and they'd likely just get in the way in tunnels like these. With the rest of her subordinates following her cue, the four fallen advanced cautiously, none of them willing to be killed as easily as their human canaries had been. This vigilance paid off when they spotted the first of the flying pottery figures speeding towards them. The hell is that thing? Calawarner asked with a scoff. The floating piece of pottery certainly didn't look all that threatening. I believe the local humans call them Dagu or something along those lines, Midalt replied with a cant to her head. Seconds later, the fallen were all forced to leap to the sides in order to dodge a sudden beam of bright green light fired from the now glowing statuette's eyes. Holy shit, Donasik responded far more violently, instinctively forming a light spear before hurling it at the flying pottery doll. His weapon hit dead center, shattering the small golem to pieces in an instant. HMPH. Well, that was a bit disappointing. His confident and bored mien was completely shattered when he caught sight of a half-dozen more of the Dagu flying out of the connecting passages towards them, all of their eyes already starting to glow. Dumbass, take them out, Rainier shouted, forming her own light spear and hurling it at one of the onrushing golems, only to curse violently as it managed to swerve out of the way of her weapon. Growling in annoyance, she formed a new one as her first shattered into motes of light as it impacted the wall. Most fallen could initially only manifest and wield a single spear of light at a time. With time and practice, however, even a two-winged fallen could learn how to manifest as many as 8 or 10 spears at once. The late and unlamented Armeros the Lesser had been quite puissant in that particular skill, capable of summoning up to 4 despite her relatively young age. Rainier herself could call forth 6 at once, while Donasik could manage 5 on a good day. The other 2 were stuck at 1 each, though Midalt was at least close to managing 2. For now, Rainier was keeping her extra spears as a hidden card up her sleeves, just in case Armeros the Lesser had been too badly hurt to use multiple light spears early on, though she honestly doubted that stubborn bitch would have been forced to flee without putting up one hell of a fight first. Gah. Predictably, Calawarner was the first to feel the sting of the eye beams and was blasted into one of the walls. The beams honestly did little actual damage to the fallen's iron skin, but it did ruin her barely their top, leaving her stupidly large breasts flopping out. Put your tits away and start fighting instead of posing, Midalt shouted, slicing one Dagu in half with an expert twirl of her own weapon. Fuck you, you lowly baba. The brunette snarled as she called a spare top from her quarters at the church and slid it on before getting back into the fray. Who are you calling old? Midalt growled. The lowly part she didn't mind so much as she was still had a few more decades of growing to do. In case you've forgotten, you're literally twice as old as I am. Fucking hell, both of you shut up and focus. Rainier snapped as she smashed the last of the doggo with an almost negligent slash of her light spear. Letting down your guard like that was probably how our Meros the Lesser got herself fucked up so badly. That was bit better, though it was still lacking. Donasik grumbled maliciously as he ignored the squabbling of his female companion, and instead took a close look at the surrounding maze. The maze itself is basic, merely designed to distract and slow down intruders, but the multiple paths do offer several routes and directions for threats to come from. Some magic to negate flying in order to give the small, highly mobile guard golems a clear advantage against slower enemies. Altogether not bad. 6 out of 10 for the design, but only a 4 on the actual performance. I'm so glad you're enjoying yourself. Calla spat as she adjusted her new top. Her bra had been destroyed along with her favorite jacket, and the sensations of her bare, sensitive breasts against the somewhat rougher material of her new coat was really distracting. Let us continue onward. The male Fallen simply waved Calla off in dismissal. There are likely far more worthy targets awaiting us. Rainier and Middle exchanged an exasperated glance that just screamed, "Why do we have to deal with this fucking meathead?" to anyone that saw them, before continuing onward into the maze. With IsseiXHarem, well hell, the Sekyude sighed as he gazed at the images of the 4 Fallen wandering around his base's first floor. The levels here were a bit odd. Rainier LV40, Fallen 1, Flock Leader enamored of Azazel. Middle LV25, Born Fallen. Calla LV18, Cotter Descendant, Born Fallen, Promiscuous 1. Donasik LV37, Born Fallen, Battle Junkie. Donasik, the only male among the group, was going to be a problem. There was simply no way that someone would get the Battle Junkie title unless it was a very large part of who they were. That likely meant that getting the male Fallen to surrender would be all but impossible. Issei was already mentally writing the guy off as too dangerous to even try to capture. Calla, the one who had given him a great show when her top had been destroyed, on the other hand, was one that he was definitely going to have to capture alive, if only because of her Cotter Descendant title. Killing someone who was directly related to one of the Cotter was simply not a risk he was willing to take at the moment, mostly because he didn't want a level 1000 fallen angel to come and scour him from the face of the earth. Thank you very much. As for the other two, Rainier and Middle, they were, by comparison, not out of the ordinary. Rainier was apparently in love with Azazel, who was supposedly the leader of the Fallen if Issei's recent forays into research were anything close to accurate. Both she and Donasik were also at a higher level than our Meros the Lesser, which was somewhat worrisome, especially given that she on her own had been nearly enough to kill him. The Goth lowly Fallen, Middle, had the second lowest level out of the 4 Fallen. But Issei knew that she would likely be harder to fight than a regular monster of the same level. Someone's level was only a general guide to how strong any given individual was, not an absolute one. A level 100 rat would very likely get its furry behind kicked by a level 1 god, after all. Thus far, the Doggo golems couldn't so much as scratch the Fallen. The one solid hit his initial attack group had managed to land had been completely tanked by the innate racial ability Iron Skin that all angels, pure and fallen alike, possessed. After dealing with the stray exorcists earlier, there were still just over a dozen of them left on the first floor, along with 3 golem dragons stomping about. He doubted that the larger golems would be able to do any serious damage to the Fallen, or even hit them at all actually. The only thing likely to even manage to hold them up and significantly weaken them would be the floor bosses that barred the way to the deeper floors. Issei grimaced slightly as he realized most of his bosses likely weren't going to survive the night. Preparing them had taken the largest chunk of his time and attention when he'd been assembling his defensive labyrinth. First, he'd had to select the boss's base form from one of his available monster types. Then he'd had to designate 2 roles that the boss would fulfill, such as attacker and wide area damage dealer, and then he would have to name it and customize its appearance. Once all of that had been handled, he then had to grow the boss in its boss chamber, fueling the process with mana until it was ready to emerge. So yes, creating his bosses was a long and involved process that had taken several hours of work, and now they were all Anyway, the floor bosses were at about the same level as Rainier, so the Fallen should be able to beat them fairly easily if they work together. But given the obvious divide between the Rainier, Middle and Calla Donasik pairs and the obvious friction between both groups, he very much doubted it would be that simple. Still, it promised to be quite the show. What was that old saying that I heard on a TV show once? A house divided against itself cannot defend against threats without, or something like that. The gamer mused as the Fallen encountered 2 of the 3 golem dragons and started fighting them. If nothing else, the defensive ability of the earthen dragons was top-notch. All chucking a couple of light spears at them managed to accomplish was to just chip away at their skin and nothing more. He blinked as this just seemed to pique Donasik's interest, and the battle-crazy Fallen leapt into the fray, stabbing and slicing with a light spear that was more like a naginata than a spear. Interestingly enough, it seemed that so long as the light weapons didn't leave their creator's hands, they were far more difficult to disperse than when they were thrown. Good to know. They hadn't come across any traps as of yet, as Issei had deactivated all of the ones on the first floor. Better to have them nice and unobservant on the second floor so that they stepped without looking. Besides, it wasn't as if a half-dozen springboard and pitfall traps were going to do anything more than annoy these four. Let's see how you handle SeerKing, Fallen, the Sekyude offered softly. Later, door to the floor 1 boss room. We are not going to waste our time hunting every enemy on every floor of this place, Donasik. Rainier growled out flatly, one eye twitching violently in irritation. The blood-crazy fool had run off hunting for every golem and construct on the damn floor after those stone dragon-shaped golems had gotten his bloodlust up and running and they'd been forced to chase after him. It had been an utter waste of time. It is never a wise idea to leave foes at one's back, Lady Rainier. The battle junkie tried to justify himself. These are fucking golems, you dimwit. They attack on sight or follow a preset patrol route, that's it. The leader of their small flock ground out in frustration. They've got more rocks in their heads than you do. The odds of them actually having a cunning plan are even worse than yours. Now come on, let's get this over and done with. Striding towards the huge doors that just screamed entrance to a choke point to her, she was entirely unsurprised when they swung open towards her automatically. Beckoning her subordinates to follow after her, she stepped through. As Calawarner reluctantly brought up the rear, the doors once again moved on their own, slamming shut behind them and locking them in with whatever trap was waiting inside. The entire situation was ringing some very familiar bells in Rainier's head, but she simply couldn't place it. Christ on a crutch, what's happening now? Calawarner snapped out as she began to warily examine the dimly lit and surprisingly spacious chamber, when a pair of large slits began to glow a bright red on the opposite end of the room. She only gaped for a second before she was suddenly reminded of the wounds dealt to the final pair of stray exorcists, and she practically threw herself to one side. The action likely saved her from a lot of pain as a pair of red beams lanced through the air where she'd been standing mere seconds before, leaving a pair of deeply scorched craters in the ground where they struck. Then the torches around the room suddenly flared to life, brightly illuminating the entire chamber and revealing the single largest dogu that any of the Fallen had ever seen. Easily towering over them, the massive construct was made of what looked to be silver and gold and festooned with several gemstones, red letters forming in the air above its head to announce their opponent's identity. SeerKing, the divine metal dogu. Damn it to hell. I hope you're fucking happy now, Donasik, because it looks like we've found that fight you were hunting for. Rainier offered Faux calmly. Stay mobile and dodge those fucking laser eyes. Hit it back hard and fast. Go. Eramitama. A slightly tinny and surprisingly high voice rumbled out from the massive golem as its eyes lit up once again. This time it was aiming for Donasik, who leapt to the side and quickly counter-attacked by hurling a large light spear of his own. Sakimitama. SeerKing rumbled again, this time causing the gem set in the center of its chest to glow brightly as a shining blue barrier of light formed in front of its body, blocking the spear before fading away again. Eramitama. Another pair of bright red beams of light fired from its eyes, this time flying at Rainier, who hadn't stopped moving since the first blast had been fired. The titanic dogu's head turned to follow her as she moved, leaving it open for the other three Fallen to rush in it. Nijimitama. The silver and gold dogu proclaimed, a hatch built into its hips, which had previously looked like a yin-yang symbol set in a sunburst, clicked open and released a wave of pottery discs, each emblazoned with the same yin-yang symbol, at the three onrushing Fallen, which promptly started detonating like fucking grenades on impact. You have got to be fucking kidding me. Rainier practically shrieked in her own head. Long-range beams, a barrier shield to protect from ranged attacks, and now a short-range bomb spam to keep anyone from getting close. Who fucking built this thing? Middlet. We're going to draw the bastard's fire. Get in close and stab this hunk of junk. Rainier ordered before she starting forming and throwing spear after spear at the damned golem. Surprisingly enough, it stopped its bomb spamming as it reactivated its shield, even as it continued to try and nail her with its eye beams. So, the thing could only use 2 of its abilities at once. That was good, as Rainier tried to keep the giant doggo's attention on her, with Calawarner and Donasek quickly joining in and spamming their own light spears from different corners. Middle quickly did as ordered and rushed forward, pink spear of light gripped tightly in one hand. She was silently quite thankful that she'd practiced running in the goth lowly dresses that she favored. Otherwise she might be in a bit of trouble here. With the other 3 fallen being constantly pelted by the laser eyes of doom and the monster focusing on forming its protective shield at the front, she should be able to slip around behind the massive construct and stab it in this back. This was so not going to work out for her. But, surprisingly enough, it actually did. With the massive metallic doggo concentrating on Rainier and the others, Middle was able to get behind it and unleash a violent barrage of stabs and slashes across the golem's back, and she was a lot stronger than she looked. In just a few moments, the massive monster's back was pockmarked with craters and scars the size of Middle's fist. Then the thing started glowing again, this time wrapping its entire body in a bright green nimbus. Middle instinctively leapt back to clear some space from a possible new attack. Kushimitama, Shakoman intoned far more softly this time as the glowing aura around it flared before fading, revealing that the massive doggy had shrunk down to the size of its smaller cousins. The 4 fallen could only gape in shock at the shrunken golem for a moment before the silver statuette blurred and vanished, only to reappear behind Calawarner a few moments later. Haramitama. It was only her instinctive reaction to that proclamation that saved Calawarner from taking a pair of smaller and brighter laser beams to the back, both nearly orange beams digging deep, smoldering furrows into the ground where she'd been standing a moment before. Then it vanished in another blur, though Rainier and Donasek were at least capable of following its movements this time, allowing them to either dodge themselves or warn their weaker compatriots. Their battle soon turned into a deadly game of tag, the 4 fallen trying everything they could to catch the shrunken golem that continued to dart about, firing off bright red, orange death beams whenever it got a chance. Rargh. Stay still, Calawarner snarled as she once more lunged at the small, annoying little bastardized thing, only for it to blur out of the path of her spear. Damn it, Rainier, you're the caster among us. Don't you have some wide area magic to at least slow this piece of scrap metal down? It is going to take us all fucking night to knock the blasted thing down on our own. Do I look like a fucking sorceress? The black-haired fallen snarled furiously as she dodged another eye blast. Donasek, stop screwing around and stab that stupid thing. Oh, very well. I suppose it has been getting a bit repetitive. The man grumbled unhappily, unwilling to end the first truly challenging fight he'd had in years. Still, he complied with his superior's orders, body lighting up with a deep blue nimbus as he used his holy power to momentarily bolster his speed and power. He shot forward like a bolt. An instant later, he was on top of the miniature golem and bisected it from cleft to crown with a single swing of his light blade. Apparently shrinking down had also sacrificed much of its defensive strength in exchange for bolstering its speed and agility. Fuck me running, that thing was tough, Middle muttered as she wilted slightly, leaning against the wall to catch her breath. What in the name of heaven and hell was that thing? A royal pain in the ass, that's what. Rainier stated grimly as she watched the 2 halves of the fallen Shakoman dissolve into so many motes of light. Again, a vague sense of familiarity about this entire setup was hammering in the back of her head, but she just couldn't seem to connect the dots. The sound of stone scarping against stone caused all 4 fallen to turn their attention toward the back of the chamber, where a large slab of stone was sliding downward, revealing a winding staircase leading down deeper into the darkness. Is that bastard really just inviting us deeper into his fucking base? He cannot be that cocky after we smashed his little toy, can he? Calawarner demanded petulantly, utterly offended by how badly they were being underestimated. Possibly, Rainier replied with a far more thoughtful frown. What we've faced so far would have been more than enough to overwhelm any number of our stray exorcists. Even that nutjob Freed likely couldn't have done much against that big fucker. I'm willing to bet that the defenses are only going to get tougher the deeper we go in. So we're basically going dungeon diving like in a video game? Middle asked, having recovered and rejoined the group. Yes, exactly Rainier agreed before she trailed off as all the little hints and incongruities she'd been noticing since she'd first entered this place fell into place and everything just clicked. Fuck me sideways, we're in the lair of one of the hosts of the gamer's gear. The what? Calawarner looked befuddled, while Middle blanched at the revelation and Donasek merely looked intrigued. The god fucking damn gamer's gear, the fallen leader snapped out impatiently. They're a set of sacred gears just a step below the 13 Longinus in terms of raw power. There's only 2 of them in existence, one blue and said to represent the primordial earth goddess Gaia, and one orange representing the primordial abysmal god Tartarus. The 2 variants have a rivalry that's every bit as long and bloody as the one between the wielders of boosted gear and divine dividing. The only difference is that the Tartarus gaming gear normally takes the role of the villain while the Gaia gaming gear's holder acts as the hero. I can only hope we're dealing with the latter. Why? The BlueNet Fallen prodded. Because the Tartarus gear holders usually tend to live up to the whole evil villain SH as in a number of them would have made Freed look like an actual fucking saint by comparison. Rainer stated with more than a bit of distaste. I don't know if the thing has some way of selecting twisted wielders or if it has some kind of corruptive effect on anyone born with it, but nearly every wielder of that thing has turned out to be sadistic, immoral, or just plain fucking nuts. And more often than not they end up a mix of all 3, and then some. There's been exceptions, of course, but none of them have ever been pleasant individuals. So if we're dealing with the orange one, then the nun's probably dead already. Calla Warner asked curiously, looking slightly cheerful at the prospect of Asia being dead. Dead, desecrated, and possibly even eaten. Like I said, Tartarus gamers tend to be fucked up individuals. Their leader growled out, and don't sound so happy about the possibility, you damned bimbo. Don't forget that if we lose her, then our careers are literally going to take fucking centuries of hard work to rebuild. Particularly for you and Donaseek, rather than me and Middles. What? Why? The battle junkie demanded, suddenly far more invested in the conversation. Remind me, who is it that let Asia Argento just wander off without so much as sending a stray exorcist to keep an eye on her? Middle responded sweetly, a sickly smile on her lips. I know that Rainier and I were at Grigori HQ giving our scheduled reports as ordered at the time. But what about the 2 of you? The 2 morons blanched in horror as they finally realized just how deep in the shit they were if Asia was even slightly ruffled from her experience. Both Fallen rushed down the stairs as if the hounds of hell were nipping at their heels. I know I should be worried about how bad this is going to look on the 2us ... but that was just so damn satisfying. Middle practically moaned out. Nicely done, Middle. Rainier nodded in appreciation. Now, I suppose we should get after them. Knowing those 2, they'll likely find trouble sooner rather than later if left on their own. The younger Fallen giggled in agreement as she followed after her superior. Later, 4th floor boss room. Fuck ... this ... shit ... Rainier groaned out, using one of her light spears to support herself and feeling more tired than she had in centuries. She'd been right that the different floors of this insane dungeon would only get more difficult the deeper they went. But she honestly hadn't been expecting this crap. The 2nd floor had introduced a 3rd type of golem in addition to the Dogu and dragon golems, something she vaguely remembered a senior angel speaking of back before she had fallen. Brick golems, a type of magical construct popular in ancient Egypt during the days of the Old Kingdom back before she had even been crafted. Then there had been the annoying traps that had littered the floor. Pitfalls, springboards, rock falls, and even walls that spat a fucking wave of darts. Nothing that could actually hurt them, but they were annoying as hell. The boss of the floor had been an even bigger pain in the ass. The occult device, Guardian Golem, was a massive collection of magically reinforced bricks, all protecting an even larger and sturdier magical core. The bricks had reshaped themselves several times during their fight, forming a pair of large, blocky arms, a massive dragon head that spat bricks like bullets, a giant raven or crow, a massive flying serpent, and even a giant, fucking spider. Luckily, it shared the same weakness as its lesser kin. Destroy the core and the entire thing crumbled. Only problem was that they had to blast or pierce their way through a shit ton of magically reinforced bricks to get at it each time, and the core hadn't been anywhere near as fragile as the ones that powered its lesser kin. The 3rd floor had even more of those damn dragon golems than anything else. Even for beings with supernaturally enhanced strength, those horse-sized masses of rubble were damned hard to cut through. Almost on the same level as a newly crafted angel's iron skin ability. And despite being as slow as fucking rocks, actually getting hit by one fucking hurt. Normally that wouldn't be a problem since they were, again, slow as fucking rocks. But with Dogu and brick golems, along with the various traps, acting as distractions, one of the lumbering brutes could actually sneak up on you. Each of them had taken at least one hit from the lesser golems on that floor, something that stung their pride fiercely. The boss of that floor had been a dragon golem that about the same size as a fucking 18-wheeler called the Crawling Dragon. It had been stupidly strong, had a hide that even their light blades couldn't pierce through, and could even breathe fucking fire. So Donaseek, the crazy little bastard that he was, had decided the best way to kill it had been to leap down its throat as it was breathing fire at them and attack from within. Surprisingly, it had worked. That did not help her newly reinforced doubts about their sole male member's sanity. On this floor, things had gotten even worse. First, the traps had changed from mere mechanical annoyances to actual magical booby traps. Electrical blasts, binding vines, slicing winds ... The list went on. Not only were they even bigger nuisances than their mechanical counterparts, but some of them could actually momentarily hinder or even hurt them. Then there were the new golems that had populated this floor. Humanoid ones that resembled the terracotta warriors of China. The blasted things were even stronger than the dragon golems, and the clay swords, spears, and arrows they wielded hurt like a bitch if they managed to hit. Even worse, they were fast enough that avoiding them actually took an effort. The only upside was that the things were far more fragile than the dragon golems, easily falling to a solid blow from any of them. Finally, there was the latest boss that they'd just finished beating. Bandari, the terracotta sorcerer, had easily been the most painful and annoying boss they'd had to face so far, able to summon fissures across the ground that erupted into geysers of molten flame and fiery rock, fire off a bright pink ray that felt like it was freezing them to the bone and made their bodies move like they were caught in slow motion if it hit, and constantly wreathed in a crackling nimbus of ice and lightning. Combine all that with the fact that the thing could summon up terracotta soldiers to defend it, and then teleport itself to somewhere else in the chamber if they actually managed to pin it down, and it had been a very long and painful fight for the fallen. None of them had come out of their little expedition unharmed. Nidult had needed to replace her dress after the crawling dragon had set her skirt ablaze, and she was still limping slightly from where one of the terracotta soldiers Bandari had summoned had caught her in the leg with a spear. Donaseek had lost his hat against the occult device, Guardian Golem, and was still looking a bit crispy from his dive into the crawling dragon's fiery maw. Not to mention that his suit was practically in tatters from all the other strikes he'd taken, though that didn't do much to affect the smile on his face. Calawarner had by far had it the worst of them. She'd been stripped so many times that she'd actually had to borrow one of Rainer's spare outfits after Bandari had gotten her with a lava blast, and she was still nursing her arm from where the occult device had gotten her in its giant fist form. Even Rainer herself hadn't emerged unscathed. She'd had to replace her own outfit once, and her body itself was covered in countless minor scrapes, cuts, and bruises. More than that, nearly all of them were mentally exhausted from the near-constant fighting. Battles in the supernatural world, barring the large-scale battles that only occurred during inter-faction wars, tended to be short and brutal affairs, with the longest lasting for a couple hours at most. The four of them had been battling their way through this accursed dungeon for at least 3 hours by now, and she doubted they were close to done yet. Ray, I am going to fucking murder the bastard who made this nightmare when I get my hands on him. Nidult swore fervently as she glowered hatefully at the already open portal leading downwards to the next level. Fuck that, let's drag the bastard back to the church and rip his sacred gear out. Calawarner growled out. It's more painful, and we might even get rewarded by Lord Azazel for providing him with such a rare sacred gear for his research. I love the idea, but it won't work. Someone else has already tried that. Rainer responded tersely. The moment it leaves its host's body, either of the gamer's gears will vanish and re-enter the sacred gear system. The stray magicians in Hexenac tried to get their hands on a version a century ago to see if they could study and replicate its powers. They lost about a quarter of their members trying and got jack squat for the effort. Shit. Calawarner swore in annoyance. Come my friends, we have yet to conquer this vile dungeon, Donaseek declared excitedly. Unlike his female companions, the male fallen seemed to have been having the time of his life tonight, injuries and all. My power roils with the excitement of a new challenge. The 3 female fallen simply stared deadpan at him for a moment, before sharing a look and, for once, coming to a completely unanimous decision. They were going to fucking geld that idiot when this was over. Then a new screen appeared floating directly above Donaseek. Attention, the Dungeon Master has awarded you with a new title. Chunibyo Fallen, a title issued to a fallen angel acting in a thoroughly embarrassing and peculiar fashion. Grants a 5% chance to confuse enemies whenever you act out in this manner. Rainer knew that she really shouldn't laugh, but she just couldn't resist. The Dungeon Master / Gamer's Gear user had perfectly summed up the way Donaseek acted in but a few simple words, and her tired mind found that hilarious. She was never going to let him forget this, and she would do everything within her power to ensure that Donaseek's new title was spread throughout Grigori. From the way Calawarner and Middle had already dissolved into giggles, she probably wasn't going to be the only one. As she started to lose her battle against her laughter, a bright red Donaseek snarled and swiped his spear through the notice, dispelling it in a flicker of light before stomping down the staircase looking ready to murder. Rainer had half expected this. Even for a fallen angel, Donaseek had always possessed far more than his fair share of pride, very much to the point of hubris. He was easily provoked, easily tricked, and far too eager to rush forward where wise men would tread carefully. It was one of the reasons she was so sure he'd never rise above his current station in Grigori. Sugar mamas be damned. Come on, we'd better go after him before he pisses the dungeon master off somehow. Rainier sighed and started after her unruly subordinate, followed by Middelt and Calawarner, with Issei. Okay, how the hell did I just do that? The gamer blinked in surprise as he watched the fallen proceed down the stairs to the fifth and final floor. He had finally figured out how to turn on sound on his in-dungeon surveillance system and had just blurted out what a Chunibyo, when Donaseek had acted well, like a goddamn bona fide Chunibyo. The next thing he knew, he'd somehow awarded the male fallen with that title. Why is that even a thing? Issei wondered in bemusement, not for the first time since discovering this part of the dungeon system. Before shaking his head and putting the issue to one side for the moment. It would keep until after he'd dealt with his unwanted guests. Leaning back in his throne, the Sekiryude grinned. Floors 1 through 4 had been designed mostly to tire the fallen out and get a read on their general level of combat skill. Floor 5 was intended to actually take them down. Aside from 1 or 2 terracotta soldiers that were patrolling the area, all of the monsters on that floor were eternal mud golems. He had bet, and apparently he had made a safe bet, that the fallen lacked any kind of wide area attacking skills, making the liquid golems their biggest weakness, without a way to quickly damage them enough to overwhelm their high-speed HP regeneration, or destroy 95% of their bodies in one go to overcome their high-speed body regeneration. The 4 fallen had no possible way of defeating one eternal mud golem without a protracted fight, let alone the dozen or so that Issei had stationed on the floor. If they decided to try and take refuge in the boss room well, the boss was going to be a bit of a shock for them. Issei had taken quite some time in designing and building it. Even if the fallen could somehow beat every single one of the eternal mud golems on the floor, they couldn't beat the boss he'd built. Now then, I wonder what these fallen will think of this floor, he wondered with a grin. Chapter 20, Ooze Avatar, Crawling Chaos. 5th floor of the gamer's dungeon. Cautiously leaving the safety of the stairwell, Rainier, Middelt, and Calawarner could only balk as they caught sight of the enemy that Donaseek was furiously hacking away at with his light spear. It was a brown-black mass of ooze, about the size of an exercise ball, that looked like it had more than a bit of petrol in its makeup. Even worse, every time Donaseek's blade of light managed to carve a line through or gouge out a chunk of the amorphous mass, it would quickly seal itself up again in a matter of seconds, seemingly none the worse for wear. A little help would be appreciated, here. Donaseek bellowed in annoyance as he once more attempted to bisect the thing, only for the halves to start rejoining before he was even completely through. So much for the unstoppable warrior Donaseek, not even capable of killing a bloody slime on his own. Calawarner sneered distastefully. Dressed in one of Rainier's spare bondage bikini, she looked even more alluringly sexual than normal. You can sneer after you manage to kill this fucking pain in the ass. The male fallen spat back as he hastily dodged a stabbing tendril and hacked it off, only for the removed portion to slither back across the floor and rejoin the main mass. Oh, come on. Right, head in the game, ladies. The fact that Donaseek can't seem to put the thing down permanently likely means it's hiding a trick or two. Rainier snapped out, sending the brunette bimbo a quelling glare as she spoke. That regeneration can't be normal. Even normal slime creatures can't recover from being bisected like that. If this thing is anything like the other guardians we've fought our way through on the way down, then there has to be some way off killing it permanently. I can't see any kind of core from here, Middelt pointed out from where she'd been watching the slime-like creature. Don't most slimes have a core that acts as their brain? Nodding, Rainier formed her own light spear. Alright, let's rip this thing apart and see what makes it tick. Attack. The 3 female fallen descended upon the massive brown-black confronting their male companion, light spears drawn. More than 15 minutes later, rigid. Rainier let out a tired groan as they finally managed to chop the annoying blob into small enough chunks that it started to disintegrate rather than trying to pull itself back together. It had taken 4 fallen, all attacking simultaneously with spears of pure light. Over 15 minutes of constant, focused effort to defeat what she suspected was just one example of the main enemy of this floor. That little slime ball actually spanked me on the ass. Middelt grumbled unhappily as she rubbed her aforementioned assailed posterior with one hand. Her face was also unusually red, for some reason too. Just be glad that you're flat as a board for once, pipsqueak. Rainier and I both got spanked right on the tits as well. Calawarner snarled back in annoyance as she gingerly massaged her mauled memories. How dare that little creeper mistreat a treasure like her girls. GHRK. Donasik bit out from where he was kneeling on the floor, one hand using his light spear as a crutch to keep himself upright while the other cupped his poor family jewels. Their slimy foe's last act of defiance had been to use a tendril to punt Donasik right in the family pride. Fucking men and their junk, Rainier thought with a roll of her eyes. She knew that getting cunt punted wasn't any less an agonizing experience for a woman, and she was rather grateful it wasn't her on the receiving end of the slime's final attack. Thank you very much. But seriously, why did men have to make such a big deal of it whenever their wedding tackle took a hit? Still, the momentary distraction as they caught their breath had given her time to piece together just what they were likely to face on this floor, and unfortunately also forced her to come to a decision that instantly left a foul taste in her mouth. She loathed and reviled it from conception. It went against her very pride as a fallen to even consider voicing it. But unfortunately, she was the leader here, and that meant she had to woman up and put her pride to the side for now. We should fall back for now, she ground out, her voice betraying how much she personally despised the idea. Whatever the hell these fucking slime things are, they were likely built specifically to counter us. From the way their insane regeneration works, the best way to either kill one of them is to rain down the hits faster than they can regenerate or damage their entire bodies at once with a wide-scale magical attack. Unless one of you have been hiding a talent for sorcery up your asses, then none of us have a way of doing either of those. The fucking Gremory slut or citry whore who ruled this little shithole could likely wipe out an entire room full of these shit stains. But us. It took us 15 fucking minutes of dogpiling just to get through one. If we were still fresh, we might have been able to come up with some kind of counterattack, but given that we're all wiped from having to grind our way through the past 4 floors, that ain't an option. If we had to deal with a bushel of these bastards at once. She trailed off, not needed to spell out exactly how that kind of encounter would end. Getting spanked or a punt to the groin would be the least of their worries if they pushed forward. We can't just turn tail and fucking run. As usual, Calawarner proved herself to be an utterly brain-dead excuse for a bimbo. Seriously, once this fuck-up of a mission was done, Rainier was going to personally do everything she could to see her put on a long-term reconnaissance mission undercover as a whore in some brothel in Amsterdam or something, just to make sure her damned boneheaded stupidity couldn't do any further harm to the Grigori. In case you didn't notice, we were just badly spanked by the standard mob for this level, you stupid crow. Middle snapped back, using the worst slur she could against a fellow fallen. I'm with Ray. I don't want to think about how we'd handle whatever else we'd find down here. Yeah, and you enjoyed that spanking, didn't you, you little fucking masochist? The brunette sneered back, making the youngest fallen splutter, turn red and stammer out denials that she was a masochist. Enough, Donasik roared out as he finally managed to regain his feet. We will not run. We are going to hunt down the Sonafabich who built this place, and I am going to beat them to within an inch of his life. Then you women can use him as a living vibrator for all I care while I burn this fucking hellhole to the ground. And we grab that useless little chit that Lord Azazel is so interested in. I'm sorry, since when did this flock turn into a fucking democracy? Rainier growled out icily. Lord Azazel personally put me in charge of this mission, Donasik, so if you want to test yourself against his authority, go right ahead and open your useless word hole again. And you've fucked it up every step of the way. Calawarner, evidently trying for the previously unknown brain-dead bimbo queen of the fallen title, chimed in. Oh, I'm sorry, who is it that ignored my orders when I was recalled to the underworld? The black-haired fallen asked condescendingly. Who is it who let the former holy priestess wander around without even assigning one of those worthless stray exorcist meat sacks to keep an eye on her? Who was it? Middle dear, who are the ones who royally screwed the pooch and will be lucky not to be executed for their incompetence. Why, I believe it was a Chunibyo male fallen and a stuck-up arrogant bimbo with all her brains in her boobs. The goth lowly fallen smirked at the look of impending doom that was rapidly setting in on the pair of morons. Yup, even if they managed to get Asia Argento back safe and sound, these two were so screwed that they would outdo an entire block of whorehouses. And when the fuck did I say we were cutting and running back for the underworld? Fuck the hell no, Rainier scoffed, deciding that she had appropriately demonstrated her stick enough for the dimwits and she now needed to offer a bit of the carrot. We are falling back to the church where we will rest and recuperate for a day or two, then we are going to grab every stray exorcist we've got, including that crazy asshat Freed, and arm them to the teeth with all the gear we have available. and assault this place in force. The 4 of us can clear the way up to this point. Then we sit back and let the humans do their job as cannon fodder and bury these slime balls in waves of light bullets and grenades. Then we clear this fucking hellhole and deal with the asshole in charge. Abruptly, a snarling demonic visage made of red fire sprang up in front of the staircase, covering the exit to the floor from top to bottom. Before, with a sound of stone grinding against stone, the stairwell began to slowly seal itself up again. Rainier just stared at it in weary disbelief. Oh, for fuck's sake, the stupid arena barriers from God of War. Really? A few minutes of fruitless hacking later proved that the barriers were just as impassable as they were in that damned game, and the stairwell had reverted to nothing more than a stone wall, and the barrier dissipated. Donasik's attempt to dig through the stone with his spear simply revealed more rock. Don't bother, the stairs are fucking gone, and trying to dig back up manually could just as easily bring this place down on our heads or draw more of those slime bastards to us. Rainier stopped any further attempts as she massaged the bridge of her nose in frustration. Fucking bastard. Middle snapped as she stomped her foot in frustration. This has never happened before. Although I fucking hate having to say it, we have never tried to retreat before. Rainier responded with a frustrated growl. That, and it's just plain fucking common sense to keep intruders from turning tail and running once they've gotten a good look at your defenses. I should have seen something like this coming, damn it all. So, what now? Calawarner snarked out, as she absently poked at the wall that had once hosted their way out with her own spear. If the bastard in charge of this place has any sense at all, then I'm willing to be that teleportation circles will do jack shit in this place. So, we're basically stuck down here. Hey Ray, think this guy will let us go if we give him Calawarner as a sex toy? Middle suggested half seriously, as if I'd fucking deign to let a human touch me like that. The brunette roared back in outrage. Nah, he probably has standards, Rainier replied. And what the fuck does that mean? But, ignoring Calawarner's lack of sex appeal to all but the hard up and desperate, the flock leader started. Are you trying to pick a fight with me, bitch? We need to think about our next move, she continued, ignoring the bimbo's interruption. Retreat is no longer an option, and I doubt they will just let us sit and rest here indefinitely, so our only option is to press forward. But we can't even try and fight any more of those slime things. Even if we find one on its own, dealing with it would leave us wide open for more of the bastards to take us while we're distracted. That means we need to stealth run this shit. Spears and all other weapons away. We advance carefully and quietly and avoid combat at all possibilities. And Donasik, if you say so much as a single word about warriors never running from a fight, I swear to our fucking father that I will personally perforate your junk with every light spear I can muster. The large man snapped his open mouth shut with a click and a flinch. The 5th floor was built much like the previous 4, an annoying fucking maze of interconnected corridors and dead ends. The only real difference was the torches that lined the tunnels were becoming rarer and rarer the deeper down they went. The lack of light wasn't much of a bother for the fallen, who had been blessed with naturally enhanced senses and could strengthen them even further with a small amount of light, making the entire area seem as bright as midday to them. But it was still an annoyance that they had to waste even a minor measure of their remaining power on something so trivial. Rainier led the way, with Donasik and Calawarner following behind, and Middle guarding the rear, rather than protecting from a potential ambush from behind. Middle's job was instead to keep a weather eye on the 2 idiots in case either tried something stupid. Middle was absolutely certain that the 2 were already plotting some way to see her and Rainier dead at some point so they could cut a new story of what had happened from blank cloth that left themselves in the clear. It was just a question of whether the 2 would be stupid enough to try something before they managed to find a way out of this mess, or if they had enough collective brain cells to wait until they were safe. Not that they had any real chance of pulling it off even if they did manage to take her and Ray by surprise. Neither of the 2 imbeciles had ever felt the unbridled power of a cotter falling on them in disapproval or anger. They'd fold like tissue paper before the weakest of the cotter, let alone if they came under Azazel the scapegoat's scrutiny. At first, Rainier's plan seemed to be working. The slime things were abundant on the floor, usually moving about in 1s or 2s, but their senses couldn't seem to even notice them as long as they stayed at least a few meters away. And even then, the feather-light footsteps were soft enough that it took a moment for the creatures to really focus on them. Thanks to that, the flock was able to make it about halfway through the maze unimpeded. Then things got stupid. They'd rounded a corner and came face to face with another one of those false terracotta soldiers from the previous floor. As it caught sight of them and raised its clay spear, Donaseek had been the first to react, shooting past Rainier before the female fallen could say anything, and proceeded to vent his frustrations by punching its head off with a single empowered fist to its stone face. That had been all fine and dandy, but the sound of its clay body shattering and then clattering across the ground had drawn the attention of a trio of the damned slimes from the corridor they'd just left. Donaseek, I swear to the fucking father, I am going to feed you my light spear through your goddamn ass when this is over. Rainier roared as they were forced to make a break through the corridors. She was silently grateful that she'd mastered the art of running in heels centuries ago. My ass is exit only. It won't be by the time I'm done with it. Would you both shut up and run? Warner screamed as she scrambled after them. Like Rainier, she had long mastered the art of running in heels but lacked Rainier's ease of doing so. There's the doorway. We're almost out of here, Niddle shouted, pointing past them to a familiar set of open double doors, before risking a glance over her shoulders. What she saw made her face take on a pallor akin to spoiled milk. Fuck me running. There a lord be damned swarm of those things right behind us. There has to be at least a couple dozen of them. Fucking move, 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 Rainier yelled, not even wasting her breath to even try and confirm Middle's observation. While the fallen tended to prefer flight over more mundane forms of transit, no one had ever accused them of being slow on their feet. All four managed to pass through the double doors with enough of a lead that, when they slammed closed a moment later, none of their pursuing aggressors were able to follow. Instead, they were greeted with the sound of sludge splattering audibly against the doors a moment later. That was far too fucking close. Warner moaned out as she gasped for breath. Fucking hell. We are fallen. We shouldn't have to run for our lives from a bunch of fucking slimes. Those were not slimes, a male voice pointed out easily, making the gathered fallen instantly jerk back to awareness. Oh, I'm not in the room with you. I'm not the boss of this floor. I'm the dungeon master, or if you prefer a more relevant title, I am the current holder of the gamer's gear as you have already deduced. Gaia or Tartarus? Rainier asked cautiously. Gaia, so you can breathe a bit easier. The voice responded easily. Aside from the fact that it sounded male, none of the fallen could make out anything else about the speaker from just their voice. I am well aware of the type of people my counterparts tend to be, and I have no desire to be mistaken for one of them. Anyway, as I already stated to your companion, those are not slimes. They are, in fact, another variant of Earth Golem known historically as an eternal mud golem. I think I've heard of those, Rainier offered thoughtfully after a moment. They were the creations of some master alchemist during the 1800 seconds. Hard as hell to damage but nearly impossible to control with any kind of precision. That honestly makes a lot of sense. So far everything we've fought in this hellhole has been some kind of Earth Golem. So why would those things be any different? Precisely. Now I've been most impressed with you progress so far, so I thought I'd offer you all the chance to surrender with your lives intact. Though I believe I already know your answer. The voice asked. Of course we refuse. Donaseek roared at the room at large, particularly after you dared to insult me with that infernal nickname. To be completely honest, that was an automatic effect of the gaming gear, not something I activated. The voice responded with an audible shrug. If you want to blame anyone, blame yourself for fulfilling the requirements needed to earn that title while in an area controlled by the gaming gear. The sole male of their flock ground his teeth in impotent fury at that while his fellows quietly sniggered at his discomfort. So, does Donaseek-san speak for all of you? The voice asked. While we lack his male pride and wounded ego, we must answer the same regardless. Rainier answered calmly, throwing a scornful look at her flock member. Azazel the scapegoat, Governor General of the Gregory, desires to speak with the former Holy Priestess Asia Argento as well as to examine her sacred gear. We were entrusted with the task of brining her before him, and we cannot abandon that duty. What Ray said, Vidalt added, before gesturing absently to the members of the flock. Besides, these two are royally fucked if we don't head back with her safe and sound, considering they were supposed to be the ones keeping an eye on her. Instead, they let her wander off without an escort and get captured by who knows what ... and no offense. So I've managed to gather and none taken. The voice answered with a slight sigh. Very well then, I shan't insult you by asking any further. Instead, I shall remind you of this. On every floor, the salient monster on it has served as the basis of the floor boss. Do tell me, which monster would be the salient one of this floor? The silence that followed was physically painful as the fallen realized just what they were about to face. Fuck ... me ... running ... Rainier bit out in a pained groan. With a sinister, echoing chuckle, the voice seemed to fade away. Moments later, the lights in the room came on all at once before a black, rainbow-tinted ichor began to pour from cracks in the ceiling, rapidly pooling and amassing on the floor until it formed into a blob of enormous size, easily at least 4 times the height of Donasik at its thickest point and taking up nearly half the room in sheer girth. The massive version of the eternal mud golem loomed over the 4 fallen menacingly, red letters slowly spelling out the name of their doom above it. Ooze avatar, crawling chaos. Ray, Middle murmured out, eyes locked on the oozing abomination in front of them. She sounded scared. Yeah, Rainier couldn't blame her. She'd lived for centuries and had come close to death more than a few times. This wasn't something she'd ever expected. If we manage to make it out of this alive, I am never working on the same continent as those 2 morons ever again. The youngest fallen stated deadpan, absently jerking her head in the direction of the 2 numbskulls that were to blame for this nightmare. You know what same. Rainier agreed as she summoned every light spear she could manage. The time for holding back had long since come and gone. Now fucking fight, all of you. Letting out a deep gurgling rumble that shook the room like a roar, the crawling chaos attacked. Several portions of its body bulging before whip-like tendrils with tips as hard and sharp as spears shot forward towards the fallen. Almost too fast for them to dodge. Almost. The fallen quickly scattered, before each began to pelt the titanic ooze with their light spears. But it was like fighting a giant mass of molten caramel. Everything they threw just passed harmless through the massive rainbow-tinted ooze, leaving holes that sealed themselves shut before the spear passed through the other end. Several attempts to slash away at the attacking tendrils proved more effective, but the gouges they left were resealed within a matter of seconds. I'm afraid that tactics like those are rather pointless, the voice commented offhandedly as they fought against the globulous titan. Ooze avatar, crawling chaos, has a rather unique ability called ultra-high speed regeneration. It regenerates any lost body mass almost instantaneously, as well as instantly regenerating any damage that it may incur. The only way to defeat it is to either bombard it with attacks in such a number and scale that you damage it faster than its regeneration can restore itself, or destroy it utterly in a single, wide-scale magical attack. The 4 of you have the capability for neither, so it really is only a matter of time before you run out of power. Be silent. Donasik roared as his body was lit up as he channeled as much holy power as he could. The light quickly flowed into his newest light spear, causing it to expand slightly and brighten significantly. With a roar, he threw it and, as it passed through the gelatinous boss monster, the spear detonated in a way not too dissimilar to that of the light grenade that the stray exorcists had used on the first floor. Crawling chaos let out a high-pitched whining shriek as a solid chunk of its body exploded outward, only for the wound to quickly begin to refill itself as its body mass regenerated. Oh, I wasn't aware that you could do more with those spears of yours than simply manifesting, wielding, and throwing them. The voice sounded mildly impressed. It appears I have underestimated you 4 by a bit. Sadly, it'd take at least a dozen of those explosives hitting at once to deal any significant damage to crawling chaos, and I very much doubt all 4 of you are capable of using that trick. At this point, Rainier was actively panicking. Most of her techniques favored precision and efficiency, as did most of those wielded by the fallen in general. A holdover from their origins among angels, who favored grace and concentrated power over the wide-scale destructive magics devils favored. The explosive light spear that Donasik had just used was not a popular one among their people, considered too rough and inefficient by the majority, so it was one that was rarely used even if you bothered to learn it. She'd never bothered, and she knew that Middle was in the same boat, while she highly doubted that Calawarner had even half as many tricks mastered as even Middle due to her chronic laziness. Fallen did not pick up new tricks and skills easily. Angels were beings created by the God of the Bible himself to be eternal and unchanging, ever constant and immutable. There was a reason they were so slow to change in any way. Falling from grace changed the fallen somewhat, stripping away a bit of that immutability, but just because they could now change, did not mean they were quick about it. There were certainly some that embraced that aspect of their new existence, Azazel being one of the best examples of such. But they were rare. Rainier had fallen over 5 centuries ago and had in time grown and changed in several ways, allowing her to think outside the box and use new techniques with her favored light spears, but it still wasn't something she could do at the drop of a hat. Shit. The black-haired fallen thought furiously as Donasik sent spear after spear of explosive light into crawling chaos, focusing the oozing abomination's attention onto him for now. What the fuck can I do? I can't leave. Fighting is useless, and doing nothing will just get me killed. She'd already tried to form a teleportation circle, in case whatever was blocking them didn't work in these chambers for whatever reason. but it had failed before she could finish forming the first layer, and all she'd gotten was another window stating that she was not authorized to use teleportation magic in the dungeon or some such drivel. This fucking sacred gear was such bullshit. Kyle, Middle yelped. Rainier looked up to see her mentee slam back first into the wall and collapse bonelessly to the floor, insensate. A second later, a red magic circle flashed around her and Middle was gone. And suddenly the choice was made for her. Give her back. Rainier howled in fury as her raven black wings billowed out from her back. 5 light spear blazing into existence around her. A 6th forming in her hand as raw rage helped her push beyond her limits for a brief time. Fall intended to be a treasonous, backstabbing bunch of sons of bitches for the most part. At least among the lower ranks anyway. Azazel and several of the other Cotter demanded a certain level of maturity among their personal subordinates. Alliances were rarely more than short-lived things designed to overcome some short-term problem or briefly gain an advantage over a shared rival, and nothing more. The relationships between mentors and mentees were one of the few exceptions to that rule, mostly because most were assigned by the higher-ups in the Grigori, and the fear of the Cotter being irritated with them for misbehavior was enough to make most fallen involved obey. It didn't hurt that Middle, for all that she liked to play the part of the sadistic little shit, was smart, quick to learn and obedient. Rainier knew that, given time, the smaller fallen would rise far in the Grigori, and Rainier, in spite of herself, had gotten attached to the far younger girl, which made Middle's defeat and kidnapping absolutely enraging for her. All 6 spears flew from Rainier towards crawling chaos, spinning like drills. The light blazed as they slammed into the massive ooze, slowly moving through the gelatinous body and erasing any and all of the slime that came within reach of them. Rainier's righteous rage lending her light more power than she knew that she had. Well, this is unexpected. The voice of the gamer's gear user mused aloud. Echo of angelic fury, a trait only available to those fallen angels who fell from grace rather than being born to their nature, and even then, only to those who retain some degree of their former sense of honor and righteousness, and it can only be activated when the fallen in question feels true righteous fury for the sake of another. Adds a plus 200% modifier to their light manipulation abilities. Quite the powerful trump card you have there, my dear. It's no wonder you were chosen to lead the Kyo town flock. Still ... it isn't enough. As he spoke, the body of crawling chaos closed in around the 6 light spears, smothering and devouring them until their light was extinguished. Impossible, Rainier gasped, her mental ability to manipulate light now beyond taxed. She collapsed to her hands and knees in shock and exhaustion. Gah, useless bint. Donaseek snarled in frustration, wings exploding from his back as he manifested a pair of new light spears. Let me show you how it's done. Dual-wielding his light spears, he charged at the massive boss, undaunted by the massive creature. The occasional tentacle spear attack was batted aside as the battle maniac continued his reckless charge. In a way, it was inspiring ... but it was mostly a sign that he was simply too stupid to be aware of how badly he was outmatched. ... So you truly are the type that would charge straight into death. The voice offered flatly. Very well then, finish him. Crawling chaos hunched in on itself before the front of it erupted into a veritable tidal wave of tentacle spears that loomed above Donaseek for a moment before crashing down over him. He managed to hold out for a small moment by spinning his spears desperately like shields, but they shattered as the weight of the tentacle mass bore down on them, and the fallen angel Donaseek was impaled through his body dozens of times over. Donaseek, Calawarner gasped, falling on her ass as she stared numbly in shock. The corpse of the fallen angel hung suspended from its killer's tentacles for a moment before it dissolved into feathers, as all angels did when they died. The black feathers landed softly on the ground as crawling chaos turned its attention to the 2 remaining fallen angels as it retracted its tentacles into its body. So, ladies, I will offer you the opportunity once more. The gamer's gear user asked carefully. Surrender and imprisonment, or, I surrender. Calawarner shrieked in fear. The sight of a fallen angel far more powerful than she was being killed so easily before her had broken her pride and courage both. Calawarner, you fucking coward. Rainier snarled as she unsteadily staggered to her feet. Fuck you. The brunette growled back before a magic circle appeared underneath her, and the weakest of the 4 fallen vanished in a flash of light, leaving Rainier, disempowered and barely able to stand, let alone fight, against a foe she couldn't possibly defeat. Grinding her teeth, Rainier made her own choice. I surrender as well. The magic circle appearing beneath her was the last thing she saw before being engulfed in darkness. Elsewhere, Hyodo Issei sat back on his throne as screens popped up around him. It was time to see what his gains were. Chapter 21, Aftermath and Resolution. The moment Issei allowed himself a brief sigh of relief as the attempted invasion of his base finally came to an end, he was suddenly hit by an absolute avalanche of notification screens. It actually took him a few minutes just to sort through them all and get them all into something resembling a recognizable order, going from oldest to newest. After taking a moment to just breathe and steady himself afterwards, he began to examine the screens more closely, this time paying actual attention to what each one said. Invasion after action report. First floor. You have lost one Dogu Golem. Your spring floor trap has been tripped. Your Dogu Golems have slain Vincenzo Vallisneri. Your base core gains 125 EXP, which is converted to 625 MP. You have slain your first dungeon intruder. You have gained a shop coupon as a reward. Your Dragon Golem has slain Francesco Bruni. Your base core gains 125 EXP, which is converted to 625 MP. Your Dragon Golem has slain Antonio Baroni. Your base core gains 95 EXP, which is converted to 475 MP. You have lost 5 Dogu Golems. You have lost 1 Dragon Golem. Your first floor boss Shakoman, the Divine Metal Dogu, has slain Angelo Zeno. Your base core gains 155 EXP, which is converted to 775 MP. Your first floor boss Shakoman, the Divine Metal Dogu, has slain Giuseppe. Your base core gains 215 EXP, which is converted to 1075 MP. Base invasion successfully repelled. All invaders have been defeated. Auto-looting corpses ... Done. Weapons added to newly created armory, trophy room. You gain Exorcist Light Pistol X5. You gain Exorcist Light Sword X5. You gain Exorcist Light Grenade X2. You gain Exorcist Field Medic Kit X1. You gain Vial of Holy Water X5. All other items deemed of no value due to damage. You have successfully defended your base from your first hostile invasion force. Armory. Trophy room has been added to your base core as a reward. You have successfully repelled your first invasion. You have gained a floor catalog expansion ticket as a reward. You gain 9,000 EXP from proper management of your dungeon during an invasion. One-time bonus multiplier of 10 applied due to first dungeon invasion defense. The first screen alone nearly had Issei's jaw going slack in shock. There was just so much that he hadn't known before about dungeon invasions that he now had to take into account. For example, his base core apparently gained EXP from enemies killed or beaten by his dungeon's defenses, which was then multiplied by 5 and converted into MP and funneled into the reservoir that sustained and grew his base and dungeon. Another addition to the pot of odd stuff that he'd stumbled upon was that Issei himself also received EXP from the entire experience. Looking at the amount he would have likely received, were it not for that massive X10 modifier, it was likely based on both how effective the floors themselves proved to be, the level and number of invaders, and how far they actually managed to progress through the dungeon itself, probably with a bunch of other smaller factors added in. Honestly, that fact alone just added further incentive to both further invest into his dungeon and continue improving his abilities as a dungeon builder. The shop coupon that he'd received as a reward for his first dungeon kill was interesting. It allowed him to acquire, for free, any single item from either the gamer's store or the dungeon store with a value no greater than 100,000 yen. More than that, the coupon itself had 3 charges, which meant he could use it 3 times before it was destroyed, although he had to use each activation for a separate item, meaning he couldn't spend all 3 uses on a single item worth 300,000 yen. Disappointing, but not a deal breaker. The Armory Trophy Room was a new addition to his base that had apparently been automatically added after he unlocked it. It was basically a storeroom that he could use to hold all the gear and equipment that he wanted to keep but didn't want to carry with him. He could store things in either storage mode, which hid them from regular view but allowed him to instantly move them to and from his inventory as long as he could link with his base, or in display mode, which proudly displayed them along mounts and racks spaced throughout the room. He took a moment to transfer all the weapons he had in his inventory, aside from his personal swords, and put them into display mode. It would be nice to have them all displayed like that, like a visual record of everything he'd managed to accomplish since everything had started, from defeating the various Ratman dungeons to dealing with the stray exorcists. The floor catalog expansion ticket that he received for repelling his first invasion was an item exclusively for use with his base core. By adding it to the core, it would automatically unlock 20 new random layouts that he could use to help expand his dungeon. He could actually change the overall theme of the dungeon every 5 levels, and Issei had been dithering about what to choose for his next level. Hopefully, one of the options provided by this would spark his inspiration. Moving right along, the next few screens weren't all that interesting. They were basically breakdowns of the 3 battles that his golems had waged with the quintet of rogue exorcists. It was useful for seeing just what kind of damage the exorcists' weapons were capable of dishing out, but again not all that interesting. Moving on, the next screen was the second invasion after action report, and Issei was again briefly overwhelmed by the sheer size of it. He quickly opened the settings interface and selected the option to remove the destruction reports of his basic dungeon mobs and the activation reports of his various traps from the invasion reports. That slimmed the report itself down immensely and made going through it a bit more bearable. Invasion after action report. Dungeon law. No flying zone has been invoked. Punitive system standing by in case of second infraction. Achievement unlocked. Lucky pervert moment. You can now set the dungeon's monsters and traps to only destroy clothing when striking enemies should you wish. Your first floor boss Shacoman, the divine metal doggo, has been defeated by the invaders, respawning in 12 hours. Your second floor boss occult device, Guardian Golem, has been defeated by the invaders, respawning in 14 hours. Your third floor boss, the crawling dragon, has been defeated by the invaders, respawning in 16 hours. Achievement unlocked, stripperific. Earned for stripping one invader of their clothing at least 5 times. New mechanics have been unlocked. Your fourth floor boss Mendari, the terracotta sorcerer, has been defeated by the invaders, respawning in 18 hours. Title of Chunibyo Fallen has been bestowed upon Invader Donaseek. Invader title bestowal system is now active. Retreat prevention systems now active. No retreat is allowed for the invaders on the 5th floor. Your 5th floor boss's avatar, Crawling Chaos, has defeated Invader Midult. EXP have due to non-fatal nature of defeat. Your base core earns 13 OEXP, which is converted into 65 OMP. You have successfully captured your first dungeon invader. Jail area has automatically been added to your base core as a reward. Invader Midult has been teleported to the newly created jail. All fallen angel abilities sealed. Invader Rainier has invoked her Echoes of Angelic Fury ability. The effect of all light manipulation abilities increased by 200%. Your 5th floor boss's avatar, Crawling Chaos, has slain Invader Donaseek. Your base core earns 53 OEXP, which is converted into 26,500 MP. Invader Calawarner has surrendered. Invader Calawarner has been teleported to the jail. All fallen angel abilities sealed. Invader Rainier has surrendered. Invader Rainier has been teleported to the jail. All fallen angel abilities sealed. Base invasion successfully repelled. You gain 3,000 EXP from proper management of your dungeon during this invasion. No items worthy of being looted detected. For defeating a party invading your dungeon including 2 or more enemies stronger than you are, you have earned the Stalwart Defender base skill. For defeating a party invading your dungeon including an enemy more than twice your own level, you have earned the base skill, Stalwart Defender. The defensive abilities of yourself and your monsters are increased by 25% within the dungeon and base. Reliable Guardian. If you, or any of your monsters, would be instantly defeated while inside of your dungeon by an invader, you will instead be left with a single HP. A quick check of his own status screen showed that Issei himself was now teetering at roughly 99% to his next level up, which made him both want to cheer and grind his teeth in sheer frustration. Taking a breath and deciding that that would be something that he would take care of later, he began unpacking the sheer deluge of unique features that his second invasion had unlocked. Lucky pervert moment and stripperific had both been earned by Calawarner being stripped of her clothes by his dungeon's various attackers the 1st and 5th times respectively. While he could only offer a heartfelt thumbs up at the idea of his monsters and traps specifically stripping female invaders, which this new mechanic would allow, the fact that it likely also affected guys would be a big no way on using it for now. He'd have to investigate the new mechanic in more detail later to see if he could gender segregate its activation. He had absolutely no interest in seeing another guy's junk. The fact that the revival of his floor bosses appeared to be staggered wasn't all that much of a surprise, but he was now willing to bet that there would be some sort of hurry up and summon button if his dungeon was attacked in the meantime, likely at the cost of his base core's MP reserve. However, most of the basic monsters that had been destroyed by Rainier's flock had already respawned, and the triggered traps had likewise already reset, so that meant that his basic protections were at least back in place, for all the good they had proven against more powerful invaders. The core of his current defenses was definitely his floor bosses. Having them down for the better part of the next day would leave his base unsettlingly underguarded. Deciding to move on for now, he turned his attention to the jail. Like the armory, trophy room, it was another new addition to his base that had been installed the moment it was unlocked. While inside the prisoner section of the jail, no prisoner would be able to access any of their unique racial abilities, such as the iron skin and light manipulation abilities of the pure and fallen angels. It also prevented prisoners from performing any form of self-harm or inflicting any form of serious harm against another prisoner. It automatically delivered food and water based on its current settings, the materials drawn directly from the store at the cost of some of the base's MP reserve. Issei wasn't sure if Fallen actually needed either, but decided to err on the side of caution and have food and water delivered to the prisoners twice a day. Finally, Stalwart Defender and Reliable Guardian were a pair of buffing skills that would be very useful in upgrading up his mobs a bit. Magic using devils, he had learned, tended to favor the kind of magic that could overwhelm and destroy enemies in a single attack in order to quickly clear the way before them. Reliable Guardian would ensure that, no matter the strength of the attacker, his defenders would be able to at least weather the first strike. The fact that most would expect an overwhelmingly powerful first strike to completely destroy his relatively weak golems would also mean that said invaders would likely drop their guard once they were sure their attack had landed, giving his surviving by a thread golems a chance to deliver at least a single surprise blow of their own. Stalwart Defender, on the other hand, was a far more straightforward skill. It was a direct buff skill that boosted his monster's defenses. The fact that it was based on the monster's original defense score was a bit of a hit or miss. It wouldn't be all that much use for his Dogu golems or Eternal Mud golems, but it would be a great asset for both his Terracotta soldiers and his Dragon golems, and even his Brick golems would benefit from it to a certain degree. Skimming through the remaining reports detailing the Fallen's various battles, he noted with a frown that his non-magical traps, Dogu golems, and Brick golems had been utterly unable to do any damage through the Fallen's iron skin. His Dragon golems could actually do some damage, but they were far too slow to actually land a hit without his other golems and traps acting as distractions, and even then it was rare. While his magical traps could at least momentarily hinder or distract the Fallen, even his direct attack ones only did a small amount of damage. His Terracotta soldiers and Eternal Slime golems could also do some damage, but the amount they inflicted usually only amounted to bruises and scrapes on beings at the Fallen's level. He seriously needed to upgrade his available defenders, or the dungeon floors themselves would be good for nothing more than getting rid of fodder and buying him a bit of time. With that morose thought, he turned his attention to his 3 new prisoners, or rather, the 3 bargaining chips he'd gained to exchange with the Grigori in order to ensure that Asia had her freedom. Granted, since Azazel had, apparently, expressed an interest in examining Twilight healing, he just might be stubborn about it and refuse. But from everything he had been able to learn about Grigori and the various Cotter, their leadership, the organization as a whole seemed to be rather heavily focused on preserving fallen lives first and foremost. It made sense. The Fallen had apparently always been the least numerous of the so-called 3 biblical factions, and it had only gotten worse since the Great War had ended and fewer pure angels had fallen from grace. Closing his eyes, Issei let out a pained breath as he privately admitted something that he really didn't want to ... He was simply too weak at the moment to protect Asia. In terms of raw combat strength, both Ria's Gremory and Sona Citri were still leagues ahead of him, and both of them were apparently very much small change, at least in comparison to the levels represented by the small army of devils that had shown up to cover up the destruction of the Purifier's base. And that was just in terms of raw physical and magical power. Politically, he was an absolute non-entity, a complete nobody with no influence whatsoever. Yes, revealing his status as the Red Dragon Emperor likely could change that, but he was going to be keeping that under his hat for as long as he could. It simply wouldn't be worth the amount of trouble it would bring down onto his head from the various factions and groups that would be highly interested in gaining control of the holder of one of the 13 Longinus while he was still young and inexperienced. Not to mention the sheer number of devils that would come sniffing about, eager to try and poach him for their peerages. Issei suddenly paused as that errant thought suddenly gave him an idea. A peerage ... that might actually work. The biggest issue would be convincing Asia to accept it as a necessity, which could be a rather large hurdle given everything that happened. He suddenly stifled a yawn and decided that that kind of thinking could wait for tomorrow. It was far too late to be plotting and he was tired. He'd only managed to get 2 hours of sleep before he was waken up by the invasion alert, and it was getting close to 5 in the morning already. He absently opened up the shop and quickly bought a can of high-energy soda to properly wake himself up in the morning. Fortunately, tiredness counted as a debuff thanks to Gamer's body, and like most other debuffs could be countered with the proper item. In this case, something loaded up with an insane amount of caffeine. Anyway, to bed. The next day, IsseiXHarem's sweet inner sanctum, Issei's base, Lady Rainier and the others attacked while I was sleeping. Issei yelped out, face rapidly paling. She'd been enjoying a late breakfast with Issei when he'd brought up the previous night's unexpected visitors. Yeah, but they couldn't get through my defenses, Issei responded with a reassuring smile. Who were able to plow through the first 4 levels of my dungeon with minimal serious damage, but I didn't design those to deal with enemies on their level. Instead, they were able to show me a good measure of just what that flock was capable of and even managed to wear them down quite a bit. The 5th floor, however, was the real barrier for them. I actually designed it to target the biggest weakness in an angel's normal fighting style, pure and fallen alike, their lack of wide area attacks, and none of them were strong enough to power through that disadvantage. That is truly astounding, Issei-san, the blonde nun said with wide eyes full of admiration for her friend and protector. You managed to defeat 4 fallen angels. That is something that no mortal man should be capable of. I have to admit that a lot of it was just due to proper planning and prep work. Dungeon law kept them from taking advantage of their ability to fly and limited their mobility, while my own experience from fighting Armeros the Lesser let me design the 5th floor, and its boss in particular, to best counter how the fallen like to fight. The gamer replied with a modest blush, though inside he was basking a bit in Asia's awe. She was such an amazingly nice girl. Sadly, this was a very serious talk in the making, so he reluctantly decided to get on with it. Asia, please be honest with me. You aren't all that happy living down here, are you? The young Italian's bright green eyes widened in surprise. How did you? I mean why? Issei offered her a sad smile. Ever since you took refuge here, it is obvious that whenever I stopped by to visit and spend time with you here was the highlight of your day. Aside from practicing with whatever skills you learned from the church, praying, and reading, there's nothing for you to really do down here. You deserve better than being trapped in here like a gilded cage. You deserve to be free and out in the world, making even more friends and having fun. And I'm not strong enough to ensure that you'll be safe doing that ... but there is a way. You have been excommunicated by the church and it is clear that the Fallen and Grigori did not mesh well with you. But there is still one more faction left. The ... the devils, Asia whispered out, trembling slightly. A part of her had been well aware that such a path was always an option to her, but she had spent her life as a devout member of the church, raised to revile and shun the devil in all its forms, and it was not a path she had ever allowed herself to truly consider. But ... they are. Asia, I know the devils that live and rule in this area, and they are all surprisingly good people. IsseiXHarem in particular cares deeply for all of her peerage members and treats them as family. Issei offered softly, if you ever wish to live outside of this little bubble dimension without having to constantly fear the Grigori, the Purifiers, or some other faction coming for you, then she would definitely be your safest bet. I also attend Kuo Academy, the same school that IsseiXHarem and her peerage all attend, so we would still be able to see each other nearly every day. But I won't force this decision on you. This is your life. The church cannot control you any longer, and that means you should follow whatever path your heart wants. Whatever you decide, I will support you with everything I have. Issei-san, the excommunicated nun breathed out, her eyes tearing up. For most of her life, Asia had been subservient to the wills of others for various reasons, many of which she had agreed to on her own. For the good of the faith, for the sake of the common good, in the name of the Lord, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Amen. But even while she faithfully served the church, her obedience had always been expected. Sometimes the orders were given to her courteously, other times dispassionately, others were accompanied by simple or empty platitudes, and yet others were given quite rudely. And yet she was always expected to obey without question, whether the orders came from bishops, archbishops, exorcists, paladins, or even holy swordsmen. Her own desires and wants had never been a factor, unless it would somehow affect her ability to use twilight healing. But here, Issei, in spite of having a clear preference for what she should do, was simply laying out her options and entrusting her with the ability to make her own decision on what she should do while promising his support no matter her choice. Oh Lord, what good have I done to deserve such a wonderful friend? She silently offered a small prayer of thanks. In her mind, all of the healing that she had done from the moment she had awoken her sacred gear were not her own acts. They were her following his tenets and simply acting as a good Christian should, hardly worthy of praise and not to be taken into account. While unused to being given such trust and faith, IsseiXHarem was at heart a rather simple and straightforward girl. Her shyness often made acting on that part of her nature more difficult, but she had never had an issue offering her thanks for such kindness as she was being given. So when she rose from her seat, walked around the table, and engulfed her first and dearest friend in the world in a hug, she did so without a bit of hesitation in her desire to show her gratitude for his unflinching support. Unfortunately, Asia's naive nature meant that she failed to notice that, with Issei still seated as he was, her leaning forward and engulfing his head in a warm hug had, essentially, shoved his head directly into her breasts. Issei's mind mentally ground to a shrieking halt as Asia unintentionally smooshed his head into her bust. Granted, they were nowhere near the size of Ria's Gremory or Harem Akino's magnificent mammaries, but they were still very nice and very well-developed breasts, easily as large as Aka's, if not slightly larger. He then mentally slapped himself upside the head before Gamer's mind could even start kicking in. No perving on Asia when she's just being a sweetie asshole. He mentally berated himself. Carefully, as if the smaller girl was made of spun glass, Issei gently reached out and hugged her back, making the Italian blonde let out a happy sigh. She was, if not actually touch-starved, then at least a bit touch-deprived. Her former status as the Holy Maiden of Healing had made the majority of her fellows in the church treat her like some sort of sacred relic that was not to be touched carelessly. Thus, to feel the touch of another human being for something as simple as a show of affection was a precious treasure for her. The two simply remained like that for some time. Later, the Cult Research Clubroom, Old School Building, Kyo Academy. Ria's. The sudden, unexpected voice of her queen drew the crimson-haired ruined princess out of her contemplation of her latest budget request that she was submitting to the student council. As Kyo Academy was wholly owned by the 4 Mao via an assortment of proxies and cutouts, she and Sona were all but destined to have everything go almost entirely their way when it came to dealing with the school's administration. Sona wouldn't ever even try to remove or cut the orc's funding, not only because she and Ria's were childhood friends but also because such an act would go against their alliance. "Yes, Akino?" she asked, looking up and quickly taking note of the slightly hardened expression that had overtaken her almost sister's violet eyes. "He just arrived at the Harem shrine and it seems he wishes to speak with us," the priestess of thunder stated. Ria stilled as her eyes narrowed. "Does he now?" she purred out dangerously. "Kindly inform Sona and Tsubaki of this while I go and fetch Kiba and Kaneko. We wouldn't want to keep our dear guests waiting for long, now would we?" As you say," Akino tittered out demurely as she waved one hand, creating a communications circle. "Sona Kaichu, it's Akino, our mutual friend." Ria stood up and strode through the doors into the rest of the old school building, which had essentially been remodeled into her own personal playground. She actually lived in the building, though spells kept other students from noticing that, and she even had several rooms set aside for all of her beloved periods should they ever have need of one, though only Akino ever took her up on their use with any regularity. She returned a few minutes later with both Kiba and Kaneko in tow, and was not surprised to find a visibly irate Sona waiting for her, with Tsubaki doing what she could to calm her king's ire. "Ready to go?" the red-headed devil asked with a bit of a teasing tone. Sona was usually so hard to rile up that seeing her so irritated might have been amusing, had the same troubles not been causing her problems as well. "Please," Sona responded tersely. Ria's let out a small sigh. "Sona, we cannot just jump down his throat when we arrive," she pointed out patiently. "He is an independent, owing neither of us any fealty. We need to hear his side of things first, or we risk driving off or making an enemy of a potentially useful asset. From everything we've seen so far, he would not have caused such devastation without a very good reason." The bespectacled girl glowered at her for a moment, before reluctantly nodding her agreement. As Ria's had more or less predicted would happen, certain members of the Citri family and their various allies had started making noises about investigating Sona's tenure as co-ruler of Kyo Town due to the sheer number of incidents that had been happening recently, along with associated allusions to her maturity and need for a guiding hand involving important matters. Naturally, Sona was having absolutely none of that and had proceeded to fully flex her legal muscles, brandishing the binding contract that she had with her own house patriarch, guaranteeing her the right of choice in regards to her fiancé, which she had more or less strong-armed her father into signing after she'd defeated all 10 of his best matches for her at chess. Still, that any had even dared to try such a move had unnerved the usually calm and stoic Citri heiress more than she cared to admit. And right now she was keen on having a few words with the wild card that seemed to be at the center of these happenings. Ria's didn't exactly feel all that sanguine about the Gaia Gamer's gear holder herself. Her father made a bit of noise about trying to hurry up her formal engagement before her brother had intervened on her behalf. Officially, SeerKing's Lucifer, as one of the four Mao, should not have been able to intervene in the private affairs of any of the 52 pillars, even those of his birth clan. But SeerKing still appreciated and respected his firstborn's input regardless of his legal status. Exactly what her brother had said or done to get her father to settle down again, Rhea still wasn't sure, but it had obviously worked. She was well aware that this would likely only prove to be temporary reprieve. Mentally cracking her own knuckles in preparation, she quickly cast a transportation circle and teleported them all to the Heimjima shrine. When they arrived, her peerage automatically moved to spread out, just in case more of those Ratman creatures decided to show themselves. Sitting at the top of the stairway was the red armored man, looking completely unchanged from their last encounter with him. But there was one surprising addition. Sitting next to him was a girl who looked akin to their own age, with blonde hair and green eyes and dressed in what appeared to be a slightly more elaborate version of a nun's habit. She actually looked quite familiar for some reason. Issei. The Gaia Gamer's gear holder acknowledged them with a nod as he rose to his feet, the girl quickly moving to hide slightly behind him. I assume you have questions for me about the incident the other day. What happened? Sona growled out, glasses flashing intimidatingly. Do you know how much trouble your little act of demolition has caused us? Rhea and I were almost recalled to the underworld. A gross exaggeration, it had to be said, but Rhea did not feel like correcting her childhood friend at the moment. Sadly, there is quite a tale behind that incident, and it all begins with the young lady accompanying me. The red armored man replied with a shake of his head. To start, I believe some introductions are in order. He gently drew the girl out from behind him, resting one hand protectively on her shoulder. This is IsseiXHarem, formerly the Holy Maiden of Healing of the Catholic Church and the wielder of the sacred gear Twilight Healing. Everything starts with her basically being kidnapped off the streets of Kuo by the purifiers. Rhea's eyes widened slightly. Now she knew why the girl, who seemed quite adorable by the way, looked so familiar. The story of how the church's holy maiden had healed Deodora Astaroth and been excommunicated for it was rather well known among the upper ranks of devil nobility. More than a few devils had been sniffing after her since news of her excommunication had become well known, eager for the opportunity to recruit someone who had one of the few healing sacred gears capable of affecting devils into their peerage. But they had had little luck tracking her movements. Kidnapped, she found herself asking aloud with a slight frown. From all we've seen from these purifiers so far, they prefer to simply kill rather than capture. That was their end goal in this, albeit in a far more drawn-out process. The monotone voice generated by the strange mask-like item the sacred gear holder wore was still perfectly flat, and without inflection. But it was very easy to see a great deal of anger leaking through his body language when he answered. To start from the beginning, Miss Argento was out on a bit of a date of sorts with one of the students of your academy when she was locked into a pocket dimension by an item which, as far as my own research can tell, should only be able to be created by a holder of one of the gamer's gears. You can see the implications of this, I trust. So, the current holder of the Tartarus gamer's gear is either a part of the purifiers or at least providing them with magical items, Sona offered, her expression immediately growing grim at the implications. These purifiers seem to be even greater hypocrites than you have led us to believe. I admit, it appears that I have underestimated just how far they will bend or break their beliefs in their so-called purity in order to gain victory. The human agreed. Back to the matter at hand, Miss Argento and her date were then accosted by a squad of purifiers, who proceeded to beat up her date and make off with her. The boy in question is one with whom I have had previous contact, and he got in touch with me as quickly as he could to hire me to retrieve Miss Argento and anyone else they might have taken. Naturally, when given an opportunity to impair the machinations of those reprobates, I was all too happy to agree, and had intended to leave the site they had been taken to, inoperable afterwards, albeit not quite to the level things actually reached. Unfortunately, things escalated quite badly. You slaughtered your way through the inhabitants of that base, Kiba stated stiffly, as you would have, had you known what atrocities were being performed there. The gamer replied coolly. What was done in the underground sections of that base would have made the Holy Sword Project seem like little more than a high school biology project. The blonde swordsman recoiled slightly in a mix of shock and horror. Shock at the casual reference to his past. Horror at the very idea that something that could make the slaughter of his friends seem so small in comparison was occurring right under his nose. Perhaps you should elaborate then, Rhea put in, though a part of her suspected that she was not going to enjoy the answer in the least. The armored man nodded. This base was apparently the chief research institute for the local branch of the Purifiers. The chief researcher and apparent leader of the facility, SeerKing, had developed a device that allowed him and his Purifiers the ability to detect various supernatural forms of energy, and was apparently obsessed with figuring out how magic works and finding ways to counter it scientifically. This amounted to that particular madman vivisecting and dissecting countless supernatural beings of all stripes, often while they were still alive, ranging from migrant yokai to human sacred gear users and other supernaturally talented individuals. He elaborated grimly. Sweet Mao, Riaz muttered under her breath. Yes, she very much did not enjoy that answer. Every devil present blanched at the description of what had occurred in that facility, with Kiba looking like he was close to becoming physically ill. The haunted expression on his face told Riaz that her knight was currently having flashbacks to that terrible night that still made her blood boil with fury and remembrance for the poor, damaged, dying child she'd found. Then she glanced toward Asia and noticed that she was trembling slightly at the reminder of her own close brush with the Reaper. Poor dear, I did not know any of this when I first infiltrated the building, but learned what was going on shortly afterwards. I proceeded to steal whatever information on the Purifiers and their activities I could before moving to rescue the captives. I used a specific item to neutralize the gunpowder in any firearms, grenades, and other bombs they had in their possession to prevent anyone from getting caught in the crossfire before transporting the captives out of the base. From there, I proceeded to slaughter every Purifier in the base, something I feel no guilt about considering that every member station there was at the very least complicit with Tenkyujo's atrocities. I eventually located SeerKing himself, who proceeded to attack me with his so-called magnum opus, Project Damocles, a giant robot whose design I honestly think he stole from the human Reaper from Mass Effect 2, and equipped with a device that was supposed to suppress sacred gears. That deranged lunatic had apparently linked his machine directly to the base's underground reactor core to provide it with power, and had put in precisely 0 safeguards to prevent a backlash. The result was that, when I destroyed the machine, it caused a chain reaction that blew the base sky high while I was pursuing and eliminating Tenkyujo himself. I will admit that while I had planned on destroying the base, I was intending to do so far more discreetly, so you have my apologies for that. Raising one hand, a small box filled with paper, drives, and various other mediums suddenly appeared resting on top of it. Here is everything that I managed to gather from the base. I tried to read a bit myself but found I didn't have the stomach for it. I'd advise against you doing the same unless you have a strong stomach, or avoid eating beforehand. What that monster did in his labs was nothing short of foul in the purest and most biblical sense of the word. So noted. Sona agreed, a mow of distaste on her face as she regarded the box as if it contained a particularly vile pile of excrement. Tsubaki, hi, Kaichu, her queen responded, stepping forward and taking the proffered box, before creating a teleportation circle beneath it and sending it back to Sona's apartment for later review. Who precisely was your client, might I ask? Akino interjected curiously. I'm afraid that I take client confidentiality very seriously, Hajime-san. I find it a fundamental necessity for acting as a lone mercenary. The human sacred gear user replied blandly. And no, I will not be sharing the names of the others who were captured by the Purifiers either. However, I do have one more matter to discuss, with you in particular, SeerKing. Oh, Riaz asked with a single raised eyebrow. Miss Argento here, after being excommunicated, was quickly as a prospective recruit for Grigori. He informed her. However, their previous behavior combined with the events of a few days ago have convinced her that they simply do not have her best interests in mind, so she has broken from their organization. Just last night, the local fallen flock invaded my current base, where I have been temporarily allowing her to stay, in an attempt to recapture her. 5 stray exorcists and 1 fallen died in the ensuing conflict, and I now have 3 fallen as prisoners, including one that is the apparent grandchild of one of the Cotter. Akino, the daughter of one of the Cotter, immediately looked at him sharply. Which Cotter? She asked with narrowed eyes. I'm afraid that I have neither asked nor had the time to look into the matter personally. The mercenary replied with an unconcerned shrug. Anyway, it is immaterial, as I intend to trade the 3 captives for the Grigori, formally relinquishing any claim they have on Asia Argento. Or I would if I had either a way of contacting them or some means of ensuring that a Cotter level fallen doesn't just swoop in and annihilate me when I try to negotiate. After some consultation with Miss Argento and the young man I was contracted with, it has become evident that I lack the ability to properly safeguard her. So, with that being the case, Miss Argento, here a request for you, SeerKing. Asia gulped as the blue eyes of the high-class devil turned to regard her curiously. This was harder than she'd though. Please make me a part of your peerage," she finally managed to blurt out as she bowed to the Gremory heiress, causing the red-headed devil to let out a small, surprised gasp. Riaz could only stare at the former nun for a moment, having not expected anything like that, before things began to click into place in her mind. Sona, on the other hand, had already put things into place. "I see. Protecting Asia Argento from the attentions of Grigori and any other interested parties would be a simple thing for the younger sister of one of the four Mao," she offered clinically. "But what merit is there for Riaz in accepting her?" "You mean aside from acquiring one of the few sacred gears in existence that are capable of healing any being, including devils, one whose healing power can surpass even that of the Phoenix clan in strength, albeit temporarily, to boot?" The mercenary responded rhetorically. "Well, Miss Argento also possesses quite the potential talent for magic, particularly when it comes to defensive and support types, and has a rather strong affinity for dragons. Added into the fact that the girl herself is kind, sweet, and generous by nature, and I can see no reason for Heiress Gremory to reject her recruitment, save perhaps wanting to spite me for the troubles that I have recently caused you both." When he put it that way, Riaz would indeed have to be exceptionally stupid or petty to refuse Asia's requests. That being said, "Asia, are you absolutely sure that this is what you want?" Riaz asked the younger girl gently. "Once I reincarnate you as a devil, there will be no going back for you." I can't go back either way," the Italian blonde replied, her voice trembling as she fought to get the words out. "The church doesn't want anything to do with me and the Grigori they scare me. Lady Rainier and Lady Middlet were indifferent to me at best but Lady Calawarner and Lord Donaseek and the other former exorcists, they were all almost casual in their cruelty. I have finally found a friend here and I want to stay with them, regardless of anything else so please let me stay." The crimson-haired ruined princess regarded her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, I accept. Asia, you may wish to remove your cross before we begin. However, it will immediately harm you once you become a devil." With visible reluctance, Asia reached up and gently removed the silver cross from around her neck, gently handing it over to the Gaia Gamer's gear holder, who held it for safekeeping. The reincarnation that followed went very easily, with Riaz warmly welcoming the little blonde Italian into her peerage as her second and final bishop. Given her apparent magical inclination, it would have been a waste to use her as a mere pawn, and the girl obviously wasn't suited for the abilities associated with a rook or knight piece. "Welcome to my peerage, Asia," the red-headed devil offered with a warm smile before engulfing the smaller girl in a hug. The former nun eeped a bit in surprise but responded very well, hugging her back almost immediately. "She seems to be a bit touch-deprived, so she likes hugging apparently," the mercenary offered in apparent amusement from his position off to the side. He had removed a small case from his inventory and placed Asia's cross within it before snapping it closed and offering it to Asia as she disengaged from Ria's embrace before pulling out a small suitcase that contained most of her clothing and other possessions. Riaz was honestly a bit jealous of how handy that ability could be. Just a little. "Well, if I have answered all of your questions on the matter, I really must be going. There's still one last item that I need to take care of today," the red-armored man stated as he started to head back towards the stairs. "And what might that be?" Sona asked warily. "Why, I intend to evict the remaining stray exorcists from Kuo Town, of course," the man replied with a single clenched fist. "That is, if any are still hiding there now that their fallen leaders have been gone for the better part of a day. I see no reason to kill them, unless they prove to be most unreasonable. But from what Miss Argento has told me of their apparent leader, one Fried Selzen, it might be impossible to avoid. From what she's told me, the man is an utter psychopath. That kind of move might very well antagonize the Grigori," Sona pointed out, trying to avoid another incident sparking off in her territory. "I think that the fallen, being exactly what they are, will understand that vengeance is the oldest form of justice in the world." The human replied as he let out a short bark of laughter before dropping something at his feet. "A paper tag. Still, you have my thanks for the warning. Farewell, Miss Argento. You and I will meet again at some point, I feel." With the sudden red flash of a teleportation spell, likely from the paper talisman that was smoldering away on the ground, he vanished. That man had better not blow up the old church as well," Sona groaned out as she pinched the bridge of her nose in exasperation. "Unless the fallen have some form of giant generator hidden underneath it, I very much doubt he'll be able to cause another explosion so easily," Tsubaki offered in a reassuring manner. "Well, I suppose we should leave as well then." Riaz sighed as well. I think between you needing to get in contact with your sister and prepare those documents for Lord Ajuka, and me needing to arrange for both new housing for Asia and her enrollment into Kyo Academy, we both have a lot more to do tonight. Indeed, the Citri heiress agreed with a sigh, already feeling a headache forming. At the very least, providing more proof on how dangerous and malicious these purifiers were would help ease some of the pressure that was coming towards them from the underworld. Of course, that same information would also make her overwhelmingly loving sister even more overbearingly protective. But such was life. More than that, what she had learned had only reaffirmed her own desire to start seriously investigating the purifiers herself. She had already intended to, but it was now far higher in her hierarchy of importance. They had planned on murdering herself and Riz, along with their peerages. That alone was unforgivable, but the depths of depravity they were apparently willing to reach to achieve those goals just made the threat they represented all the more real. "Bachu, may I be excused for the evening?" Kiba asked, his face still painfully pale. "I need some time alone." "Of course, Yudo," Riz agreed softly, offering her knight a gentle smile. "But if you need anything, even just a shoulder to cry on, or someone to talk to, just let me know." "All right." With a silent nod, Kiba cast his own transport circle and vanished, likely back to his own apartment. Riz sighed. Learning what the purifiers had done was going to stir up all kinds of unpleasant memories for her dear knight. The massacre of the Holy Sword Project was one of the blackest days in the church's recent history, and it had left Kiba with a deep and abiding hatred for anything associated with holy swords, and the Excalibur blades in particular. "Well, let's head back to the clubhouse for now," she said, turning to her remaining peerage members, both old and new. "We can set Asia here up in one of the rooms there for the night, and we can get her a proper apartment after school tomorrow. Maybe do some clothes shopping as a bit of a bonding activity. Don't you think so, Akino?" "Sounds lovely, Riz." The reincarnated Nephilim agreed with a demure laugh. Poor Asia looked so unsure and nervous right now with her protector gone. That would have to be fixed toot sweet. A nice little welcoming party would hopefully help her start to relax around them a bit. It wouldn't do to have her so on edge around her new family after all. She had to admit that she was more than a bit curious about just who Asia had been on a date with, who also seemed to have some form of contact with the mysterious supernatural mercenary that was causing such a stir in her territory. But that could wait for later. Once she was more at ease with her new life as a reincarnated devil, then they could start finding out just who was connected to their oh-so-mysterious guest. Light flashed, both red and blue, before the Heimjima shrine was soon left empty once again. Meanwhile, a lone figure in red armor appeared just outside the boundary of the abandoned church. Beneath the red dragon Menpo, Hyodo Issei smiled grimly as he planned his assault. Chapter 22, Psychotic Exorcist of Slaughter, freed Selzen. Outside the abandoned church, Hyodo Issei frowned slightly as he looked at the half-ruined church in front of him. The building was definitely a dungeon, but it had changed quite a bit since he had last been here. Last time, the dungeon had been named Nest of the Fallen with a recommended level of 35. But now the circumstances had changed, and the screens that provided data from the gamer's gear were suggesting that those changes had also affected the dungeon. "You have rediscovered a dungeon. Due to the imprisonment of the former rulers of this place, the nature and strength of the dungeon has been severely altered, granting it a new name. Chapel of the Exiled Brotherhood. Since the dungeon has gone through a major shift, this counts as discovering an entirely new dungeon. You gain 400 EXP. Do you wish to enter this dungeon? Warning: entering this dungeon while 3 or more levels below the minimum level displayed is dangerous to your life. Why in ... kind of a fancy title for what's essentially the hideout for a bunch of kicked-out exorcists. The teenage Sekiryude deadpanned as he stared blankly at the screen. The stray exorcists that the Fallen had used as canaries for his dungeon had honestly been pretty weak, so the 10-level reduction with the loss of the 4 Fallen bosses made some sense at least. That also meant that this freed Selzen character likely wasn't anywhere near as strong as any of Raynair's flock either. Once again, he was going to dive right into a dungeon that was at a higher level than he was. Oh well, at least it wasn't as over-leveled as it had been before the Fallen were removed from the picture. He was only at level 19. A level 35 dungeon would have really been pushing what he had any hopes of successfully conquering, or even just surviving if he was being pessimistic. He was more than happy to go up against a level 25 threat. That was something he was comfortably certain he could overcome. Still, that didn't mean that this was going to be a cakewalk for him either. He was still a solid 6 levels below the dungeon's level, which meant that anything inside could very easily be a threat to his life. Just because his enemies were now going to only be humans rather, without any fallen angels to support, lead them, did not make them any less dangerous or willing to kill him. As he had stated once before, exorcist guns were not like normal guns. They didn't use gunpowder. Instead, they fired compressed bolts of light magic stored within a magical magazine, meaning that he couldn't rely on the same trick to negate them as he'd used in the purifier's base. On the plus side, light bullets lacked the physical power of real bullets, relying on pure light element energy to deal damage, which was enough of a silver lining for him to grasp onto here. So, he hit the Y button floating in front of him and marched up the stairs. As he did, he considered just how many enemies would be waiting for him inside. Given the size of the place, even if there was a subterranean section beneath the church, there couldn't be more than 24 or so stray exorcists living here. Probably a bit less considering that a small squad had already been lost in the thwarted invasion of his base. Unless all of the stray exorcists, or even a significant number of them, were a great deal stronger than the group that had initially sent into his dungeon, then it was likely that the dungeon's current level was likely based solely on Fried's personal strength rather than that of the strength or number of the stray exorcists that were currently working under him. That was both a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing because that meant that the only serious threat in this dungeon would come from a single target. A bad thing because it meant that said single target was the sole reason that the dungeon had only lost 10 levels of difficulty after losing all 4 of the fallen that were supposed to act as the dungeon bosses. Most exorcists seem to focus on fighting with either guns or swords, and all of their weapons seem to be attuned to the light element to be more effective against devils, which seem to be their preferred targets. Issei considered, remembering what he'd seen of how the 5 stray exorcists that had faced his dungeon had fought. Some even have grenades of compressed light to use against bigger and more durable targets. Most of them seem to rely on just using one weapon at a time, but the highest leveled one of that group actually dual-wielded, a gun in one hand and a sword in the other, so this Fried guy can likely do the same. That means I'll need to be wary of him trying to put a bullet into me even as he tries to carve me up. Issei wasn't exactly trying to be stealthy as he walked up the steps toward the church, but he also wasn't going out of his way to make noise. That made the slight clanking of his blood metal armor as it rattled and shook with his every step all the louder to his ears, particularly in the isolated area that the abandoned church was located in. If Issei remembered correctly, it had actually been built away from the main parts of the city on purpose, using the surrounding open space and woodlands to hold weddings, picnics, fetes, and even small community events back when the church had still been open. He'd actually visited a few times with Rin-chan when they were both kids, and the place had been quite warm and welcoming even if he didn't share his friend's faith. Honestly, seeing the place that had been so important to his old friend be desecrated and reduced to such a state honestly made his blood start to boil a bit. While Issei wasn't really a believer in any form of faith, he was a firm believer in people being allowed to follow whatever faith or beliefs they want, provided it didn't inconvenience or hurt others. Rin had loved this building like a second home, and now these bastards were all but pissing on it. Issei decided then and there that he was going to teach these asshole stray exorcists a very firm lesson that they wouldn't soon forget. Unlike at the last redoubt of the pure, there was absolutely no reason for him to try a stealth approach on this dungeon. With that being the case, when confronted with the large double doors that barred his entry into the church proper, Issei merely reared back and, with a small whisper of power strike, coating his foot in a bright blue sheen of energy, proceeded to kick the doors hard enough to send both of them flying backwards. Special delivery, he shouted aloud. There were 3 men, dressed almost exactly the same way as the stray exorcists, that had tried to invade Issei's dungeon, loitering about the church's entry hall, all of which had been rather badly desecrated and vandalized. Alessio Verdino LV-15, Stray Exorcist. Flavio Tarazzo LV-14, Stray Exorcist. Pietro De Luca LV-15. Who the hell are you? Do you have any idea who you're barging in on, you bastard? What is with that gaudy as hell armor? Do you think you're the new Red Dragon Emperor or something? Well, they were certainly a mouthy little bunch of bastards, casually using observe as they shouted threats and profanities at him. Issei could see that none of the 3 were particularly strong. In terms of raw physical stats, he was well above all 3 on every level, and even his lowest mental stat was a good 10 points above each of their best. So, they were basically dumb thugs. Cannon fodder was likely the proper term to use here. You know, this is as good a chance as any to start leveling up my hand-to-hand combat mastery, Issei decided as he started to walk forward. For the exp that you are about to offer up to me, oh dumbass stray exorcists, you have my heartfelt gratitude. I am the guy here to serve you morons your eviction notice. Issei responded aloud. The dogs of the Grigori are no longer welcome in this town. So says me. You may resist as much as you like, but it will be easier on the lot of you if you just grow some common sense and start running away like the good little stray puppies you are. I get paid either way, so your choice, really. You filthy son of a bitch, Flavio growled out, pulling out an exorcist's light sword from one of the inner pockets of his coat and igniting the blade. Let's just get this damned fool and be done with it. Basic body magic reinforcement. Non-lethal takedown mode. The gamer intoned calmly. Power leap. With that final spell, Issei shot forward like a bullet, stopping just a few inches away from the shocked form of the stray exorcist. Taken completely off guard by the sudden display of speed, none of the trio had any chance to react before Issei was already on top of them. In a blur of red, his right fist struck out, punching the armed exorcist right in the solar plexus with near inhuman force, the impact enough to send the man flying back a full meter. The fallen priest coughed and retched as he landed in a heap, barely able to force himself up to his knees as he clutched at his chest in pain. He stayed that way for a few seconds before he finally lost whatever grip he had on his consciousness and collapsed forward into a puddle of his bile. Before either of the other two could do more than stare wide-eyed at their comrade being sent flying by a single punch, Issei had already dealt with them. A kick slammed into the sternum of the exorcist on his left, Alessio, seconds before an uppercut slammed into the jaw of the one of his right, Pietro. Unlike Flavio, neither of them were able to pull together enough willpower to even try and rise back up after they slammed into opposite sides of the hallway, both simply collapsing into unconsciousness. Issei just blinked as he eyed the three prone exorcists in disbelief. Did I just one-shot these guys? You have defeated Flavio Terrazzo. Experience halved due to non-fatal method of defeat. You gain 234 EXP. You have defeated Alessio Verdino. Experience halved due to non-fatal method of defeat. You gain 258 EXP. You have defeated Pietro De Luca. Experience halved due to non-fatal method of defeat. You gain 258 EXP. Hand-to-hand combat mastery has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Basic body magic reinforcement has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Power leap has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Non-lethal takedown mode has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Evidently, he had. That was kind of a letdown. Rope binding prison. Issei cast at the closest stray exorcist, his disguise magic not even having to work to make his voice a deadpan. He cast it twice more on the other two, privately a bit baffled by just how easily they'd been beaten. Landing a single solid blow on each of them had been enough to take them down without a fight, not even giving them a chance to counterattack. Are these guys really supposed to be able to hunt down devils like Riaz or Sona? That's honestly ridiculous. I'm only 4 levels higher than these mooks. Yeah, I have them all pretty much outclassed in every stat, and those are supposed to be the real determination of power. But still, Issei mused in mild bafflement. Do these guys even have any kind of protective gear or even some kind of enchantment on those robes they wear? A quick check proved that no, they did not. They all did have some lightweight body armor worn beneath their robes, which basically amounted to bulletproof vests, that his observe said had a minor blessing that enhanced their protection against anything fueled by darkness magic, neither of which could do all that much against his level 19, 150 plus strength stat. Honestly, if he hadn't activated non-lethal takedown mode when this had started, he'd have likely killed all 3 of these mooks with a single punch. Either these guys were the absolute bottom of the barrel of the Vatican's exorcist forces before they left, and the higher-ups couldn't be bothered to equip them with any serious protections. He mused aloud as he absently tapped each of the unconscious bodies with a single finger, looting them of their weapons and other gear aside from their clothes. Issei had no interest in seeing naked dudes, or these guys were unable to grab whatever real protective gear they were provided when they decided to go rogue, and the Grigori either couldn't or just never bothered to outfit this band of mooks with any kind of replacements. Standing up, he took another look around. This place was an utter wreck. The pews had all been smashed to pieces, the altar had been desecrated in at least a dozen ways, and even the cross hanging from the back wall had been split in half vertically. There was a door leading off to the side of the building, leading to where the priest had, presumably, once lived and prepared for services. That was likely where the rest of the stray exorcists were at the moment. While he was planning on using these mooks to level up his hand-to-hand combat mastery skill, Issei had no intention of walking further into the belly of the beast without taking at least a few precautions. Iron body, iron skin, force reduction field, fire lantern. He chanted one spell after another. With the first spell, a silver aura covered his body as his muscles were made as hard as iron. With the second, a silver sheen passed over his skin as it became akin to iron armor. With the third, a shifting multicolored field of light flowed over his body for an instant as an invisible field formed around him that would slow anything that got too close to him. With the last, a small orb of fire burst into existence over his right shoulder. Issei grimaced slightly as he flexed and moved slightly, feeling unnaturally stiff and awkward in his own skin. Gall, I knew I should have spent some time practicing with iron body and iron skin right after I got them. But things started escalating so fast, I never got the chance. He grimaced. While basic body magic enhancement did offset the penalties slightly, it certainly didn't counter them. That wasn't much of a surprise though, it was only a tier 0 spell after all. There was no way that it would be capable of completely balancing out a pair of untrained tier 1 spells on its own. Oh well, if nothing else, this would prove to be good training for both of those skills. The higher their levels got, the less negative side effects using them would cause for him, though he made a mental note to disengage them once he actually found this freed character and at least replace iron skin with bronze skin, which while lower tier was also fully leveled up and offered no penalties on his dexterity or movement speed. He couldn't afford the kind of speed and reaction penalties he was currently dealing with right now when he was fighting a boss. Walking forward with a slightly stiff gait, Issei headed into the side set of rooms. Inside, the place looked just as badly damaged as the main hall. Just why were these morons so intent on wrecking this place so badly? Weren't they living here? Pausing mid-step, Issei actually considered that idea. No one with a working brain cell would just tear up the place they were living, especially not to this extent. That meant that the people here were either complete lunatics that enjoyed living like hobos and squatters in a building that was likely to collapse around them, or they actually didn't live in this section of the old church at all, but rather somewhere else like in a concealed section beneath it for example. Then that would make the damage they'd done not just habitual desecration, but also a kind of camouflage to make everyone think the building was deserted, vandalized, and ready to fall down around the ears of anyone stupid enough to poke around. If all that was true then, Issei was well aware that clichés tended to be cliched for a reason, so the first two places that he checked were the small bathroom and the vestry and the bottom of the set of stairs that led up into the steeple. Those two were, by far, the most common places one would hide a secret entrance in a work of fiction, but both were strikeouts for him. Well, it looked like whoever had repurposed this place into a base had at least been smart enough to avoid basic clichés at least. After having searched the entire priest's quarters, Issei returned to the main hall, and his eyes almost immediately fell onto the area directly behind the altar, where he now noticed a trapdoor had been left slightly ajar. Blushing a bit in embarrassment at having missed the rather obvious clue on his first way through, Issei quickly summoned a rope using spell manipulation on rope binding prison and looped it around the ajar door and pulled it up from behind. No sense risking a booby trap after all. As a result of using spell manipulation, the Tier 0 spells Magic Rope Manipulation and Summon Rope Type 2 have been discovered and added to your spellbook. Magic Rope Manipulation LV1 0%. Tier 0 spell. Telekinetic spells are among the most common types of spells in existence. General use TK spells can be used to grasp and manipulate pretty much anything, but lack fine control. For finer manipulations, basic spells focus on manipulating a specific substance, and even objects that have been created. This particular spell was created to allow initiate spellcasters to finely manipulate and guide any form of rope, twine, string, cord, or lace, as well as similarly shaped objects made from fabric like ties, stoles, and scarves. MP activation cost 10 MP. MP to maintain control and manipulation 5 MP minute. Range 5 meters. Allows caster to manipulate any kind of rope, twine, string, cord, lace, or similarly shaped object made of some sort of fabric, such as ties, stoles, or scarves, within range. Control average. Summon rope type 2 LV1 0%. Tier 0 spell. An extremely basic spell that has two forms. The first version allows it to summon a pre-existing rope from the general area surrounding the caster. The second version allows it to summon rope from within a pocket dimension controlled by the caster. This particular spell is the second form. Although it requires the caster to have access to a pocket dimension or inventory to work, and thus making it the far less widely known or practiced version, it is nevertheless a useful spell if one needs to simply call rope out of seemingly nowhere. MP cost 10 MP. Summons a length of rope 1 meter in length from a pocket dimension or inventory belonging to the caster. As a result of a singular action, the skill doublecast has been created. Double cast LV1 0%. A skill similar but differing from the dual casting skill, which allows the caster to cast 2 spells at the same time so long as they are using the same spell. Double cast allows a proficient caster to cast 2 different spells at the same time. While initially highly MP intensive and requiring the 2 spells cast to be at least somewhat synergistic in nature, with time, practice, and mastery, a skilled user can learn to cast 2 completely unrelated spells simultaneously with little to no additional cost. Adds plus 100% to the MP cost of the spells being cast. For a list of spells that synergize and can thus be used as targets for this skill, please click here. Rope Binding Prison has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Well, that was a bit unexpected. Issei mused aloud before turning his attention to the length of rope that he'd just used. He focused on pulling the rope to him while activating the magic rope manipulation spell. The rope glowed slightly before flying into his hand. As a result of using spell manipulation, the Tier 0 spell Summon Rope Type 1 has been discovered and added to your spellbook. Summon Rope Type 1 LV1 0%. Tier 0 spell. An extremely basic spell that has 2 forms. The first version allows it to summon a pre-existing rope from the general areas surrounding the caster. The second version allows it to summon rope from within a pocket dimension controlled by the caster. This particular spell is the first form. Although it requires there to be pre-existing rope in the surrounding area, it is still a handy little utility spell when you need some rope, know it's around, and don't have time to search for it. MP cost 10 MP. Range 5 meters. Targets any length of rope within range to come towards the caster. Spell manipulation has leveled up. LV1 LV2 has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Well, now it looks like I have even more spells that I need to train up. The gamer announced with a roll of his eyes before he walking around to stand at the top of the small set of steps leading downwards into the main base. But seriously, were these idiots not taking this seriously, or something, leaving a trapdoor half open like this? Then he remembered the mental stats of the 3 morons he'd found in the entry hall and easily came to the likely answer. Shaking his head, the gamer made his way down the short flight of stairs. While the church might have been built atop a hill, the hill simply wasn't large or thick enough to support much of an underground portion without it becoming obvious, so there were likely only going to be a handful of rooms down here. Using another quick application of Power Strike to kick down the thick wooden door at the bottom of the staircase, Issei was immediately greeted with the sight of 6 more stray exorcists. The entire group looked to have just been milling about the large room that the staircase opened into before they all turned in bewilderment at the door being kicked nearly off its hinges. Issei did not hesitate to take full advantage of their momentary paralysis. Fireball. He cast, using Fire Lantern's special attribute to instantly cast the lower tier spell for almost no MP cost while it was active. The fireball floating over his shoulder responded instantly, shooting straight toward the group of enemies and slamming into one of them, causing the man to instantly start screaming as he was engulfed in a surge of flames. The exiled exorcists all briefly turned to their downed comrade before quickly trying to refocus on the now very obvious threat. Unfortunately for them, Issei was already in among them, each stiff swing and strike sending another stray hurtling to the ground in unconsciousness. The dust settled only a few minutes later, with all the exorcists on the ground and in varying degrees of consciousness. He quickly set about looting and binding the entire group with rope binding prison, stopping only long enough to administer one of his low HP potions to the one he'd hit with the fireball. Enemies or not, the rogue exorcists had not earned enough hatred from him that he'd make one needlessly suffer through multiple second-degree burns. Burns like those hurt like a bitch. Having so many would be utter agony without a lot of painkillers. He skimmed through the EXP notification, nothing of importance popping out. All of the gathered stray exorcists he'd encountered so far had been between levels 13 and 15 so far, slightly higher than the group that had challenged his dungeon but not by much. The skill notifications were few, but he'd managed to level up hand-to-hand combat mastery again, reaching LV6. Both Iron Body and Iron Skin had reached LV2, and Fire Lantern had also leveled up to LV2 as well. That plus the loot and general exp made it quite satisfying for less than 5 minutes of work, and that was if he was counting the time it took to bind and loot the lot of them. Testing his body out, Issei found that he could move just a little bit more easily than before. He absently took out another MP potion and crushed it to bolster his beleaguered lesser MP regeneration skill as it strove to keep his MP reserves steady while maintaining so many skills at once, with another one added as he recast Fire Lantern. Lesser MP regeneration has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Well, that was nice. Moving on. With the current threats taken care of, Issei took a moment to get a better look at the room he now found himself in. It looked to be some form of meeting room, a large square chamber that looked to be designed to hold a large number of people at once. Placed against the far wall opposite of the doorway that led to the stairs was a large black cross with what looked like restraints built directly into it. The thing was giving off a very unpleasant aura that sent shivers down Issei's spine. Observe, Issei whispered, eyeing the object warily. Sacred Gear Extractor. Rare. An ancient relic that was originally developed by the Grigori organization during some of the earliest parts of the Great War between the three factions. It is designed to remove the sacred gear of anyone who is unfortunate enough to be strapped into it. It requires the presence, if not the consent or aid, of a fallen angel in order to be activated, and requires a prolonged ritual in order to gather the necessary spiritual energies that are needed to sever a sacred gear from its previous holder's soul. Any human put through this process will die shortly after their sacred gear is extracted, with even the return of the stolen sacred gear being unable to undo the damage done by the ritual to their soul. The extraction process is also excruciatingly painful. Developed during the darkest days of the Great War as a desperate means for the Grigori to gain some form of edge against the numerically superior forces of heaven and the underworld, it has long since fallen out of favor due to the development of better techniques and less cruel and sadistic alternatives. Issei just stared in silent, horrified shock at the screen for a moment, before looking up at the monstrosity sitting across the room from him with a dark glower. Dismissing the screen, he raised both hands in front of him. Dual casting, explosive combustion sphere. A pair of explosive orbs of compressed flames shot from both of his hands simultaneously, sailing across the room in an instant to slam into either side of the evil device. Both detonated like miniature bombs, the combined explosive force ripping the extractor to pieces. I am going to have words with Rainer about that thing. And if I don't like what I find out, Cotter or no Cotter, there is going to be hell to pay. He swore under his breath. A dark suspicion about just what these fallen might have had planned for Asia was already starting to form in his mind, and if he found even a shred of evidence supporting it, there would be dire consequences. Title earned, Relic Smasher. You have destroyed a priceless example of ancient magical history and technology. Shame on you. On the other hand, that thing really needed to be smashed. Double-taking at the almost conversational tone that his sacred gear was taking with him, Issei managed to regain his calm and put those thoughts to the side for now. He could puzzle out just what was going on with Gamer's gear at a later date. For now, there were likely still more stray exorcists lurking about and waiting for a beating. There were 3 doors connecting to this room, which Issei was simply going to mentally dub the ritual room. One was the one he just came through that connected to the stairwell leading back up to the church itself, while the other 2 were built into the left and right walls. As he was debating which one to explore first, a large group of stray exorcists bursts out of the right door. As the group piled in, most quickly turning to look between the destroyed remnants of the sacred gear extractor and Issei himself, he did a quick count. If he included the 5 killed at his base, and the 9 he'd already beaten, they were only a single member person shy of having an even 24 stray exorcists all gathered here. And that freed guy isn't with them. I'm guessing he sent these guys ahead to either distract me or just get my measure. Well, time to get to work. The young Sekiryude pondered, cracking his gauntlet-clad knuckles. Power leap, he whispered as he shot forward into the cluster of stray exorcists, even as several drew their pistols and started firing off bursts of pure white light at him in a panic. He honestly wasn't expecting anything all that impressive given what he'd seen of these guys so far, even among this group. The strongest of them was a single level 17. The rest were mostly 14 seconds with a couple 15 seconds mixed in. You know, it's actually kind of astounding when you stop and think about it. Just a few months ago, just one of these guys would have been able to kill me without breaking a sweat. Issei silently mused as he sent the level 17 sprawling with a quick 1-2 punch combination before reflexively ducking under the swing of another light sword before sweeping its owner's feet to drop them onto their back. A quick stomp to the ribs took the downed attacker out of the fight. Seriously, now it feels almost like I'm bullying the lot of them. How insane is that? In short order, all 9 exorcists were lying on the ground and none were still conscious. All save the level 17 had fallen with a single punch, and that particular rogue exorcist had only required a single follow-up blow after the initial blow had stunned him. Casting rope binding prison in rapid succession, he absently watched his skill levels start to rise once more. Hand-to-hand combat mastery has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Non-lethal takedown mode has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Power leap has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Basic body magic reinforcement has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Iron Skin has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Iron Body has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Force Absorption Field has leveled up. LV10 LV11. Fire Lantern has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Fireball has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Rope Binding Prison has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Well, if nothing else, this dungeon raid was at least providing some fairly useful skill training for a few of his newer or lesser used skills. But now, with only the boss left, it was time for him to get serious. He quickly deactivated Iron Body and Iron Skin before casting Bronze Skin to replace the latter, as well as conjuring a new Fire Lantern. He felt like he was going to need every advantage he could get against such an obviously over-leveled boss like Fried Selzen. He also deactivated non-lethal takedown mode. He couldn't risk holding anything back now, and the guy he was about to fight was apparently some kind of serial killer. Asia had mentioned the man once or twice while she had been staying with him in his base, and her tone had always been one of fear. The man was apparently a master swordsman, who was far faster and more dangerous than any regular person could hope to be, with a depraved and battle-hungry personality. What little he had gotten out from other sources had painted the former exorcist as a generally heartless and insane person that only cared about sating his own bloodlust. How someone like that had actually managed to become an ordained priest was utterly beyond Issei's comprehension. Were the forces of the Heaven faction really that hard up for capable foot soldiers that they were willing to accept that kind of guy into their ranks? Whatever the reasons, Fried had evidently gone too far for even the more morally compromised members of the church to tolerate, and had been excommunicated. And unlike Asia, this excommunication was completely and utterly deserved. Quickly finishing binding and looting the gathered stray exorcists of all their valuables, Issei started toward the door that the little mob of former priests had charged in through when Jahahaha, die, shitty devil spawn. The sound of a deranged voice cackling from behind him instinctively caused Issei to whirl around to find Fried Selzen already well within sword range, a blade of bright yellow light slicing towards Issei with lethal intent. Fortunately, Force Reduction Field was still in effect and slowed the incoming blade down just enough for the gamer to dodge back and out of reach of the slash and drew back a single clenched fist. Power Strike. The red-armored gamer snarled out as blue power surged around his fist before he drove it toward Fried's stomach with all the force of a cannonball. Only for the slippery little bastard to backpedal out of the way just fast enough that his punch was only able to clip him on the hip. Still, the force of the blow was still enough to send him tumbling backwards. Wow, you shitty little mother humper. Issei finally got a good look at the man who was known as Fried Selzen. He was tall, with white hair and red eyes that honestly, when combined with his pale skin, made the man look like some form of albino. He was dressed in the standard black priest's uniform that stray exorcists seemed to favor, though he was wearing white shoes and a white overcoat along with a simple silver cross necklace hanging from his neck. Ignoring the look of outrage that the former priest was shooting him, Issei instead briefly glanced towards the title hanging over his head. Fried Selzen LV27, Sacrilegious Exorcist of Slaughter. Wow, that is some kind of title that he's got there. Issei silently deadpanned, before mentally shaking himself. This guy was obviously not the kind of enemy he should take lightly. So, the infamous Fried Selzen, I presume? He asked aloud. That's right, you shitty bastard. The man snickered as he caught himself, snickering slightly and not all that affected by Issei's near miss. Now who the fuck are you? You another lackey of those shitty little devil bitches. You certainly do seem to like the word shitty, stray exorcist. Issei commented idly. A lack of vocabulary, creativity, or simply intelligence. The casual insult seemed to make the unhinged former priest practically burn in fury. Do you know who the fuck I am? I'm the genius, exorcist prodigy Fried Selzen. Fried growled, before laughing and sticking his tongue out at Issei. I've slaughtered dozens of devils and countless of their shitty little worshippers. Am I supposed to be impressed by your body count? The Sekiryude replied bluntly. I'm simply an independent magic user, and I am here to evict you in your little clubhouse from Kyo Town, effective immediately. You've all vastly overstayed your welcome. Fried just sneered at him. Do you really fucking think that I'm on the same level as this bunch of shitty washouts? You didn't even kill any of them. There's no way you're going to scare me off with kind of shitty show, you shitty little pagan. As if a madman like you even cares whether someone is a pagan or a believer. Issei responded coldly. If anything, what he saw on the status page of the man standing in front of him was even more disgusting than he previously thought. Name, Fried Selzen. Species, artificial human. Class, unholy exorcist. Level, 27. Title: Sacrilegious Exorcist of Slaughter. HP 1980. MP 1715. SP 2156. STR 45. STA 44. Dex 71. INT 35. Wise 49. Luck 35. Shaw 10. LD 5. Special status: deranged, sacrilegious, immoral, descendant of Siegfried, artificial holy swordsman. Description: Fried Selzen is an artificially created human, a test tube baby born at the Vatican's Sigurd Institution using genetic patterns from multiple people who bear the blood of Siegfried in their effort to create the true descendant of Siegfried that could wield the full power of the strongest legendary demon swordgram. While a failure by the Institute's standards, Fried showed a remarkable talent for combat, and was offered to the Vatican at large to undergo exorcist training. By the age of 13, he completed the training needed to become an exorcist and showed a nigh unparalleled level of talent, with many considering him a genius. Fried, however, is utterly immoral, unhinged, and entirely driven by his own desires, particularly his nearly unquenchable desire for death, battle, and murder. He became a wanted criminal after it was discovered that he had murdered several other members of the church while on missions, hiding their deaths by blaming them on his targets, and fled the Vatican to join the Grigori, although if another employer came along promising him even greater opportunities to kill as he pleased, he would gladly take it. Honestly, the man's special statuses were more negative than positive. Deranged might have made it far harder for skills and abilities to predict his actions, but it also gave him a major 20-point debuff on INT and a 40-point debuff on his LD. Sacrilegious bolstered the damage he dealt to anyone who could technically be categorized as a part of the Christian faction at the cost of having his luck. Immoral locked his moral system to neutral, but also reduced his CHA by a whopping 50 points. Apparently the moral system of the gaming gear was a lot like the Paragon, renegade system that was used in the Mass Effect games. On others, it would give him an idea of what kind of actions they were likely to take. But Issei was honestly glad that he had not activated that particular system on his sacred gear. It might have been a fairly cool morality system in the games, but he had absolutely no desire to have his actions herded that way in real life. It was bad enough that he couldn't stop it from constantly dampening his emotions. Back to the Fried's special statuses, Artificial Holy Swordsman was a fairly straightforward one. It let Fried freely use any form of mass-produced holy sword as well as wield any of the Excalibur fragments, whatever the hell those were. He'd known that Excalibur was real and apparently some kind of big deal for the church from Kiba's description, but nothing about these so-called fragments. Yet another thing he'd need to look into later. However, the most concerning of the lot, from Issei's perspective at least, was Descendant of Siegfried, which would start increasing Fried's damage output 5 minutes after a fight started. The longer the fight went on, the more his damage output would increase until he reached his cap. The artificial qualifier was actually a relief, since it reduced Fried's maximum threshold, which could reach a rather frightening 500% for a true descendant of Siegfried, down to a mere 120% bonus. Yeah, he was going to end this fight quick, fast, and in a hurry, not to mention permanently. This guy was both insanely dangerous and dangerously insane. Jahahaha. You can bet your shitty little ass. Fried laughed like the madman he was, his tongue lolling out of his mouth and making him look even more demented. It's a real shame that those shitty bitches never came back. I was really starting to get the urge to cut them up. I guess I'll just have to make do with you. You mean Rainier, Middelt, and Calawarner? Issei almost laughed as the deranged exorcist suddenly shifted, becoming far more wary. I'm afraid they're currently occupied as my guests, and Donaseek is now communing with God in person. What a shitty joke. Fried spat, brandishing his light sword at Issei once again. Like some no-name little punk could stand against one of the fallen, let alone 4. Dude, they marched into a base I had prepared with traps and defenses specifically to target them. I didn't beat them by being stronger than them. I beat them because the 4 of them acted like cocky idiots. Issei responded with a bland snort. Their attack is also why I am here kicking you and yours to the curb, in case you hadn't figured that out yet. Well and I frankly just think that a mad dog like you needs to be put down hard. If you think you can do it, then come and try it, shitty red bastard. The madman howled out as he charged forward, battle lust and murder in his eyes. Issei quickly drew one of the many Exorcist light swords he'd acquired today from his inventory. Exorcist light sword, uncommon weapon, Exorcist tool. To aid in their mission to eliminate devils and other forces of supernatural evil, exorcists of both the Vatican and the Grigori make heavy use of swords fueled by the light element, which is particularly harmful to devils and other supernatural beings primarily aligned with shadow. While not as effective as the holy element, light is a far more plentiful and easily wielded and controlled element, while true holy energy requires a rare and potent affinity for it. Durability 75/75. Spiritual power reservoir 9100th SP. Focus light sword. Deals S plus 15 slashing damage. Deals S plus 15 piercing damage. As the SP reservoir is depleted, it must be replenished with an infusion of SP in order to be maintained. Once the SPR reaches 0 divided by 100, the blade will be rendered inert until it is recharged. 1 SP is drained per minute of activation. Anyone with an active SP stat and the spiritual energy channeling skill can refill the SPR. Special effect. 1 Any creature of shadow, darkness that is struck by the blade of this weapon suffers plus 100% damage as a result. Issei's own blood metal gladius was still a superior weapon unless he was fighting against a devil or some other creature of darkness, shadow, but he didn't want to fully tip his hand against this guy just yet. His own intermediate swordsmanship would hopefully suffice. Combined with his force reduction field, basic body magic reinforcement, and his own stats, he should be able to handle this bastard even if he had to hold back, which he wasn't planning on doing. Let's start by turning up the heat. Fireball. Issei grinned, sending the fireball floating over his shoulder from the fire lantern spell shooting towards the insane ex-priest, whose eyes widened in surprise. Fucking shitty pagan, the man yelled out, leaping and rolling to the side. Even with force reduction field having grown in both area and power as it had leveled up, Fried was still an extremely fast and agile opponent, easily capable of dodging the fireball from just over 2 meters away. He was a lot more agile than Issei had originally given him credit for based on his dex stat. He probably had at least a couple skills like evade to bolster his abilities. Again, I don't think someone who doesn't even believe in God should be calling someone else a pagan. Issei responded as he ignited his own light sword. Shut your shitty hole. Fried howled out as he leapt back into range, and then the fight was truly on. It became very obvious very quickly that Fried had a massive edge on Issei when it came to raw skill with a sword. Fried was obviously the more skilled swordsman, as well as being far more experienced, familiar, and talented with the blade than Issei was. However, he was also not used to fighting an armored foe that was not particularly susceptible to his weapon of choice. By contrast, Issei was actually used to fighting enemies that were stronger and more skilled than him. Also, unlike Fried, whose fighting style seemed to focus on avoiding attacks and then attacking from a new, unexpected angle, he was used to taking hits and plowing through them in order to deal damage back. Again, because Fried had been trained for and was used to facing enemies that couldn't fight him like that, he was being put on the back foot. His light weaponry was pure poison to devils, and most of the normal humans he'd exterminated had been civilians or mages that lacked the ability to actually fight against him in close combat. In other words, Fried was being forced into a relatively fair fight for the first time in his life outside of the training he had went through back at the Sigurd Institute and with the Vatican, and he didn't like it, something he expressed quite vocally. GRRRRAGHHH. You stupid shitty bastard. Fried shrieked out as Issei managed to score another cut on him. The black uniform and white coat he favored already stained red with his own blood from several other wounds. If wasn't for that shitty little spell you're using, I'd have already carved you to shitty ribbons by now. Excuses, excuses. Issei snorted out as he drew a second exorcist light sword and ignited it. Let's get this dance started for real, shitty priest. Leaping forward into the fray once more, Issei began to honestly press Fried. Thanks to the advantage offered by his force reduction field, he was actually holding up fairly well against the highly skilled, if insane, man, even with the albino's steadily increasing damage output. It turns out that light weapons were not particularly good at cutting through armor, especially armor as durable as his blood metal suit, particularly when it was combined with a defensive spell like bronze skin. Oh, Issei had been losing health in bits and pieces throughout the fight, but lesser HP regeneration was getting a very thorough workout, and, if he took a particularly nasty hit, he'd simply reach into his inventory and make use of one of his remaining stock of HP potions. Where the fuck do you keeping pulling all this shit out of? Fried demanded in frustration. What kind of shitty sacred gear do you have? Bag of holding, dimension pocket, and what the hell is with those shitty bottles you keep crushing? Like I'd ever explain something to you in the middle of a fight? Dumbass. Issei shot back. This isn't some cartoon where the protagonist is obliged to explain his powers at a drop of a hat. Moron. Fried roared in absolute berserk fury at that, swinging at Issei once again. Only this time Issei managed to block in time, their light swords clashing in a flare of light and a shower of sparks. Deciding to end this here and now, the Seirkyude activated another skill power strike, before slamming his glowing blue foot into Fried's midsection, sending him flying backwards through the doorway that just happened to be behind him and into what Issei was assuming was the quarters that the stray exorcists were using. Shit. Fried howled out in agony as he rolled back out of the wreckage of the broken door, clutching at his stomach. Issei was honest rather surprised that Fried was still conscious and functional after taking a direct hit from his power strike to the abdomen. Did he have some kind of durability enhancing ability or even just a pain mitigating skill? Oh, now you've really gone and done it, you shitty bastard. When my boss comes here, he is going to fuck up your stupid shit good. I honestly doubt Azazel would care all that much for someone like you, madman. Issei responded indifferently as he stalked forward, ready to finish this fight once and for all. Ha Azazel. Og. Fried started cackling again, only to suddenly to stop, clutching his stomach. Oh, you are so fucking wrong that it's just plain sad, you shitty bastard. But I'm gonna skedaddle for now. But I will find you again, you can be sure of that. And when I do, I may enjoy chopping you up into little pieces. Just see if I don't. Before Issei could do more than blink at the sudden declaration, Fried pulled out a talisman and slapped it onto his chest. In a flash of green light, the insane man vanished, leaving Issei to glower at both the insane exorcist's former position and the notifications now floating in front of his face. Congratulations. You have successfully forced the boss of Chapel of the Exiled Brotherhood to flee for his life. You receive 4,000 EXP for this feat. Had you actually killed him, you would have received 12,000 EXP. Oh well, better luck next hunt. As you cannot loot his body, you can select one reward from the list below, and also receive a guaranteed rare skill book reward at random. Black Sky Exorcist Light Gun Kokyutin Plus, Silver Cross Light Sword Jinjuji Plus, Gospel Hard Light Round Fukuin Plus. All that trouble and he still hadn't leveled up. What a disappointing dungeon delve this had turned out to be. Issei took a breath before focusing on the choices he had for possible loot. Black Sky Exorcist Light Gun Kokyutin, Rare Weapon, Exorcist Tool. Developed by a reclusive researcher in the Vatican's Weapon Development Division, the Black Sky is a solid black version of the usual Exorcist light gun. Larger than most conventional pistols, it fires rounds of light at the enemy. The Black Sky differs in that it fires specially augmented rounds of black light energy at enemies rather than normal light element projectiles. While superior to a normal exorcist guns in several ways, particularly when fighting at night when devils and other creatures of darkness are at their strongest, the prototype was eventually disapproved by the church's higher-ups due to the disturbing and unholy appearance of its unique bullets. Light gun. Durability 400/400. Spiritual power reservoir 300/300 SP. Deals piercing damage of 100 to any location struck. As the SP reservoir is depleted, it must be replenished with an infusion of SP in order to be maintained. Once the SPR reaches 0 divided by 300, the gun will be rendered inert until it is recharged. 1 SP is drained for every black light bullet shot. Anyone with an active SP stat and the spiritual energy channeling skill can refill the SPR. Special effects. 1 deals plus 100% extra damage to any creature of shadow or darkness shot by this gun. 2 increases base damage dealt by gun while used at night by 50%. 3 any devil shot by the Black Sky will lose any and all forms of unnatural regeneration, from magic, kai, toki, yoki, or devil bloodline power for 1 hour. Silver Cross Exorcist Light Sword Jinjuji. Rare Weapon, Exorcist Tool. Developed by one of the most highly admired Vatican alchemists and weaponsmiths, the Silver Cross is a visually beautiful blade, with the hilt and guard being forged to resemble a literal silver cross etched with powerful Enochian script, rather than the typical thin, narrow yellow blade of other light weapons. The blade of this sword is wide and a pale blue in color. Compared to a regular light sword, it is stronger, more durable, and is a particular powerful weapon against creatures of darkness. It would indeed be the weapon of choice for all Vatican exorcists were it not for the fact that it takes 5 times as long and 10 times the cost to forge one of these blades compared to a standard exorcist light sword. This has made these unique blades a weapon reserved for the most devout and worthy of the Vatican's exorcist and paladin forces. Light sword. Durability 200/200. Spiritual power reservoir 200/200 SP. Deals S plus 50 slashing damage. Deals S plus 15 piercing damage. As the SP reservoir is depleted, it must be replenished with an infusion of SP in order to be maintained. Once the SPR reaches 0 divided by 200, the blade will be rendered inert until it is recharged. 1 SP is drained per minute of activation. Anyone with an active SP stat and the spiritual energy channeling skill can refill the SPR. Special effect. 1. Any creature of shadow or darkness struck by this weapon's blade suffers plus 200% damage as a result. 2. Due to the purified and blessed nature of the hilt, as well as its shape of the cross, no devil can touch this weapon, even with the blade deactivated, without suffering horrific damage. Gospel Hard Light Round Fukuin. Rare Exorcist Tool. While light guns are the preferred ranged weapon of the Vatican in modern times, that has not always been the case. Before the Exorcist light gun was originally developed by the Vatican's weapon development branch, most exorcists relied on conventional firearms to try and strike at foes from a distance, along with crossbows with blessed silver heads. This special ammunition was developed during those days and is widely considered the precursor to the modern light gun. These special rounds do not rely on gunpowder to fire, instead using a small burst of magic to launch themselves when triggered, making them immune to the common spells used by many supernatural factions to counter firearms. These rounds are not particularly special, since they were mass-produced in bulk by the Vatican before the development of the Exorcist light gun, and a stockpile is still kept by the Church, and their manufacturing process is still in wide circulation and constantly being experimented with and improved on, just in case a new or more effective tool can be created from the old idea. Light ammunition. Single use. When loaded into a conventional firearm, all damage from that gun is changed to light element damage, and thus causes plus 100% more damage to creatures of shadow and darkness. To be honest, the choice was a pretty obvious one. While the sword was definitely nice and the ammo would be useful if he already had a ranged weapon he was particularly attached to, Issei was in dire need of a ranged option that wouldn't constantly drain his MP like his spells did, and something that would be effective if he ever came into conflict with the devils. He was dead certain that his identity wasn't going to stay secret forever, and while he was reasonably sure that at least Gremory Senpai and Citri Kaichu wouldn't be too aggressive in their recruitment attempts, that wasn't something he was willing to bet on with the rest of their race. Black Sky Exorcist Light Gun selected. Selecting Skill Book Reward. Working. Skill Book selected. You receive Summon Metal Golem Skill Book. That might just be a useful little skill to have. Issei nodded. While he was just fine fighting on his own, the ability to summon up a big metal tank, beat stick to help out definitely sounded like something that could be useful in the right circumstances. Once he managed to train it up a bit. That is, lovely, more skills to train. Speaking of which, Intermediate Swordsmanship has leveled up 3 times. LV1 LV4. Ambidextrous has leveled up twice. LV9 LV11. Lesser Draconic Charisma has leveled up. LV9 LV10. Lesser Draconic Charisma has reached LVMAX. As a result, it has upgraded to Draconic Charisma. All values remain the same. Level counter has been reset to 0. Draconic Charisma LV1 0%. As dragons grow in power, so too does their innate charisma and aura of power. Once only able to attract people to you, you can now also add power to social situations, such as seduction, intimidation, and persuasion. Automatically grants you 10 charisma every time you level up. Adds plus 20 to all social interactions that you choose to add it to. As one who bears the boosted gear, you gain a 50% increased EXP boost with this skill, as this is a draconic skill. Power Strike has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Basic Body Magic Reinforcement has leveled up twice. LV5 LV7. Body Reinforcement Magic has leveled up 4 times. LV1 LV5. Defense Magic has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Lesser Fire Magic has leveled up. LV6 LV7. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Light Sword Mastery has been created. Light Sword Mastery LV1 0%. The art of using a sword with a blade formed of light element energy is not an easy one to learn. The lack of a true blade's weight and mass can throw off even the most experienced swordsmen when they first wield a light sword. A true example of a weapon that is easy to use but hard to master. This skill aids you in wielding these finicky weapons in combat. Passively increases slash damage while wielding a light sword by 1. Passively increases pierce damage while wielding a light sword by 1. All in all, solid gains. At least that part of this dungeon delve had been a success. He'd make a final call on the loot once he finished robbing this place down to the bedrock. It didn't take him long to take everything he wanted from the place. Most of what he ended up taking came from the armory attached to the Exorcist's chambers, which had a couple crates filled with light grenades along with plenty of spare light swords and light guns to boot. There was even a few vials of holy water stored safely in a reinforced case. Most of the rest he ended up taking was from Middle, Rainier, and Calawarner's rooms, adding their clothes and other unmentionables to his inventory so he could ensure that, once he got them out of QO, they wouldn't have an excuse to come back. Donasek's room was an utter pigsty, and Issei had taken one look around the place before noping his way back out of there. If the Grigori wanted any of his stuff back, they could grab it themselves. He then gathered up all the knocked-out stray exorcists in the ritual room, along with dragging down the 3 nitwits from upstairs, and assembled them into a nice pile before purchasing another teleportation talisman from the gamer's store and sending them all straight to the Grigori's HQ somewhere in the underworld. See, wasn't he nice? Returning their dumb mooks at no cost to them. Leaving the abandoned church with his inventory loaded down with loot, Issei couldn't help but smile to himself at a job well done. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Governor General Azazel of the Grigori looked at the bundle of knocked-out and tied-up exorcists that had just appeared at the doorstep of the Grigori HQ and wondered what the hell was going on this time.